So okay, this is yesterday we have discussed budget for the year financial year 2000. Budget is for the forthcoming year 17-18, and economic survey is for economic survey is presented for, it is for 16-17, and economic survey is presented when budget is usually presented in usually 1 or 2 days before presentation of budget. So economic survey is presented before presentation of budget. Okay. Acha, what is use of economic survey?
Government can have the policy, what are the problem of Indian economy, and can have the suggestions.
Yes, actually, can we say it assists government in formulation of budget? Yes, actually, it gives an outlook. Okay, what happened last year? Usually, okay, what was the situation? And budget is a kind of plan. So we plan okay, what should be our policies in the coming year, forthcoming year. So economic survey provides some information like what was the data trend of economy and what issues are there, what suggestions should be done. So some of the suggestions, whatever suggestions are given in economic survey, are they accepted? Are they binding? Not binding, but some of them are accepted by finance ministry. Economic survey is presented by who prepared economic survey? Chief Economic Advisor. Who is Chief Economic Advisor right now? Mr. Arvind Subramanian. And it is presented by this finance ministry and which division? Ministry of Finance, Department of Economic Affairs, Economic Division. Okay. So, but this is the economic survey because it gives some what is there, as I told you already, economic situation of the current year, we can say, and some overall some even previous trends and some suggestions and some policy issues and problems. Okay, so in this year's economic survey, so in the last 2 years there were 2 volumes. Right now there is only 1 volume, and there are 14 chapters. So I'll give you a broad idea about these chapters first. Like first is the perspective. So in this chapter there are some general actually trend of economy. Some general, they have discussed about some general issues. Actually, some of the issues were taken up in detail later. Like for example, there is like UBI. There is a separate chapter on UBI, Universal Basic Income. Apart from the demonetization, there is they have discussed a lot about demonetization. There is a separate chapter. So overall general overview is there in the first chapter. Some general data. Chapter 2 is economic vision for precocious cleavage India. Precocious means something we developed early, something premature, and cleavage means divided. So in India, something actually developed much earlier, like democracy was quite matured from the very beginning. Apart from that, society was quite divided on the basis of various lines like caste and communal lines and other actually language and lot of other actually barriers, divisions were there. So they mentioned here, this chapter is important for means point of view. They have mentioned what are specific problems in Indian economy and how those should be, why they happened, and how we can rectify those problems. So it was on policy issue. What issues are there overall, and what are the major issues right now? What government should do for that. Now, chapter 3 is demonetization. To defy or demonize. So it is actually defy means like it is a deity we can defy, means we should consider as a god and God sent opportunity, or it is a kind of actually demon like created problem. So details discussion about this actually, what issues, prospects, short term, long term cost and benefits, and what should be done in future to take advantage of this measure. Another is fourth chapter is festering twin balance sheet problem. So twin balance sheet problem, balance sheets of corporates as well as public sector banks are quite weak. So what are issues? Why it happened? Main focus on NPAs. Okay, NPAs increase. What issues? What went wrong? And what policies were initiated by RBI? Schemes of RBI to check this NPA. What issues are there? And it has suggested to establish a bad bank. It was called Public Assets Rehabilitation this Rehabilitation Agency, PARA. They have mentioned. So they have given reasons for what are problems and how this bad bank or PARA can overcome those problems. Chapter 5 is fiscal framework. World is changing. Should India change too? So they have actually compared India's fiscal policy with some other countries, especially developed countries. They have said that developed countries, they have adopted very active fiscal activism. Means, but such kind of activism, is it desirable in India? So they have mentioned that no, it is not desirable because India is a developing country. We have we have actually supply constraints. So if we will be, fiscal policy will be very much expansionary, then it will create inflation. High inflation will be very high, which is already on higher side. So we should not copy developed countries. Rather, we should adopt fiscal prudence, because earlier experiences of fiscal the activism has not paid means dividend. Rather, they created problems. So just fiscal policy, what developed countries are doing and what we should do. The fiscal rules, lessons from states. Here they have actually discussed the fiscal situation of states, because as we discussed in Finance Commission, fiscal situation of states has improved or deteriorated. Has improved significantly, because states have also passed fiscal responsibility laws, legislations they have passed, and situation has improved. So they have said focus on this state's fiscal situation, how it has improved, what issues are there, and how central government should also serve as a model for them, so that they should maintain fiscal prudence. So this is a focus on states and what center should do to incentivize them to keep the fiscal situation intact. Achha, seventh chapter is clothes and shoes. Can India reclaim low skill manufacturing? So why clothes and shoes? So these two sectors are very important for what? They are labor intensive, export. They are having export potential, as well as women empowerment. Women are significant. Women workers are there. So that is why these sectors should be focused. And all developed countries, when they became developed, so most of the developing countries, even Asian countries, so they focus on these sectors. And the growth of these sectors, actually, data show has been very high when there was takeoff stage in various countries. So it means that now we have to focus on this for employment generation, for export promotion, as well as for women empowerment, especially for them. So they mentioned what are issues and how those should be rectified. So some support measures should be there. In this budget, government announced some actually rebate for these textile sector and this leather, etc. Then 8th, review of economic developments. So in this chapter, review of economic development, some basic data trend. It is somewhat similar to chapter 1. Something are common in this, and some specific issues were discussed, like these price, monetary policy, trade, balance of payment, external debt, some agriculture, etc. So this is actually some brief overview of specific sectors. What has been the performance of various sectors? So somewhat related with chapter 1, but here focus on specific sectors. Then universal basic income, UBI, means everybody should be given unconditional transfer of money. Means everybody should be, so that everybody should be able to get basic amenities. So government should transfer money equal to poverty line in account of everybody. But technically, universal practically is not feasible. So economic survey suggested that 75% population should be covered under this. So 25% well of people will be left from this. So what issues are there? And a lot of actually studies. So in India also 2 studies were conducted in Madhya Pradesh. Apart from that, in means international experience also, to what extent, what are pros and cons. But the most important thing is that from where we will get funds. So they have suggested how government can reduce some schemes, some subsidies which are affecting mainly, which are benefiting rich. Those could be actually funds could be diverted from those schemes. So what are pros and cons of this? So in very simple word, it is a type of direct benefit transfer, DBT, because money will be transferred in the name of beneficiary, but it is not linked with particular product. It will be general. So as we have discussed, DBT is useful or not?
Yes.
There are a lot of benefits. So it is actually huge DBT, simple, unconditional DBT. So it is quite useful, but the only issue is constraints. So it said that it may not be feasible to adopt it now, but there is a time to have a serious discussion over that, debate over that, and we should say feasibility, to what extent we can implement or by what time we should implement. So it should not be adopted immediately, but rather government should deliberate. Can we adopt it now or maybe in future? Then section 3rd, persistent. In chapter 10, income, health and fertility, convergence puzzle. So they have actually compared this means like income convergence. Convergence means reduction of inequalities. Like backward states are moving, let's suppose, at faster pace, then we say they are converging. And if developed state relatively they are growing at faster pace, then we say convergence is actually not. It is actually they're not meeting. So in income, actually convergence has not been there. Like the backward states or relatively underdeveloped state, their growth remain low. So income inequalities rather increase, regional inequalities increase. But in case of health and fertility, there was a convergence among states. So inter-state comparison was given between incomes, means per capita income, and means health, life expectancy and fertility. So means inter-state comparison on these three variables was there. Another is 11th chapter, One Economic India for Goods and in the Eyes of Constitution. So they have focused on trade, interstate and intra-state trade. So what are trends of trade within a state and outside state? What issues are there, like CST, etc., fragmentation of markets, and what are constitutional provisions? Like there are some restrictions on trade, especially interstate trade. So what is status actually? Why? What are barriers? And what are provisions in constitution? Can states can impose restrictions on that? And what center should do to overcome that problem? It is just like we have discussed, like APM also created market segmentation. They have also mentioned about APM. So even GST is one step which will reduce this kind of distortions, means flow of goods. So focus on interstate trade. Now chapter 12, India on the move and churning, new evidence. So here focus is on migration. So in India, the migration is quite high. There are a lot of people travel in rail and other means of transport also. And here focus on the same here, interstate and intra-state migration. What are trends from which region to which region? What kind of migration is there? So it is on migration. So it is quite high in India. 13th chapter, Other Indias, the analytical narratives, redistributive and natural resources on states. Other Indias means they have used the word other Indias, like they have divided India into a peninsular India, which are relatively developed. In most of the peninsular states like Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Andhra, Kerala, they are relatively developed. And other Indias means like northern states by and large. So they have used the word other Indias for northern states, which are relatively less developed. So they have made a comparison in redistributive policies, like how much subsidies etc. is given and what was the impact on development. Other is the impact of natural resources. And they, as per international experience, what happened those states or countries which are rich in natural resources, they usually remain underdeveloped. So they have used the word resource crunch. So this resource curse. So but that was not there in India. So the states which were resource rich, although there was no as such evidence they have shown that there is this natural resource actually curse in India. But although relatively, the level is not high, those states which are relatively resource rich, the level is not high. But that curse is not actually visible in India. And regarding this redistribution also, to what extent these policies were effective. And finally, 14th chapter, competitive federalism to competitive sub-federalism. Because till now we are focusing on competitive federalism. Even we have discussed cooperative federalism and competitive federalism. Now from federalism to sub-federalism, from the state level to city level. To focus on actually sub-federalism here, cities and as dynamos. So what actually issues are there in cities and how to overcome infrastructure and other problems. So focus on various urban development programs, especially which is most important urban development program currently, smart cities. The most important is smart cities. And apart from that, Amrut, Hriday, means this heritage city development program. So and apart from that, some other, it is supplemented by other programs also, like Digital India, Skill India, etc. Also supporting even Swachh Bharat are supplementing these efforts. So some focus on actually urban development programs. Okay, these are chapters. Now out of these, which are most important chapters? To some extent, some schemes you can see in chapter 4. Here only a broad idea is sufficient. Only was broad idea. This also only broad idea in cause of migration. In this chapter 11, broad idea will be sufficient. Details are not required. Here, slightly more important, relatively, but not very important. So you can see some data here also apart from broad idea. The most important chapter is this one, UBI. So another is even review of economic development. Only selected things are important. So this is relatively important, relatively. Here, some only basic points, not much important, like what issues are there, why it is important. Fiscal lessons also not so important here. So this not much content is there here, also less important. Just broad idea is sufficient here. So you should see broad contours of this chapter. Festering twin balance sheet problem, yes, it is important from some to some extent, because a lot of schemes were initiated and there is a lot of focus actually, and it is threatening, कि now NPAs, they have mentioned in this chapter कि the level of NPA which is there in India, at this level there is crisis in other countries. And why there is no crisis? Because most of the NPAs are in with public sector, so people have trust in public sector कि government will support them at any cost. So relatively important. This is to some extent, especially more important thing is, rather than from this chapter, is like new initiatives of government, Ratan Mittal committee actually, that is more important in this chapter. Overall impact, broad idea, okay, what are means positive impact or negative impact of demonetization. So relatively important. It is important from mains point of view. Chapter 2, chapter 1, also some broad idea is sufficient here. Now I just give you objective here because the thing is that it is quite long, so you can't focus on every topic. So but overview should be there, okay, overall. Like for example, and the summary will whatever summary I'll provide you, that is based on the importance. Like those chapters which I said less important, hardly 2 pages will be there. Those chapters which are important, there may be 7, 8, 9 pages may be there. So depending on importance, we have actually devised that. So some chapters broad idea, some chapters are relatively important. Okay, now we'll start with chapter. Before initiating, they have given some 8 interesting facts they have mentioned. So I'll give you here overview only. In specific chapters, we'll discuss in detail. So 8 interesting facts about India. So Indians on the move. So like there's a chapter we'll discuss in detail. I'm just giving you a broad idea about this. Okay. Migration in India is quite high. New estimate based on railway passenger traffic data reveal annual work-related migration of about 9 million people, almost double what 2011 census suggested. So as per the census, the estimate was lesser. The new actually study showed that the migration is much more as we estimated earlier. So there's a chapter on migration. So we will discuss in detail. So just broad idea that migration is sufficient. Biases in perception. So in chapter 1 itself we will discuss in 2010 S&P Standard & Poor's upgraded China's credit rating from from A+ to AA-. So in 2010 China's credit rating was upgraded, and in case of India at that time actually India's rating since then has remained unchanged. So before that it was downgraded. So now it is actually in the last from 2000 means in the last few years, from 2010 it is BBB-. Since then the growth of China has came down significantly. Apart from that, credit to GDP ratio has increased. The growth rate in China came down, and the credit means debt, bank loan to GDP ratio has increased. So is it a positive sign or negative sign if bank credit to GDP is increasing? To some extent is positive, because when bank give credit, it promotes capital formation, it may promote growth. That is why it may be good. But if bank will be giving more credit, then indebtedness will be more, and it may create problem also. Vulnerability increases. Even especially like in why banks are NPAs increase, because one reason is that the companies which are defaulting, they are highly indebted. The debt to GDP ratio is very high, which I told you what is term used, leverage. So companies are highly leveraged. So it means that in China the companies must be leveraged or not? Yes. So it shows weakness. So in India growth rate came down and debt increased. So despite that, actually credit rating, actually since 2010 when situation was not so bad, since then this has increased, GDP growth came down, then they have not downgraded China's credit rating. It is same, fixed. In case of India, you can see there was significant difference. In 2010, although there was some slowdown in India, then growth picked up. In from 2000 especially, you can see from 12, 13, growth is picking up. On the other hand, credit to GDP ratio is quite low. So despite this improvement in macroeconomic situation of the country, India's credit rating has not been upgraded. Okay, neither India's credit rating has been upgraded, nor China's credit rating has been downgraded. So it shows actually there is some bias in perception. Acha, in chapter 1 itself, we will discuss what issues are there, what actually variables they quoted, why we have not upgraded India's credit rating. Because in the last 3 years at least, economic situation improved substantially or not. Inflation, which was very high, came down, growth accelerated, and CAD external balance improved significantly. Rupee depreciation also checked. So there was significant. Government's fiscal situation also improved significantly. So credit rating was expected to improve, but it was not improved. Although there was significant deterioration in China, despite that, no change in that. So they have shown flaws. Otherwise, also, earlier when there was global financial crisis, the credit rating agencies, they were not able to predict that. Rather, they gave very high credit rating to those securities which there was default on those securities, like mortgage-backed securities or mortgage-backed assets, MBS. So they've actually mentioned about flaw in methodology of credit rating agencies. Clear? Another is new evidence on weak targeting of social programs. So they have actually used this diagram in support of UBI, Universal Basic Income. So welfare spending in India suffers from misallocation, as the pair of charts show districts with most poor, red in left. The most poor, the red districts show most poor, are the ones that suffer from greatest shortfall of funds in the right. In social programs, the district accounting for poorest 40% received 29% of total funding. Now here you can see by and large this is red, means these are the states having more poor, and you can see shortfall is mainly in those states. So you can see this pattern seems to be quite similar. It means that wherever the maximum poors are there, there is shortfall in social security spending. So it means that there is misallocation of funds. Okay, because both diagrams, like red, you can see more here in this direction, here also. So it means that the states which are in much need, they are facing shortage of funds. Another thing is that district accounting for 40% of poorest, they must be getting at least 40% of funds, or rather more funds are required in poor states. They got actually 29%. So allocation of funds was actually lesser for poor states. So it means that there is some significant misallocation. This is allocation, then how much there were leakages also, leakage separate. So there must be leakages significantly. So how much poor actually benefited in those states, that was actually a matter of, you can say, debate whether the current programs are effective or not. So that is why there is a case there should be UBI. Clear? Weak targeting of social programs. Another is political democracy, but fiscal democracy. So they have mentioned in India, taxpayers are very less. We have discussed narrow tax base. India has 7 taxpayers for every 100 voter. So it means that 7% of the voting age population is actually paying tax. So of the voting age population, 7. Although earlier estimate was 4%, but the new estimate is that 7% of adult population or voting age population is paying tax. So our rank is quite low. You can see like the voting, the adult population or voting age population is just 7% are taxpayers. Although in some countries like Northwest Sweden, almost 100% people are paying taxes. The adult population. Tax base is very, very narrow in India. India's distinctive demographic dividend. So, in other countries, it is going down. China, you can see Korea, Brazil. So, overall young population, this is working age population and non-working age. So, working age, proportion of working age population to non-working age. So, in other countries, you can see working age population is declining. So proportion of working age population to non-working age population, means young population, we can say. So it is declining at a very, very sharp pace in most of the countries, means other countries, and rather almost most of the countries. And in India, it is expected to remain at much higher level. Now it will go down, young population will reduce, and in India it will remain at very high level. So this is demographic dividend. And another thing is that they have made a comparison. Like you can see it is like somewhat like this, the shape of this curve. Demographic dividend means working age population increase, then it is declining. Okay, in which states? West Bengal, Punjab, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh. In these peninsular states, you know, demographic dividend. Can we say these states are going to benefit from demographic dividend? No. So it means that just like developed countries or other countries, most of the countries, it is now the working age population going down. In relatively developed state or peninsular states, it will reduce. But now see, in hinterland like UP, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan. So in these states, you can see that working age population is going up. So there is a demographic divide among states. Those states which are relatively well off, it is demographic dividend is high. They are relatively well off. They are now working age population is going down, and in relatively backward state, this is going to increase. So it is desirable or undesirable thing. Overall is desirable in the sense that it is expected to increase or decrease inequalities. It is expected to decrease inequalities because when young population will increase in the relatively backward states, then growth will pick up in those states. And here actually when working population will decline, then growth is expected to be affected. Overall, this will lead to convergence. Till now, which was elusive, so convergence will be there. Income inequalities are expected to decrease by this. Clear? So this is broad trend about demographic dividend. So status of that. One more thing, you know, this is 2020 is this is 20, 30, 40, 50. Now we are here. At the now it means that it will increase for how much time? Working age population to non-working age population is expected to increase till at the most 35, around 35 tak badhega. Then it will start declining, but it will plateau. It will not peak. It means that it will remain for significant time. So at least 2050, it will remain very high, much higher than other countries where it is declining and very slim. So here it will plateau. It means that we will benefit for significantly long time. At least for 3 decades, it will remain very high, and 3 or rather even 4 decades. And even after 5 decades, it will be higher than other countries as per this trend. If we will extend it, then still situation will be much better. So it means that for the at least 30, 40 years or up to 50 years, we are going to have a significant edge over most of the countries in the world. I think what the point? So this is one trend. India takes more than China. India trades more than China and a lot within itself. So there is some debate that trade India is not open. Trade is much less. So they have compared at this level of development. So trade of India is not lesser than China. So as of 2011, India's openness measured as a ratio of trade of goods and services to GDP has far overtaken China's. As India's ratio of trade to GDP. Now the thing is that they have expressed trade not as such trade in amount in terms of dollars. They have expressed in terms of GDP. What percentage of GDP we are trading? That is a better relative measure. Obviously, China's GDP is more than twice of India. So obviously, it must be trading more. So we cannot compare in dollars directly. So they have compared actually trade in goods and services to GDP ratio. Means trade to GDP ratio. India's internal trade to GDP is also comparable to that of other large countries and very different from caricature of this barrier-ridden economy. So although there are a lot of barriers, still trade is not less. Now you can see here, these are the years, and this is trade as per trade GDP ratio. Trade divided by GDP into 100. So you can see in India it is slightly on higher side. Now it is about how much? Almost 50%. So trade is almost half of our GDP. So whatever we are trading, and it is higher than China. But if we see in absolute term, the GDP of China is, if we see in nominal terms, then it is almost how much? 2.5 times in terms of PPP. But we have to compare in actual market exchange rate. So our GDP is how much? 2.25 trillion. China's was 11.4 something. So 2.2 and 11.4. How much difference? Almost 5 times. So otherwise, in absolute term, it will be 5 times. Because our share in world trade is about 2%. and China's trade share is more than 10%. So if we see in absolute number, then it will be high. Got the point? But comparison will give in terms of GDP. So if we compare in this term, on this term, so our trade is not less. Clear? So almost 50% of GDP. Clear? In absolute term, we have to multiply it by 5 because GDP in nominal terms of China is about 5 times more than India. If we talk about GDP in terms of PPP, then 2.5 times. Actually is PPP. But when we express variables in actual, you can say, like we say current account deficit. So we take with GDP, market exchange rate. So here also we have to take market exchange rate. So actual will be shown by market exchange rate. Then actually if we compare India's trade with that of China, that will be China's trade will be almost 5 times more than India. What's the point? But GDP is also 5 times more in nominal terms, in value terms. So, but as percentage of GDP, if we compare, it is slightly higher in India. Clear? So these two things are different. One is in absolute numbers, other is as a percentage of GDP. So it is higher in India as percentage of GDP. Apart from that, internal trade is also quite large, like USA, Brazil. India is not also less, as you can see, this is India's. So even internal trade is also quite significant. They have also mentioned one fact, there's a chapter on this trade, large countries, they usually trade more with rest of the world or less? They trade less because there is a lot of scope of internal trade. Small countries, usually they usually trade much more. So India is a large country. So from that perspective also, we have a huge domestic market. So obviously our dependence on rest of the world or trade with them will be relatively lesser in that company. So overall, by any means, India's trade is not so low. As I told you earlier also, like our share in world GDP is how much in actual terms? How much? 7.5%. Almost 7.5% in terms of PPP. Actually, our GDP is how much? Our GDP 8.7 trillion in terms of PPP in 2016, and world GDP about 112 something, about 112 around. So overall, if you see percentage of means India's share in world GDP, that is about 7.5%. So we are actually contributing to 7.5% of the world's production in India, and our share in world trade, if we talk about goods, then about 2%. So it seems low in that sense. So they have mentioned it is not low if you compare in this manner. India is a large country, so obviously the share obviously is expected to be low. Divergence within India, big time. So divergence means income inequalities, regional disparity. Spatial distribution in income is still rising in India in the last decade. Unlike rest of the world, even China, that is despite more porous borders within India than between countries internationally, the forces of convergence have been elusive. So it means that in India, inequalities have not reduced, rather inequalities have increased. So despite, there is porous borders, like people can move freely, even goods can by and large move freely, still actually, the convergence has not happened. It means that the states which were relatively less developed, their growth rate remained low. And those which are relatively well off, their growth rate has been high. So inequalities rather has increased. Spatial means regional inequalities have increased in India. In what has been the trend in the rest of the world? Now you can see this line in China, red line. So what does it show? First of all, real GDP per capita in PPP log value. So this is actually per capita income, real GDP per capita. And here average growth rate of per capita. So this is per capita income and this is growth of per capita income. Okay. Now this line is down, going down. What does it mean? In the states or provinces in China, where the per capita income is low relatively, left side में low है, तो वहाँ पे growth per capita की high है, and where per capita is high, growth is low. So it means that where per capita income is low, in those states, like in these states, per capita income growth is low, and growth rate of per capita income level is low, but growth is high. And where per capita income is high, the growth is low. It means that regional disparities are increasing or decreasing in China. Decreasing at fast pace. That it is quite, you can say, steep. If we see in the world, green color, it is in the countries or areas where per capita income is low, the growth is relatively on higher side. And the areas where per capita income is high, the growth is on relatively lower side. So overall, regional inequalities at global level are reducing. Okay. Although in China, there was a sharp decrease in regional disparities in the world. Clear? Now in India, it is going up. It means that where per capita income is low, growth of per capita is low. Where per capita income is high, like Gujarat, what is this is not so like most of the like UP, UP in the states which are where per capita income is low, like UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, the growth remained low in general. And wherever per capita income is relatively high, like in mainly peninsular states, growth of per capita was high. So it means that till now inequalities are still increasing. What the point? So this is contrary to the trend in the world. Any doubt? But demographic dividend is expected to aggravate this thing or check this thing. It will check this thing, okay? Because in relatively backward states, there is young population is going to increase, and in India, in peninsular states, young population is going to decline. So that demographic dividend is expected to overcome this problem of divergence in or income inequalities. Any doubt in this? Clear? So inequalities, you can see in China reducing, in world reducing, but in India it is increasing. So although demographic dividend is expected to overcome this problem. Other last point in this, property taxes potential unexplored. So they have mentioned that evidence from satellite data indicates that Bengaluru and Jaipur collect only about 5 to 20% of the potential property tax. So they have actually mentioned that there is a significant potential in property taxes. And if property taxes would increase, then what will happen? The local bodies like municipalities, resources would be supplemented. They can spend money on improving quality of life of people in urban areas, in development by developing infrastructure. So there is a significant potential. And this tax actually, is imposed on relatively well-off people who have property assets, so they can afford to pay. So this potential has remained very much unexplored. So from satellite data, they have said that where is means on the base of the the buildings, etc. So they have said that there is significant potential to increase this tax, and this is a very progressive tax, and there is a significant potential. And in other countries, this tax is yielding significant revenue, and this will improve quality of life in urban areas. So government should explore this. Like municipal corporation should be empowered, and they should explore this tax and should supplement resources. Okay, so as I told you, the last chapter is related with this. So in specific chapters, they have discussed in detail. So I just give you overview of this. Okay, so this is now chapter 1, economic outlook, policy and challenges. So rather we will discuss, see the rather summary here, because it will be too long if we go by this. So chapter 1, this is actually summary of chapter 1, economic outlook and policy challenges. Okay, so I just gave you some the 8 facts they have given. So I just explained those facts. Now chapter 1, as I told you, in this chapter there is overall outlook of Indian economy, overall outlook and issues general, and debate on important issues. Major economic, this chapter summarizes major economic activities of the nation in the past 1 year and studies its various dimensions along with outlook for the coming year. So various actually economic activities and outlook. Economic survey spoke about sweet spot. They have used the word in the 14-15 economic survey, and even this 15-16. So in the last 3 years, this word is being used, sweet spot, and they have mentioned in this year economic survey as well. Okay, what is the meaning of sweet spot? So India is supposed to be a sweet spot in the world.
So that means macroeconomic situation in India is very
Yes,
good.
macroeconomic situation overall is much better in India, because in the last few years you can see that in world economy there was stability or instability. There was significant instability in world economy, and despite that, India economy actually became means there was some problem. Rather, it recovered, and overall macroeconomic situation is gradually strengthening in India. So India is actually, IMF called India a sweet spot in the world. So they said that sweet spot is there, but actually we have to adopt some reforms. We have to make some structural changes to actually achieve this potential. So it shows actually potential. And so India is one important, actually you can say, one of the brightest region in the world. Acha, this year's stock exchange says a shift in underlying vision needed to overcome major challenges. The thing is that we have to take some major means a vision we need some reform measures to benefit from this, to maintain this sweet spot. Acha, they mentioned that historic year. Some major changes happened actually last year, as we discussed: GST, demonetization, and Brexit and US elections. Acha, these are the major things which will change economy. Like GST we have discussed in detail, demonetization separate chapter we will discuss, and Brexit also is quite important. Relatively, although out of these, Brexit is less important out of these four things. Acha, India is expected to positively be affected or negatively affected by Brexit.
There was not much
Positive or negative? Positive. Overall, there will be positive impact. Positive impact, especially our ties are expected to improve. Even immigration is expected to improve somewhat. Although there will be overall, we are expected to sign a new trade deal with UK. So a lot of Indian students actually they study there. Indian companies have invested more in UK than in entire EU. So Indian companies but those Indian companies which have invested there, they will win or lose. They will lose because they will actually lose preferential access to European markets. So overall impact will not be significant on India. It will be marginal positive impact. Acha, US elections, positive impact or negative impact on India? If we talk in pure economic terms, there will be negative impact. Negative impact in the sense like we have discussed, what are the negative impact on which thing? Like most important is currently our finance minister discussed that issue. Which issue? Visa, H1B visa, actually this job visa issues. So it will adversely affect in general, and apart from that, BPO industry may be affected by this. Second, other issue on which there will be BPO restrictions on BPO that will be affected. Another one is this job visas. Other is BPO, because we are having significant comparative advantage in the service exports, software and BPO, ITES. Acha, any other impact?
American first.
Federal Reserve, no, but that is not related with US elections. That is always a counter-cyclical monetary policy. So Federal Reserve is going to increase interest rate. That is not related to election. Other protectionist policies will further increase, and this is the kind of protectionism like we have discussed. BPO and job visa restriction is a kind of protectionist policy. Other impact on intellectual property. You know, US adopted very harsh strength. In 1 month back, actually, there was an article in Hindu that the USTR, one officer of USTR, used very harsh language. We have to take some harsh steps against India for violating actually or non-compliance of IP rights in India. So there is significant violation. Although we have passed new IPR policy 2016, and it seeks to address some of the concern. Whatever genuine concerns were there, those were addressed. Like we have to improve enforcement actually of IPR. We have increased penalties for violation of this. We have increased adjudication mechanisms, like some more tribunals should be established. So some of the genuine concerns we have addressed by that policy. But what they want we should actually compromise on like compulsory CL should not be issued, and that they should just one, and like they should misuse it by extending it infinitely by evergreening. So we check evergreening. So that is not actually compromised. So this is one area where actually our relation may deteriorate in case of IP. Achha, so US is pressuring India to go beyond TRIPS commitment, as we discussed. Achha, so this will be a negative impact. Third, other negative impact or positive impact?
So positive में TPP में withdraw.
Positive is that withdrawal of TPP and even TTIP. So withdrawal of that will actually, whatever there was a trade diversion towards some other Pacific Rim countries, that will not happen. So one benefit. Second, relevance of WTO will increase. Why? Because regional trade agreements actually this importance reduced. So that is why WTO will regain its importance. So overall, on economic front, we will benefit or lose. Overall, there will be loss to India. But on the strategic front, on diplomatic front, certainly there will be a significant benefit, especially in countering terrorism, actually countering Pakistan. So this will be a major benefit actually to India. So strategically, there is a significant benefit, but there is some loss on economic front. Bye.
Directly say that strategically.
Yes, certainly, yes, because India is a very important ally to counter actually extremism, and it is countering not Pakistan is not the issue, main is China. So it will also actively counter China. So this will benefit India. Now, as the rift between US and China is gradually increasing and may further increase, that will benefit India. Apart from that, it will help us to cooperate in overcoming international terrorism, because there's a major issue. India is actually India is affected by that. So now the sensitivity of world would increase toward terrorism. So overall, this is much beneficial. So overall, if we see, so then benefit is more than loss. I think got the point? Achha, so these are the major 4 developments they have mentioned. So that is why it was they have used the word historic year. Okay, now demonetization, as we have discussed in budget also, these are the 4 objectives: corruption, counterfeit currency. So we'll discuss separately. So demonetization, action taken by government. So there's a separate chapter on demonetization. So we'll discuss demonetization in that chapter, because that is just a repetition regarding demonetization. Actions, long-term benefits and actions needed. So all of these things are there in a separate chapter. Then reform measures by the government. Even this was mentioned in budget. GST, most important, bankruptcy laws we have discussed, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Act 2016. We have discussed institutional arrangement for on monetary policy with RBI to consolidate gains from macroeconomic stability, ensuring inflation control. So inflation targeting, flexible inflation targeting we have discussed. Beyond these, solidified the legal basis for Aadhaar to realize the long-term gains. So Aadhaar bill, so we'll discuss few features of Aadhaar bill separately. So Aadhaar Act is also very important, and now for income tax it is compulsory. So these are major reforms. Apart from these reforms, government announced package to measure to assist clothing sector. Why? Because in economic survey there was a case this is very important, we should focus. So some package is given, support package. Other is NPCI developed this UPI platform. So this is having a significant potential to actually promote digitalization of economy. So this is another significant actually achievement. Another is promoting FDI. So a lot of FDI reforms were initiated, as we discussed. Most important policies Make in India. After Make in India, there was significant increase in FDI, and a lot of supporting schemes related to these policies, like various you can say ease of doing business, and apart from that, labor reforms as a part of that, and bankruptcy code, etc. So that is expected to further increase FDI. So these are the reform measures taken by government. So we have discussed in detail already. Now next, they have mentioned about poor standards, the rating agencies China and India. So as we have discussed in brief, in recent years the role of rating agencies has increasingly come under question. In the US financial crisis, you can see questions were raised about their role in certifying the AAA bundles of mortgage-backed securities. So MBS, they have given AAA rating, and there was large-scale default. Similarly, failure to provide warnings in advance in financial crisis. So in that global crisis and earlier also, they failed to give any advance warning about crisis. So overall, their performance has not been very satisfactory, because they are expected to identify the risk. They are expected to give some warnings that this thing can create problem. So overall, first of all, their track record has not been very satisfactory. In case of India, S&P in November 2016 ruled out scope for rating upgrade on grounds of its low per capita GDP and relatively high fiscal deficit. Now, they have criticized the ground actually. Obviously, without any doubt, the upgrade may or may not be there, but the ground is not actually logical. Low per capita GDP, they have put one ground. Second is relatively high fiscal deficit. Now, they have discussed about this. The actual methodology to arrive at this rating was clearly more complex. But are these variables the right key for assessing India's risk of default? So obviously, these are not especially the first one is not a good criteria, because otherwise, if this is a criteria, then in case of developing country, it will never upgrade. So credit rating shows actually potential. The situation is improving or worsening. It is not where you stand. It is more important. Rating shows in which direction you are moving rather than where you are standing. And they have considered first per capita GDP. It is very slow moving variable. Per capita GDP cannot increase substantially. India, India, the per capita income growth has been high or low in the last 26 years after economic reforms. per capita income growth has been very high, rather one among the highest in the world. Means at least in top 5 in the world consistently. So growth rate of per capita income has been very high in the last 26 years from 91. I'm talking about. Now, despite that, per capita income is high or low? Is very low. In the last, you can say, almost a quarter century, we are one of the fastest growing per capita income grew at very fast pace. And despite that, per capita income is very low. It is less than half of the world average. So per capita income cannot increase overnight. Even growth will be high, it will take long. So even they have used the word like growth rate, average growth rate of per capita is like moving, slow moving very well. Low income countries experience an average growth of 2.45%, the 2.5% of per capita income. Although in India it was about 5%, 4.5 to 5 growth of per capita income. Between this to this, 1972 to 2015. At this rate, the poorest of the poor middle income countries would take 57 years to reach upper middle income status. So actually it is a long time. Even they have used the word K. If this will be the criteria, then the country will say you just come after 50 years because there will be significant change only in 50 years at least. So there is no need to assess now. So you can come after 50 years. So there is no logic in this criteria. What actually reason they have given. One is similarly considered next fiscal variable. Practice of rating agencies to combine group of countries and their assess comparatively their fiscal outcomes. India is deemed an outlier because its general government fiscal deficit is 6.6. India's fiscal deficit is general government means center plus states. So center's fiscal deficit, like last year if we talk about, it was presented before budget. So it was 3.5. Fiscal deficit of center was 3.5. So it means that state should be 3.1 approximately. So overall fiscal deficit of center and state are almost equal. So it is overall this. But it is slightly on higher side, and that was 67% of GDP and that of 67.1% of GDP. So that of center and states. So center out of this we have discussed already, center is about 48, 49, 48 point something, and states about 20, 21. So overall this is on higher side. Out of line with its emerging market peers. So the debt is slightly on higher side in India, but not very high. Although in some countries debt is much higher. Even in developed countries, it is much higher than 67%. However, India could be very different from comparators used by rating agencies for following reasons. But India is very different. They have mentioned that many emerging markets struggle, but India has a strong growth trajectory coupled with commitment to fiscal discipline. Now the thing is that fiscal situation is improving and growth is accelerating. This is a very important thing, which is rare. Another, even it is, but India might be still carry much more debt than other countries because it has exceptionally high willingness to pay, as demonstrated by history of not defaulting on obligations. Like they have mentioned in 1991, there was severe crisis. And before that, lot of other countries defaulted. We actually did everything. We pledged gold. We borrowed at all conditions. And in 91, we accepted Washington Consensus, means all conditions imposed on us. But we actually had no willingness to default at any cost. We were willing to meet our commitment. So this also shows actually psychology of a country or approach. India also compares favorably other countries, other metrics known as closely related to risk of default. So consider the following with China. In 2009, China launched a historic credit expansion, like credit to GDP increase from 2000, from almost 80s, in entire 80s, 90s and 2000s. Means from 1980 to 2000, growth of China was about 9 to 10%, or rather around 10%, very close to 10%. And now growth has declined to almost below 7%. So there was substantial slowdown in growth. And the projection is that growth is expected to remain low in China in the coming few years. On the other hand, like vulnerability of banking sector has also increased in China. The bank has given huge debt. So credit to GDP ratio has increased substantially in China. So these are the two variables which have significantly affected in China. Despite that, they have not downgraded credit rating of China. It should be very clear that there are two things. When I have discussed this thing, debt 67%, that is debt on government. Debt on government means center plus state. Okay. When I'm talking about credit to GDP ratio, it means that bank loan divided by GDP. In India, credit to GDP ratio is about 70%, 70-75%. In Nachiket More committee, I give you this data. So in India, it is on lower side, but in China, it is 250%. In India, it is 70%. In China, 250%. It means that although company borrow for making investment, so this will accelerate growth, but it will increase vulnerability also. As I told you, one of the reasons why companies are not able to service their debt, because debt is very high. So if debt will be high, then if the income will go down, then chance of default will increase. So in China, if growth is slowing down, if it will persist somewhat, then this may lead to a crisis, and it will not be easy for China to overcome crisis. Because in India, NPAs have increased, but the bank credit is 70% of GDP. In China, it is GDP is also very high, 250% of GDP. In China, it is 250% of GDP. So it means that if situation will worsen in China, it will be very difficult for China to stabilize. So financial system in China is more vulnerable. Got the point? So if we talk about vulnerability of financial system or banks, in China they are more vulnerable. Although problem is lesser, problem is less, but vulnerability is high. In India, problem is at higher stage. Like NPAs are much higher in India, but situation can be controlled. So which thing should be more important here? One thing is that vulnerability and with low current problem. Other is in India, the problem is somewhat on higher side, but vulnerability is low. So what is more important in credit rating? It should be vulnerability rather than the current situation. Because if such kind of problem would happen in China, like if NPA will go to that level, the financial system may collapse there. This shows vulnerability. Got the point? Achha, so we have discussed already. You can see 210%, but overall they have written 250%. So credit to GDP ratio has increased to 250% of GDP. India mein 70 ke kareeb hai, 75. Okay, so this has increased vulnerability of financial sector in China. This is logic is clear. So debt may be bank loan to GDP ratio. It may be one debt may be public debt, other may be external debt. External debt means debt from rest of the world on government or private sector. In India, out of these three debt, like debt credit to GDP ratio in India is low. Rather, it is better. It should increase. Like Nachiket More committee said, it is too low. 70% is too low. Rather, we have to increase. Okay. Public debt. Public debt means debt on government. Obviously, more debt than government's financial situation will be weak. So this is on slightly higher side, moderately high. I told you already. Another is external debt. That is how much? Debt on the entire country, means government and private, but only from abroad. That is about 24%. So 24% is not high. So we are less indebted country as per World Bank. So I told you in balance of payments. So external debt is low. Public debt is actually on higher side, moderately high or high. And credit to GDP ratio is low. But it is right now, this low variable is desirable because it means that the government can handle situation. If this might be very high, then it would be difficult for government to handle NPAs or banks. So although this is in general not desirable, but in the current situation, it shows that situation could be handled. And that is the reason, it was written in this chapter, when NPA increase to this level, what are there in India? It leads to crisis. In India, there is no crisis. Why? Because situation could be handled by government.
If you want to grow, you have to increase this rate.
If a bank lending is very important because bank company will borrow, it will promote capital formation, infrastructure development. So that is why we are talking, it should be increased. But it should be increased. It means that low is having a potential for growth. Even it should be very clear. If this ratio is low, when situation will improve, let's suppose we can overcome the problem of NPA, then can we increase this credit to GDP ratio? It will increase the scope of growth. Yes, it is a potential of growth. What the point? In China, they have realized the potential. They have to now reduce it. It has increased vulnerability. So this is showing potential. Clear? So they have mentioned about this thing. So you should have idea triple B minus है India का जो crediting है as per Standard and Poor's.
So why is bias? Because both of them are developing countries.
But the thing is that it is simple. This is they have put these variables, but there are a lot of other variables are there. Assessment of credit rating can be objective. Is it objective, subjective? It's very subjective. A lot of variables are there which show vulnerability of a country or risk So which economist will pick which variable, which give more weightage to which variable, it will vary. There's a lot of subjectivity. Achha, here in this actually table, in this point, they have actually expressed, they have discussed only few variables, but there may be a lot of other variables. Obviously, the credit rating would not have considered only these two variables. There must be a lot of other variables. But overall, the situation, this thing does not seem justified. Like situation overall, if you see, has improved significantly. And like we have discussed, potential is quite high here. Situation is much better. That despite it is not cheap. So they have analyzed mainly these two variables. Any doubt regarding this? So assessment of credit rating is always subjective, because a lot of economics is not a science, it's social science. You know, each variable is affected by thousands of variables or lakhs of variables, and in turn it affects those variables. So interrelations are always there. Achha, another is structural changes. Achha, this is they have mentioned in chapter 2. They have said what are broader societal shifts are required in ideas and narratives to address three major challenges. So there are three major challenges they have discussed in chapter 2. So we will discuss in detail. Inefficient redistribution, like there are leakages, you know, and mistargeting of funds. For as I told you the diagram in that case, states having more poor, they are facing shortage. Strengthening state capacity in delivering essential services like education, health. Now, government is not able to give better quality of basic amenities like education, health, sanitation, etc. So it should be increased. So these are concerns we will discuss in chapter 2. Another is dispelling the ambivalence about protecting property rights and ambivalence about private sector. They have mentioned in India there is some ambivalence towards private sector. Means we have apprehension about private sector, so that have to be dispelled. So there are some problems in disinvestment, in actually like in fertilizer sector, like government is actually supporting loss-making inefficient companies rather than enabling them to exit. If they are not able to compete, let them go out of business. Similarly, like government is providing bailout packages have provided to Air India. So they said, why not privatize them? Why not why out of the way support, state support to enterprise? So private sector should be trusted. So we will discuss in detail in chapter 2. Global challenges. So we have discussed already Brexit and US elections. 5 challenges they have mentioned. So this we have discussed. Another second is decline oil price has impacted dynamics of increasing private consumption and facilitating investment. This year important source of this. International prices are now on the rise. So prices have already started rising, and there are still chances, like if the situation will deteriorate actually in the Middle East, then it may increase oil prices. And as we have discussed, it will have severe repercussions. The most important vulnerability of Indian economy is dependence on crude oil. This is the most important vulnerability. Because as I told you earlier, previous government tried its best to control inflation. But why? Because this is very important variable, which is on which government of India has no control. So this is another third point is that US fiscal and monetary policy, which impact India's capital flows and exchange rate. As we discussed, when interests are expected to increase, because it means that rather they have to taper QE, and interests will go up and capital will flow, because then investors will get more in return from there. They will be investing there. Fourth, capital outflow may be there, and exchange rupee may depreciate also when there will be outflow. Medium-term political outlook for globalization, particular political carrying capacity for globalization. They have used the word political carrying capacity for globalization. For political carrying capacity for globalization means world trade to GDP ratio, world trade to world GDP ratio. So it is expected that world trade to world GDP ratio is expected to increase or decrease. It is expected to decrease. And export is crucial for India, because in the last 25 years, if we see average growth of exports after 91, how much will be the average growth of export? Approximately almost 15%. So growth actually of exports have been very high, and it is very important also, because still, as I told you, as compared to our share in world GDP, our share in world trade is less. So we have to accelerate trade, because we are having significant comparative advantage in a lot of actually items. Like in services, we already have realized that. In goods, we have yet to realize. So Make in India is a step in that direction, and ease of doing business. So if the world will adopt protectionist policies, then we will not be able to realize that potential. So it is difficult to achieve our potential growth, which is about 8 to 10%. In last year's economic survey, they have mentioned that India's potential growth is about 8 to 10%. To realize that potential, we actually have to accelerate our exports growth. So which may be threatened because of the protectionist policies. Clear? Acha, fifth, developments in US, especially rise of dollar, which have implications for Chinese currency. So here again, Chinese currency is linked with dollar because of protectionist policies of America. US dollar will appreciate or depreciate? Will appreciate. When it will appreciate, Chinese currency will also is linked with that, so it will appreciate. Then it will lose competitiveness. It has to devalue. Then again the same problem which happened earlier. Then relatively our exchange deficit may increase. Clear? So these are the 5 challenges.
Why along with dollar Chinese?
Because China linked fixed exchange rate in relation to China is having what crawling peg, and that is rate is pegged or fixed in relation to American dollar. If dollar will appreciate, this will also appreciate. So China is expected to devalue its currency because of this US policies, because there will be inflow of dollars in America. Some protectionist policy will reduce outflow of dollars. So overall dollar is expected to appreciate. So then Chinese renminbi or yuan will also appreciate. Then it will affect China. Then it has to devalue. So it will have effect. So these are the 5 actually issues they have mentioned. Another is review of developments in 2016-17. So they have given some data. So broad data. Real GDP growth actually in first half of this is 7.2, but it is not so important. What is first half of the year? Of the entire year's advance estimate is there. What is that estimate? In 2016-17, 16-17 growth rate of 7 point. Please 16. I'm talking about 16-17. The financial year which ended few days back, जो अभी एंड हुआ है 31 मार्च 2017 को, 16-17 में कितनी ग्रोथ थी? 7.1 जो CSU का स्टूडेंट. तो इन्होंने जो फर्स्ट हाफ 7.2 था, बट इट्स नॉट सो इंपॉर्टेंट. फर्स्ट हाफ वाला इंपॉर्टेंट नहीं है. इंपॉर्टेंट ये है कि लास्ट ईयर, अब तो लास्ट ईयर हो गया, 16-17 लास्ट हो गया ना, अब तो अप्रैल स्टार्ट हो गया. तो लास्ट ईयर आवर ग्रोथ वाज हाउ मच? 7.1, बट इट इज एन एडवांस एस्टिमेट, इट मे बी रिवाइज्ड. एंड बिफोर दैट ईयर इट वाज 7.6. अच्छा, तो ग्रोथ इकोनॉमी का दे हैव गिवन एस्टिमेट. अच्छा, and buoyed by expenditure on 7th pay commission recommendations were implemented. अच्छा, growth will further increase. Why? When 7th pay commissions expenditure will increase, then this demand will increase. It will give boost to growth further. अच्छा, sector wise agriculture showed improvement due to good monsoons. अच्छा, growth of agriculture they have given 4.1% actually growth. So that is quite high. अच्छा, another is retail. अच्छा, this year also it is expected to be good monsoons. So overall agriculture is expected to performance is expected to improve, and the most important benefit will be food inflation is expected to remain within control. So because food inflation is very means important, you can say means component in overall inflation. Achha, retail inflation measured by CPI. Achha, retail inflation reduced, we have discussed already, because of good monsoons actually, and partly due to demonetization in the means for few months price reduced. Achha, WPI was dangerously low of minus in August 2015 -5, bounced to 3.4. Achha, there was a price wedge. Achha, they have given one diagram. I'm going to that. You can see in 2000 from end of 2014. This is zero. Where is zero? This is zero. This is zero. So WPI, you can see in the end of 2014, WPI became negative, and in entire 2015, and it became negative, remained negative. I told you that from the end of 2014 till early 2016, WPI base inflation became negative. Why? Can we say that prices were very low?
No, sir.
No, it is called wedge, price wedge. WPI based inflation was negative. CPI based inflation, CPI means dead. So that remained at about how much? You can see at about 5 to 6 के बीच में रहा. CPI based inflation. WPI reduced, but now the wedge has reduced. So why price wedge has reduced? Can you tell me reason for this? WPI based inflation increased, CPI based inflation remained almost same but slightly declined. Yes, first of all, the reason was that fuel is the most important actually component here. Fuel directly and manufactured item is the most important thing. Both are very much interrelated. So price of fuel marginally reduced and marginally price of crude manufactured item reduced. So that is a WPI based inflation reduced, and more because of base effect, because price of fuel was relatively high. Achha, now base effect is now, would base effect will remain permanently? No. Then base effect actually now rectified. That is the reason. अच्छा, slightly the petroleum prices have increased slightly, so that is why it has, the base effect is now diluted, and second, the price of the crude oil marginally increased, crude oil and leading to other fuels, so that is why WPI inflation increased. Acha, was it really a deflation? No, it is a statistical error because of mainly base effect. Acha, CPI based inflation came down. Why? Most important reason, food prices came down because of the main reason. Acha, and so to some extent base effect is also there to some extent, because earlier food prices were relatively higher, especially in food inflation, so this wedge has reduced. Okay, but overall what is important, that inflation is now within reasonable limits, but there is a threat from global crude oil price, as I told you already. Okay, so got the point, broad idea. So now they are about 4 or below 4 up to, बल्कि 3.4 करीब था अभी. अच्छा, WPI was low now. अच्छा, CPI, I told you कि this whole year to be below 5% target of RBI. Although target is 4% plus minus 2. Economic growth, अच्छा, the projection for this year is how much? You should have idea about this. 6.75 to 7.5. This is a projection of economic survey. The Indian economy is expected to grow at 6.75 to 7.5. So rough idea about this. अच्छा, last year growth कितना था? जो advance estimate है 7.1. Before that 7.6. Before that 7.2. So rough idea you should have. अच्छा, agriculture growth 4.1 was there. अच्छा, last year it was 1.2 only, and this year also it is expected to be better. अच्छा, there will be windfall gain from Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana. So means government will get some tax revenue here. So under this, how much is tax effectively? Tax and surcharge overall almost 50%. Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana. So like if somebody will disclose black money, then how much tax? 49.9% has to be paid as tax. Then 25% has to be kept with government for 4 years without any interest. So 1/4 will be this. So government has got some revenue here. So it is a windfall, means government got some extra money under the scheme. Even one more scheme, income disclosure scheme, IDS. So what is IDS? How much is the tax? Here 30% tax plus 15% to surcharges. So overall 45%. So anybody can disclose black money. 45% will be given to government. 55 will be white immediately. Achha, so this the government has got some resources, government can spend. Achha, low prices and low prices is also a windfall for government. Achha, fiscal deficit target of 3.5% will be met this year. Achha, this was presented before budget. It should be clear, before budget. So as I told you, fiscal deficit target last year was 3.5 and government achieved this. It is expected. And next year target is 3.2. And for the next 3 years, government has said that will maintain at 3%, as recommended by the committee to review FRBMA, NK Singh committee. Achha, the state governments are struggling. Their consolidated deficit has increased steadily in recent years from 2.5 to 3.6. So fiscal deficit of the state have increased somewhat. Although situation is not much worse, but it has deteriorated in the last few years. So there is a separate chapter we'll discuss. Achha, partly because of Uday scheme. What is Uday scheme? Ujjwal Discom Assurance Yojana. So under this Ujjwal Discom means distribution companies, power distribution companies. So what is main, why it has affected fiscal situation of state, Uday? Yeah, one major problem with this Discoms, means distribution companies, state electricity boards, is that they were highly indebted. They have to pay huge interest. So then government under the scheme, center encourage state to take over debt of Discoms on them, so that the cost of borrowing will reduce, and they should be restructured and they will modernize their distribution network, power distribution network. So because of this Uday scheme, debt on states have increased. So there was some minor deterioration in states scheme, but situation is not much worse. Slight deterioration was there. Achha, CAD declined to 0.3 in the first half. I told you already. Last year it is about 1%. Now 0.3. Forex increased to 360. We have discussed covering 12 months of import. So import cover is a variable to assess adequacy of forex. So now almost 12 months import cover. Although minimum is required is how much? 6 months is minimum required, which is just a kind of convention. Achha, trade deficit declined by this much percent. Trade deficit also declined, but software export slowed and financial services declined. This. The negative aspect is that software export declined last year, in this year 16-17, and this is expected to further decline in this year. This is the most important thing. Especially, it will depend on the protectionist policies in America and to some extent in EU also. So this is one challenge actually. Another is net private remittances declined by this. Why net foreign remittances declined? Because of problem in West Asia. So it may further decline. West Asia and America's protectionist policies, visa restrictions. So that is why remittance will reduce because of these reasons. So this, I have told you, the price wedge now has reduced. WPI CPI is now almost equal. Although now WPI inflation is more or CPI is more, right? As per latest data. Latest data, last month CPI is low as per compared to WPI. WPI thoda upar hai CPI se. So CPI was, I think, 3.4 something, and it was about 4 point something. So WPI based inflation is higher now slightly as per recent data. Current account deficit, earlier you can see all 4, and this you can see more than 4.5 or about 4.7%. Now it has reduced to 0.3. So deficit, although it is deficit only, deficit means lower sided deficit, so deficit has reduced. Macroeconomic outlook. Again, they have discussed about demonetization. They have several, actually, times they have discussed about demonetization. So it has various shocks. So we'll discuss separately. Demand shock, like demand reduce, people, wealth effect, people's property value, etc. reduce. And supply shock means when there is no demand, production will reduce. Supply shock. Other is uncertainty shock. People were uncertain that even if people were having money, they were not spending because they thought that we may not get money from ATM to overall. So there may be some restrictions on withdrawal, etc. So these are the problems in this. So we will discuss in demonetization. Fiscal policy, another potential source of fiscal support. Fiscal, we have discussed already. We have this thing. This slide, best use of windfall would be to create a public sector assets reconstruction company. PARA. Public sector assets rehabilitation company. So that the twin balance sheet problem could be addressed. So PARA, bad bank could be established. Now, main problem is that government need huge funds or not. They have said the windfall which government got from some demonetization, some from these schemes like IDS and this Garib Kalyan Yojana, government can use that. Compensation fund for GST that would allow the rates to be lowered and simplified. So GST actually compensation fund would allow this because it will give comfort to states. So state will not be pressurizing center to keep rates high. The most important reform will go structural strategic disinvestment should be done, like which government is doing, selling share to private sector well-established companies so that they can improve performance. Tax reform, subsidy rationalization, creation of PARA, this bad bank. Another reform related to labor. Given difficulty in forming labor laws per se, the thrust could be moved towards affordable, greater choice of workers, which would foster competition among service providers. So labor reforms, as we discussed, is a very important issue. On the expenditure side, results make clear that existing government programs suffer from poor targeting. On radical idea, so they must have discussed about what UBI. UBI, briefly we have discussed, there is a separate chapter. So we'll discuss there are this much schemes which are 950 schemes of central sector scheme and 100% funded by center. Centrally sponsored scheme means center state will share. So about 50% of GDP government is spending with various limitations, etc. So that is why it is leading to misallocation of resources, exclusion of deserving people, poor people actually from these benefits. So that is why there is a need for this. So we'll discuss in detail. The same diagram actually, which I told you earlier, states which are more poor, more deficit of funds. Regarding climate change, they said that Paris Agreement on climate change in December has been one of the shining recent examples of success of international cooperation. What measures Indian government has done to tackle climate change? So steps since 2000 June, when international price declined, India has increased petrol by tax or over 150%. So government has increased tax substantially, more than doubled. Government. Why? So this has passed. So government has not passed on the benefit to consumers. Setting back the cause. Now it means that why government has not passed on. There are two benefits. So one benefit is that when in future price will go up, then politically it will be difficult to increase prices. So that is why government can bear that burden. One thing. Second most important thing is that this increase in tax on petroleum refinery is a kind of carbon tax. So government said it is actually towards a commitment towards actually climate change also. Country should be imposing higher taxes on these fossil fuels, etc. So India now outperforms all the countries except Europe in terms of tax on petroleum and diesel. So now the tax is one of the highest. India's reliance on fossil fuels remains below China, US, UK, Europe at comparable stage of development. So if we talk about comparable stages of development, so India's consumption of fuel is less. Achha, so they have mentioned actually tax. This is recommended by Stern Review on this. Achha, how much actually implicit carbon tax? So you can see that this much was recommended, that this much should be the rate of tax. And in India, like on branded petrol, this much. Branded diesel and branded petrol, itna tax hai. Achha, और इस पे unbranded पे this one and which one? This one. Blue and this one. So actually overall the tax rates, this is not so important. The thing is that whatever actually was recommended by Stern Review, so that whatever are recommended taxes, now the tax is much higher than recommended. So India actually has increased carbon tax. So they have mentioned Stern Review. So I give you brief information. Stern Review on Economics of Climate Change is this much 700-page document released by Government of UK. Achha, Nicholas Stern. It provides most thorough and rigorous analysis of date of the cost and risk in climate change and reducing emissions, and convincingly argues that benefits of a strong early global action to mitigate climate change will be far lower than the cost. So there may be cost of climate change, but that benefit will be much bigger in economic terms, pure economic terms, not on this. So this actually Stern Review, this actually this committee studied the cost and benefits of the actions on climate change. Said whatever is cost, the benefit will be much more if we talk about in pure economic terms. Otherwise, you know, climate is most important. So these things they have mentioned in this. Achha, another is regarding exchange rate policy. Achha, they have some discussed like rupee appreciated or depreciated or what happened. Like they have mentioned achha, you know, export competitiveness is affected by exchange rate. If currency will appreciate, then our export competitiveness will decrease. Okay. Achha. Rise of achha, in this now simple look at this indicates real effective exchange rate suggests that since crisis of this, India's rupee has appreciated by this. Achha, on the basis of real, it said that rupee has appreciated by this much. It means that IMF measure means and this 12% according to RBI measure. Achha, both of these indicators has been potential misleading. They have said that assessment of exchange rate, you know, exchange rate of a country currency shows competitive strength of that economy. So rupee has appreciated on the basis of overall. But they have said that there are some flaws in this methodology, but it's somewhat technical. They have said that in case of RBI as well as in case of IMF, they have given more weightages to euro and to some developed countries currency, but rather we should give more weightage to achha, so euro as well as IMF measure, they have given more weightage to euro, and RBI's measure actually have given more weightage to this West. But our competitiveness is not actually affected by euro as well as by Western countries because they are mainly importing crude oil from them. So our export potential is based on not them but with those countries which we have more export. So they said that the weightages are not proper. So it's a technical debate over this thing. So they have said that rupee has not appreciated so much as it is visible here. Achha, if we see in terms of dollar, you know, exchange rate of rupee used to be 45, 47 till 2011. 10, 11 तक इतना रहता था. अब कितना in the last 3 years, almost 2.5 years, it's 60. It is hovering at about 67. So overall, if we see in terms of dollar, there's almost no change in the last 2.5 years. Overall, if we see average, so by and large, it remain about 67. Yes or no? But the dollar is one currency. Now the thing is that dollar overall slightly has appreciated. So rupee has actually appreciated or not in the last, especially 2 years. So if dollar will appreciate, then if it is same with dollar, then it means that slightly it has appreciated. Now, how much it has appreciated? They have said that the methodology of IMF and RBI, they are using some standard methodology. But that is not reflecting our competitiveness. Our competitiveness will be reflected if we give weightage according to the countries with which we are exporting more. So then it will show our competitiveness. So they said that it is appreciated marginally. Okay, so it's somewhat technical. So just analysis. So India has, on other words, India has managed to maintain export competitiveness despite capital inflows and inflation that has been greater than in trading partners. Reflecting this, India's global market share in manufacturing export has risen between this to this. They have said that India has maintained its competitiveness. Maintain competitiveness means that India prevented rupee from appreciating. But the overall appreciation was not so much, which is visible from the data of RBI and IMF. So despite capital inflow, when capital inflow will be there, overall capital inflow increase in the last 2 or 3 years, so it will put a pressure on appreciation. I think what the point, despite these things, India was able to maintain competitiveness. So there was no major issue in competitiveness. Another topic on which they have discussed is ensuring women's privacy. Here, this topic they have discussed about sanitation problem. Like as per this census of 2011, more than half of the country's population defecated in open, and in rural areas, more than 60% population actually is actually defecating in open. This is one major problem. Now they have said that open defecation may have various health problems and other problems, social problems, but women have to bear a very high burden for that open defecation. So in rural areas, almost 60% population is actually defecating in open. So women have actually various issues, including security, psychological issues actually. So that is why ensuring women privacy. Burden of women takes several forms like threat of life, safety while going out to open defecation, reduction in food and water intake, practice to minimize need to exit home to use toilet. So actually, because women sometimes in rural areas in survey women said that we consume less food and water so that we have to go less frequently. So this would have a severe health repercussion. And other is polluted water leading to women and children dying from childbirth related infections and host of other impacts. So a lot of problems are there. Women have to bear much higher burden of this thing. So women's personal hygiene is therefore important, not just better health outcome, but also for intrinsic value of conferring freedom that comes from having control over their bodies. So basic physical right. So this is actually what gender bias sanitation insecurity. So this open defecation is actually a most important, we can say one important reason for gender disparity, gender bias. So gender bias insecurity. Disproportionate burden on women. They have said that for households which don't have without toilet. So there are means almost 60% households in rural areas, they don't have toilet. Now what are 76% women had to travel considerable distance. 33% of women have to report facing privacy concern and assault while going out in open. Face of this consequences is number of women who have reduced consumption and food 33%, 20 respectively of the sample. But the food and fuel consumption almost 1/3 women reduced. They said that we have reduced this consumption. Illness, disruption, deficiency, short-term reduced food, water intake also causes severe long-term debilitating impact on health. Studies have similarly emphasized women and men going out in the open have to cope up with exposure of natural elements like snake bite, etc. So these are the health and privacy issues. Household with women. Women report far greater use of these in-home facilities for men. Like still there is one problem. Still if there is toilet, then people prefer going out. Especially men prefer going out because of the habit. 62% of women in household with toilet reported use of toilet always. 62 जहाँ पे toilet है, तो 62% women said always house toilet. While only 52% men reported exclusive use of such toilets. So, why more female? Because there is security repercussion. Na? So there are a lot of other privacy issues, security repercussion. That is why more female. Okay, like in advertisement, they show okay, you are having toilet and you are going outside. So Acha, so now potential consequences, they have given data like traveling long distances. This much percentage people have to travel long distance. Uh, what is this? Sexual assault. This much percentage of women reported this. Another, withholding food, almost 1/3, and withholding water. So these are the some statistics like, but you need not require to remember statistics. Some broad idea. These are issues. Achha, other is use of toilet. Overall 62 or 52, I told you, female 62%, they are always using toilet if they have toilet, and 52 male. Achha, so this is actually on women's privacy, especially this. So it means that they have mentioned that obviously Swachh Bharat Abhiyan is a very important step, and that should be, that is having not only the safe, only that the Swachhta mission, it is written with psychological and other diseases and other social, including privacy of women. Achha, India soon to recede demographic dividend. Now demographic, but they have written soon to recede. Although it will start receding, but it will plateau. It is not peak. It will plateau. It will remain for long actually. So we are in the demographic sweet spot with working age population projected to grow by 1/3 over same period. Always remembering that demographic provides potential and not destiny. Achha, it should be clear that demographic dividend is a potential. It is not a destination. It is not destiny, because potential means there may be, if let us suppose we fail to create jobs, then it may create to demographic curse rather. So it means that it is a potential. We have to realize this. So we have to, government need to take policies to make full use of that. Achha, large working age population related to overall population appear benefit from greater economic dynamism. Achha, they have said what are benefits? Okay, young population is more dynamic actually. Young population more entrepreneurial, and thus adding productivity growth tend to save more. Achha, so more entrepreneurial hote hain, more dynamic hai young people. Gives larger fiscal space base because economic growth, because there are fewer dependents. मतलब जो young population के children etc कम होंगे, age के साथ dependent बढ़ जाते हैं, तो saving potential is more. So these are benefits actually of having more young population. General benefits apart from they will contribute to employment. Distinctive Indian demography. India's demographic cycle is about 10 to 30 years behind that of other countries. So because other countries have already peaked and they are going down, so we are almost 10 to 30 years back as compared to other countries. India will remain close to peak for a much longer period. Now close to peak because it will plateau, as I told you. India's largest heterogeneity among states in these demographic profile. We have discussed like in the southern states, they have already achieved peak, and the northern states, they are going. There is a clear divide between peninsular India and hinterland, as I told you already. The peninsular states exhibit a pattern that is closer to China and Korea with sharp rise. Relatively developed countries की तरह है उनका लगभग. Achha, in contrast, hinterland states, so they have used the word hinterland state like Bihar, Odisha, etc., Rajasthan, etc., will remain relatively young and dynamic, characterized by rising age population. Achha, for some time, plateau outwards in the middle of century. Achha, so these diagrams we have discussed already. Ke here, although they have achieved a much higher level, but it is going at very sharp pace. Here, although the level will not be so high in India, means working age population may not increase to so much proportionately. It is actually proportion of working age to non-working age. WA/NWA, मतलब working age divided by non-working age, proportion of working non-working age population. So this proportion will not go to so high level but will remain. So as we discussed already, and you can see pattern in relatively peninsular states is like this, just like in relatively developed state, and in some backward states, hinterland states, it is still going up. It will go on. Clear? I think we have discussed. Achha, even total fertility rate, gradual TFR decline. Achha, now you can see also, कि, for example, like if we see India, fertility is declining. In other countries, it has already declined. Like you can see China, Korea. So in these countries, it is already declined. Now in India, it is declining, but still relatively fertility is high in India. So broad idea where we stand in fertility. Okay, so achha, now if you see again in peninsular states, it is somewhat similar to this. It has declined already. Now it gradually declined. What the point? It has already declined. Now it is gradually. Obviously, after a level, fertility cannot keep on declining consistently. Okay, and in case of that, you can say other states, so it should be above. It is still high, but although it is declining. Acha, both are interrelated or not? Fertility rates and this? Yes, they are interrelated. So some idea about this, where we stand in world in fertility rate. Acha, so there are demographically speaking, there are two different policy concerns. Soon to begin aging India, where elderly, in states now, in peninsular states, the now aging will start. The problem will be somewhat different there. Policies will be somewhat different. And secondly, young India, where providing education, skill, employment opportunity must be a focus. So the focus would be somewhat different in peninsular states and in other states, actually hinterland states. So this is a kind of demographic divide also in the country, and appropriate policies will be required. Achha, of course, heterogeneity within India offers the advantage of addressing some of these concerns via greater labor mobility, through which effect reduce demographic imbalance. So labor mobility may check this, which is already there, like some from the less developed state labor is moving, so that is expected to further increase. Achha, per capita income in 2011 and demographic dividend. So you can see that real per capita income, it is increasing in this way. And here demographic dividend they have represented by annual growth of per capita income. Now you can see that per capita income is low in these states. MP, जैसे यहाँ पे low है UP. अच्छा, यहाँ पे लेकिन but demographic dividend is somewhat higher. मतलब growth has been somewhat higher. And wherever this per capita income is relatively high, this is low. It means that it will lead to what? It will lead to convergence or divergence? It will lead to convergence. क्योंकि per capita जहाँ low है वहाँ पे ये high है. So it means that this demographic dividend will help to converge. The good news is that there is a negative relationship, which means that on average the poor state today have more of a growth dividend ahead of them. मतलब ये convergence का sign है जो what I told you. It means that demographic dividend could help income levels across state convergence. तो state में income का convergence भी होगा इससे. अच्छा, जो अभी तक नहीं हुआ. तो these are the main means in chapter. This is all in chapter 1. Achha, now next is chapter 2. Achha, chapter 1 actually discuss various issues. Now other chapters usually they will focus on a specific issue. Chapter 2 is economic vision. The economic vision for precocious and cleavage India. Precocious, something we develop early mature, premature है. तो premature and cleavage मतलब divided, splitted. तो cleavage India. So now in this chapter, as I told you already, they have focus on India's policy. What kind of policy we adopted, and like pre-reform, post-reform era, what issues were there, and what are issues which are actually need to be resolved now. What are current problems? Like 3 problems which I told you, and why these problems happened, and what government should do to overcome these problems. So they have focus on policy and some analysis of past. Okay, so what policy and problems? This chapter primarily economic accomplishments of India and challenges ahead. Because India premature economy divided on caste and communal and other lines. The chapter compares the situation of pre-LPG 91 era with that of post-91 era. Through illustrations also talk about issues and possible. So comparison of policy and the outcome and issues and how those to be rectified. Like policy, related with what kind of policy. Achha, half a century of socialism. They have used about half a century of socialism, means almost from 1947 till 1991, from 47 till 91. You know, we adopted a mixed economy with a tilt towards socialism. So we were socialist tilt actually. The guiding principles were economic nationalism and protectionism. So because restrictions were there on foreign investment, trade, etc. So economic nationalism. Public sector occupied commanding heights and government introduced even most micro decisions of private firms they are investing, producing, trading. So we have discussed in pre-reform era this kind of policies. So once they have given in pre-reform era what was the situation, then features of post LPG era, liberalization era. So India has replaced its otherwise socialist vision with something resembling the Washington Consensus. Achha, Washington Consensus means they have said open trade, open capital, and reliance on private sector. Actually, I told you already in 1991 we adopted Washington Consensus. As per that, we have to adopt LPG policy. So this is Washington means IMF and World Bank both have headquarters in Washington DC. So we adopted the conventions which were decided there. This kind of liberal policy you have to adopt. So post-reform era, reforms along with these lines have carried by all governments. In past few major reforms have been like institutionalized commitment to low inflation in new monetary policy framework. Some current reforms they have mentioned, like monetary policy framework agreement we have signed, inflation targeting we have accepted. flexible inflation targeting. Acha, focus on improving ease of doing business, passage of GST, bankruptcy. So some recent reform they have mentioned. Okay, so they have compared post-reform and pre-reform. Acha, then after reforms, what was outcome? Now, outcome of reforms here. There has been a remarkable transformation of India from a largely closed economy to an economy, open and thriving economy that we have today. So earlier we were a closed and listless economy, and now open and thriving economy. Outcome of these reforms can be gauged not only qualitatively but can be measured too. Matlab, we can have quantitative measurement also. Acha, 4 standard measures they have said, like openness to trade, how much we are open to trade, what is our share in trade, openness to foreign capital, foreign investment, size of public sector enterprise, public sector usually increases, decreases, usually decreases, and size of government expenditure, how much government is intervening. So this reforms, impact of reform could be assessed in view of these 4 indicators. Now, first indicator is openness to trade. Achha, so as I gave you told you in the diagram, like with comparison with China, so India is not trading less vis-a-vis China. If we trade to GDP ratio is not low in India. So India's trade to GDP ratio has risen sharply, particularly over decade 2012 when it doubled to this. So about 50% I told you trade to GDP ratio now. So one thing. As a result, India's ratio is now surpasses China. So ratio ki term mein slightly it is higher than China, as I showed you in the diagram. They have also said small countries trade more with outside world. Big countries trade less. Why? Because big countries have their own domestic market. So even internal trade is usually more. There is a lot of scope for internal trade. Small countries trade more because they don't have much scope for internal trade. So that is why they have to trade with the rest of the world. So by that parameter also, to trade actually in India, we have to see, when we see how much we are trading, we have to compare India with large countries, not with small countries. So the same diagram, like trade of goods and services to GDP ratio. So you can see that India is on a slightly higher than China. Okay, apart from that, trade of goods and services to GDP ratio. So now you can see what is this is log population. On the basis of size of economy could be shown on the basis of GDP or on the basis of population. Like more population, what is the share in trade? Trade of goods and services. Trade to GDP ratio. So size of population and trade to GDP ratio. Now, if size of population is small, less people are there in a country, then trade to GDP ratio used to be high. And as if population of a country is more, then trade to GDP ratio less. Why? Because when population is small, for example, like Singapore, for example, is having huge significant trade investment. Why? Because population is limited, a small country. Now, how much they can trade among themselves? But there's obviously limited scope. So whatever they trade, they will be trading with the rest of the world. So, but in India, there's significant scope because India itself is a diversified. Actually, it is like various countries. So I think logic is clear, because that agar border hota, so that is also could be trade. Like if Pakistan, Bangladesh may not be separated, that still we may be trade. That must be internal trade. So this is the reason. I think what's the point? If population is less, then trade is usually more. So on this parameter, India's trade is not less. So that has increased. This shows that trade and GDP ratio of India has increased. You can see significantly increased. So it means that openness, like after reforms, our share in trade actually has increased. Openness to foreign capital. Despite significant capital controls, India's net foreign inflows are in fact quite normal compared with other emerging economies. So although a lot of capital controls are still there, we don't have full convertibility, although it is not common rather. So, but still a lot of controls are there, but still, investment is increasing. India's FDI has risen sharply over time. In fact, most recent years, FDI running at an annual rate of this much billion. Amount data is not so important here. So FDI is constantly increasing in the past and in the recent past also. Like especially after Make in India, significant increases there. Even in the past, FDI has been consistently increasing. I told you already, if portfolio investment fluctuates, but if you see data of FDI from especially after 91, consistently it is increasing. Sometimes it is almost same, sometimes it increases. So on an average, it is increasing by and large. अच्छा, this diagram shows what
Openness to that.
capital flows as percentage of GDP. So India is actually on an average, you can see, not less than average overall, like the one of the highest in these countries. But overall, this openness, these capital flows as a percentage of GDP. Achha, even GDP is high. So if capital flow, even this can be to some extent. Would it be true for capital flow also? If a country is large, then capital flow to some extent may be true, maybe less, but not much important here. But for trade, actually, it is more. If population is already more, so scope of trade will reduce in the rest of the world. But if population is more, it will not reduce much scope of investment. So capital flows are actually on an average, are not low, and they have consistently increased. This shows this FDI inflow. What is the FDI inflows? And red one, FDI as percentage of GDP. So if you see in absolute term, consistently, FDI, as I told you already, FDI consistently it is increasing by and large. By and large, it is consistently. FDI portfolio investment. Sometimes it is plus, sometimes maybe minus. It is withdrawal, net withdrawal will be there. So there was never actually as such net withdrawal in FDI. And you can see in terms of percentage of GDP, it is consistently increasing. So one variable is trade, other is share in capital. So capital inflow is consistently increasing. In India, it is not low. Another is size of public sector, the PSUs. Those size of public sector are exceptionally large, but going against the popular perception, the share of PSUs in the market has been coming down in recent liberalization. So public sector relatively in India is relatively large, but its share, its contribution GDP or employment is decreasing gradually. Why? Because government is now privatizing more and more sectors like civil aviation, like financial services, telecom, etc. So earlier these were reserved actually. These have also reduced the share of public sector, even if there has not been exit of public sector. There is no as such exit is rare. Only few PSUs which government sold, like as I told you, some companies were altogether sold, like IPCL, Indian Petrochemicals Limited was sold to Reliance, VSNL was sold to Tata. So exit was rare actually. But why? Because private sector is growing. So public sector enterprise in India, PSU sale constitutes 17% of national sales, whereas constitute around 27% in China. Now still you can see, if we compare with China, PSU contribute to 17% only of national sales, national sales or turnover, whereas China with 27%. Public sector is not so large also, although it is relatively large, but it is not exceptionally large, and its share is coming down, not because PSUs are closed, rather private sector is growing. So this is also a proof that privatization is going on in the economy, and public sector is not unduly large. So there are sometimes actually criticism that public sector is so large and it is not desirable. So overall, this is not true. The public sector's actually role is decreasing relatively. Size of the government. India is often accused of bloated government. Government intervention is huge. Government is spending so much. This is not desirable. Government should reduce expenditure, reduce deficit. So, but if we consider government expenditure against per capita GDP, now government expenditure as compared to per capita GDP, India spends as much as can be expected given its level of development. So India's government expenditure is not much. Log GDP per capita. So GDP per capita and expenditure in GDP ratio. Now expenditure GDP ratio, India ka kitna hai? About 27% aega, 26%. So yesterday I told you already that this size of budget in India is how much? 13 करीब है, 26 करीब है, तो ये 26 आ गया, 27 13 का मतलब 12.7% एग्जैक्टली है, तो ओवरऑल सेंटर स्टेट का मिला के करीब 26 आ जाता है. अब ये लाइन ऑफ बेस्ट फिट है, मतलब ये कोरिलेशन लाइन. इट मींस दैट कि इंडिया इज अ आउटलायर और नॉट. इट मींस दैट कि नॉर्मली व्हाटएवर इज ऑन एन एवरेज ऑफ दिस साइज व्हिच इंडिया इज, इट मस्ट बी स्पेंडिंग सेम. अगर इस लाइन पर है, इसका मतलब है गवर्नमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर वर्ल्ड एवरेज के बराबर ही है. So there is this kind of execution कि government is spending significantly, or maybe we can say on alternate world is going beyond its means. This is not true. So it is on an average. Achha, normally if per capita GDP increases, usually government expenditure increases. Why? Any reason? Government income increases. Government income means tax revenue increases, because when people become well off, then people will give more taxes. When tax revenue increases, then government can afford to spend more, larger percentage of GDP. This usually happens. Okay, when per capita income increases in a country, government expenditure as a percentage of GDP also increases. Because let's suppose take an example of a poor country where everybody is poor, so tax revenue will be negligible. Then can government afford to spend much? No. So even in terms of GDP, it will be low. Clear? So overall government expenditure is not much. Achha, so almost this actually, so we are actually close to normal. Standard measure suggests that India is now a normal emerging market, pursuing the standard Asian development path, and has progressed well and has grown about 4.5% in per capita in 37 years. Achha, so India actually is not an outlier. In general, the growth of India followed the same pattern which some Asian countries followed actually by and large. And growth of per capita income has been quite high, 4.5% actually. They have given in the last 37 years. This achievement has been remarkable because India has achieved this under a fully democratic system. The only other countries that have grown as rapidly and been democratic for a considerable comparable portion of the boom are Italy, Japan, Israel, and Ireland. So only few countries achieve this while remaining democracy. Even in democracy there are some issues. Government has to compromise because of elections. Before election, usually government want to accelerate growth. Government want to like inflation growth trade-off. So there are some problems actually sometimes. Achha. They have discussed what is the situation of India. Like when we adopted reforms, how our outcome actually changed. So was it successful or not in general? Like they have measures parameters to what extent we have become open now. Next is road to be traversed. What need to be done now? What are problems? Which problem we have to overcome? So as I told you in chapter 1, 3 problems they have identified. Despite these achievements, there is a sense that India has not achieved a desirable and optimal point, which can be studied under 3 broad heads. So reluctance to embrace private sector. One problem, weak state capacity, inefficient redistribution. So 3 problems they have mentioned. First problem, reluctance to embrace private sector. Reluctance to embrace private sector. All societies, they have said that they have some kind of apprehensions about private sector. Obviously, why? Because private sector is motivated by self-interest and profit motive. So sometimes it does not have macroeconomic orientation. So that ambivalence is justified everywhere. But in India, it is somewhat more. They said that this kind of ambivalence is more in India. Achha, but ambivalence seems to be greater than elsewhere. So India mein zyada hai. Achha, the symptom of this ambivalence towards private sector manifests in multiple ways. The most well-known example is difficulty in privatizing public sector. So there are difficulties in privatizing public sector. So why actually apprehension is more in India, which is reflected by various things like civil aviation sector. Despite a lot of problems, and government want the public sector airline, Air India, as world-class airline. So government has to infuse funds. Government has to give a kind of bailout to Air India. So why not privatize it? They have said, why you are bearing burden of inefficient? Let them compete, and you should privatize them. Achha, similar spirit pervades with the policy approach banking sector. Discussions of disinvesting the government's majority stake in public sector bank is often difficult, in part because of the view that they are legitimate instruments for state to allocate and redirect resources. They have said that there are problems actually in privatizing banks. So government should reduce private sector majority stake in public sector banks. Often difficult. So, government should privatize. There are problems in privatizing banks, public sector banks. But is it desirable? No, I don't actually agree to this statement. There is no logic actually, because as I told you already, even which committee said it should be done? PJ Nayak committee said. But is it banks are actually, bank in itself, although some banks are designated as systemically important institution, but I'm saying that bank itself is a systematically important institution. The entire economic system is based on banks. So if bank will be privatized, then social objectives will be affected. Resource allocation to weaker sections, MSMEs, etc. would be affected. So one section of society, vulnerable section, will remain underserved actually. So I don't think there is any logic of privatizing banks. Although there are a lot of banks in private sector, lot of banks are there. Lot of banks are foreign banks are operating. RBI gave license to few banks, and RBI should give license to more banks. But why to abolish public sector banks? They are in private sector. Yes, policies are same. You mean to say if PSL requirement is there, then why there is a need for public sector bank? Do you agree? Still, as I told you already, you just go to a public sector bank, public and private sector bank. Can you see the difference here? Very poor people you will find in public sector bank. Hardly you find in private sector banks. The people who are in much actually lower income groups, you hardly find in private sector banks. They are still serving. But what in PSL, whatever on paper they require, they will lend only that amount which they have to lend to this sector. And they have to give loan to farmers. They will be finding rich farmers. Although there is a sub, you can say quota, out of 18, 8% should go to marginal small farmers. But still they will find relatively better of marginal farmers. So loopholes are there. So practically social objectives will be compromised.
Had it been the case, the NPA situation would have been forced because
Even NPA may or may not be there. And you know, if banks might be in private sector and NPA situation would have been so high, then there may be chance of default and situation would have worsened in India. So it should have given crisis. And banks are always very important. You know, in America, crisis started why? Because of only failure of banks. Recession set in the entire economy. If a particular industry, maybe textile industry, civil aviation industry might have suffered loss, would it have led to recession in America? No. But banks are itself very important. Every company is based on bank finance.
there must be some logic behind this.
You know, economics is not a pure science. There are actually economists, there are variation among economists. So some economists say this is desirable, others say it is not desirable. So there's no consensus among economists.
But he said that NP situation would have aggravated had it been not in the private sector, public sector.
Yes, this is the
contradictory.
no. This is a fact. That public sector NPAs are more in public sector, so it means that they are not so professional. They are not so professional. So that is actually an argument in favor of this. But I'm saying that other aspect is more important. Social objective. Ultimate objective is social welfare. This is my view. I'm saying this is my view. That it is not desirable what they have said. That they have criticized this thing. Even PGNI committee said this thing only. So economics view may vary actually, but I think it is not desirable thing. I'm not saying that RBI should not give license to private banks. RBI should give more license to more and more private sector banks because still bank penetration is low actually. Like one bank branch serving population, or like the huge population is served by one bank branch or one ATM. So there's significant need for giving license to more banks. But government should lead in public sector because it is crucial for the social objectives. There may be consolidation that is rather desirable. That will improve efficiency, like it happened in case of for example, SBI. So that is okay. Similar regarding this, fertilizer sector rife with distortions. Public policy finds easier to rehabilitate public sector plans than to facilitate exit of egregiously inefficient ones. You know, public sector consistently they are incurring loss. In fertilizer sector there is problem. So but government is giving them consistent support. Like I told you, like in retention price scheme actually is the root cause. Where government said whatever is cost we will reimburse, give you 12% profit plus whatever is your cost. So government gave actually rather incentive to remain inefficient. So that was a problem obviously. So that have to be rectified. Another is right of to property. They've also mentioned this earlier it was a fundamental right, but later actually it was made a legal right only. So it has repercussions like government did even retrospective taxation because of that. So it is not desirable right. Private property right should be made as a fundamental right. Here also there is a matter of debate whether it is a fundamental right or should be just a legal right. So because of this thing it said there are chances of retrospective taxation because it is not a fundamental right. So this is one problem regarding which is related to which is related to this ambivalence about private sector. So we are not relying on private sector. Second is weak state capacity. So Indian economic model is characterized by weakness of state capacity, especially in delivering essential services such as health and education. Indian state capacity has not been has not increased as these emerging countries. Now, if we see expenditure on health and expenditure, what is percentage of GDP? How much government is spending on health, on education first?
1.5.
On education कितना government कर रही है?
1.5
कितना है education पे अभी? 2% करीब है, 2 करीब है, और health पे 1.4 करीब है, 1.45 करीब है. So it is quite low. Like in other countries, the expenditure on health education is much higher as compared to India. अच्छा, Indian state has low capacity with high levels of corruption, clientelism, rules and red tape. Through Indian competitive federalism has force on attracting investment. So in India, actually, corruption etc. is much more. So this is another problem actually. Corruption etc. Competitive populism. Actually, they have used the word competitive populism. Focus on attracting investment and competitive populism. What is competitive populism? Populist measures. Like one state government give one freebies, then other state government offer higher, better freebies actually. So that is competitive populism. Acha, not focus on much issue essential services delivery, especially in health and education sector, except for few exceptions. Acha, they have said there are some few exceptions. Exceptions like Chhattisgarh, PDS reform in Chhattisgarh, kerosene free drive in Haryana, and power sector reforms in Gujarat. So in some states, actually some achievement, actually some things have been improved. So, but those are exceptions. But in general, government's efficiency had been low in delivering services to people, basic services to people. Achha, this weak state capacities created various problems like it inhibits effective service delivery and constrained policy making in certain areas. As state do not want to seem as favoring particular interest. Achha, it has further created problems like strict adherence to rules. Means like auctioning, for example, be optimal public policy. Auctioning cannot always be optimal policy for selling all national resources and abundant precaution to extent reluctance to bureaucratic decision making. अच्छा, 4 C's का एक fear है. 4 C's क्या है? CBI, CVC, CAG and court. So actually public servants, they are fearful. So they are actually reluctant to take bold decisions. They are reluctant to take responsibility for any action. So they postpone that thing. They actually, so these are the main problems which actually means lead to compromise in effectiveness of government's developmental programs. अच्छा, इसमें जैसे auction के they have said कि like there was some corruption in auctioning of 2G, like 2G auction. So now government said now it should be auction only. But auction may not always be desirable. Why? Because if you give this permission or license to a company which will pay highest license fee, from where that company will recover? From public. So it may increase cost. So it is not, auctioning may not always be desirable. So these are some constraints actually. Achha, so regarding state capacity in India remain low. Achha, another is inefficient distribution. As I told you, they have shown this thing like population area where having actually more poor, they have got less allocation, and there is shortage of funds, as I told you already. Achha, there are 3 types of errors they have said. One is exclusion error. Exclusion error means that deserving poor not receiving benefits. Some poor are excluded. Another is inclusion errors. Non-poor receiving large share of benefits. Like some non-poors, they have this BPL card or Antyodaya card, and they are buying at much subsidized price, the well of people. Other is leakages. Leakages means the money is siphoned off. Corruption, inefficiency, the quota holder or some public servants, they misappropriate funds. So these are the main problem. Exclusion errors, inclusion errors, and leakages. Achha, UBI will eliminate which error? UBI will eliminate first, second, third, all. First will be removed by exclusion. Nobody is excluded. So ये तो खत्म ही हो गया. मतलब no poor at least will be excluded or nobody will be excluded. Universal होगा. This will be eliminated. This error will be eliminated or not? ये error बढ़ जाएगा. Because value will be included in that benefit. Although they have said कि 25% value will be exempted. तो ये बढ़ जाएगा. But which is more serious error? First or second? First is more serious because here poor person will become vulnerable, maybe hungry. But यहाँ पे क्या है? It will impose an additional burden on government. So this first is more serious. So this will be eliminated, but this error would increase by UBI. What about this error? Eliminate हो जाएगा क्योंकि ये तो DBT है ना, directly transferred in the account, so there will not be middleman. So this will eliminate. Okay, so inefficient distribution, as we have discussed in that diagram also. So these are the three problems they have mentioned. Now, what may be reasons? What maybe they have find out some probable reasons. What might be the reasons for these problems? One is that India has followed a unique pathway to economic success, which explains these anomalies. Indian economic progress was achieved by simultaneously to political progress. They said that in India, democracy actually preceded development. In other countries, actually, there was no universal franchise. So voting in India, we assigned voting power to population from the very beginning when we were much underdeveloped. But in other countries, in most of the countries, democracy was actually established in a much later phase. So, when we achieve democracy in the very underdeveloped stage, then demands on state increased. Demand on government increased. So, we have achieved democracy at much earlier stage. So this is one problem. The universal franchise and other political rights put extra demand on low economically developed Indian state, whereas such demands were not present in authoritarian states or such state will benefit from industrialization. Clear? तो एक तो early stage पे हमने democracy adopt कर ली, तो उससे demand increase on state. अच्छा, अब demand किसकी होती है? Like subsidy etc. So there are two types of expenditures by government. One is actually on redistribution. Other is on social services or developmental expenditure. Redistribution means like on subsidies and providing some subsidized products. And second is developmental expenditure like basic services education. Now the thing is that there is a direct demand will be for vote. किसके लिए होगी exactly? Direct किसके लिए होगी? Subsidies के लिए redistribution की ज़्यादा होगी या services की ज़्यादा होगी? Redistribution direct मिलेगा benefit. और जो वो है education health है वो indirect मिलेगा और ज़्यादा larger section को मिलेगा. तो जो डिमांड ज्यादा किसकी होगी? रीडिस्ट्रीब्यूशन की. तो जब गवर्नमेंट हैज टू स्पेंड मच मोर ऑन रीडिस्ट्रीब्यूशन, देन इट मींस दैट के सम सोशल सर्विसेज और डेवलपमेंटल एक्सपेंडिचर इज कॉम्प्रोमाइज. अच्छा, तो दे हैव गिवन दिस प्रिकॉशंस डेमोक्रेसी ईयर्स परसेंटेज ईयर्स डेमोक्रेसी सिंस इंडिपेंडेंस. तो इंडिया में तो फ्रॉम इंडिपेंडेंस टिल नाउ देयर इज डेमोक्रेसी 1 है ये. अच्छा, ये पॉइंट में 0.8, 0.6, 0.4. अच्छा, you can see that India has been a democracy from the from the independence itself. अच्छा, per capita GDP. हाँ, तो you can see that per capita GDP although has been low in India, but democracy actually consistently there was a democracy and quite functioning effective democracy was there in India. So they have said like in other countries you can see that they are relatively higher or equal in per capita income, but they fall back on democracy, and rather it was adopted at later stage. In India, democracy was established immediately from independence until now. So level of democracy we are much higher, but overall level of development so early burden was there. One is early burden. Second, along with this highly divided society with more cleavages than any other society, like language and scripts, religion, caste, so region, religion, caste, gender, and class. So all these are divisions are there. So this has created one problem. Acha, other is India adopting redistribution early in development process. Acha, so which we have discussed already. Low investment in human capital. Acha, obviously government has to spend more on subsidies etc. Then expenditure on education, health will be affected. So on human capital will remain low. Acha. And the thing is that which is having more externalities, redistribution or the social services, general service, because they enhance capability of people to earn. So that remained low. Acha. Another is that failure to exit is difficulty everywhere, but it is especially difficult in poor cleavage democracy society. अब इंडिया में exit की problem है, मतलब as we have discussed already it is difficult to shut down business. तो exit क्यों हुई है? यहाँ पे उन्होंने कहा कि in last year's economic survey, last year there was a chapter on this exit. No, rather last year's economic survey. So in that they have said that there are 3 I are there. One is vested interest, weak institutions, and ideology. अच्छा, vested interest in the sense कि like companies like for example public sector, they are inefficient, they want to remain protection because they know कि if the protection will not be given, they will not be able to compete. So vested interests are there to retain. Second, weak institutions. Some institutions are weak, like for example DRTs are weak, so there is long run process. Earlier BIFR was there, which was very weak institution. Some weak institutions. Acha, and ideology that public sector should persist and should be providing almost all services. So this actually there's opposition from some parties ke no, government should retain. So these 3 I they said are the interest, institutions and ideology. These are the things which actually restrict exit. अच्छा, here exit का मतलब 2 तरह से मीनिंग है. One exit का मतलब है कि to shut down business. Second exit का मतलब है exit of government from economic activities. So here they are focusing on exit of government from economic activities. Like government is actually supporting the inefficient fertilizer units, inefficient airline and other actually sectors government is persisting. So it means exit of government. यहाँ पे they are actually talking about exit of government. So exit can be seen in both the context. अच्छा, normally state provide essential services like health first before they take on redistribution role. But India में क्या हुआ? Opposite हुआ. Because of this reason we have discussed. अच्छा, उसका repercussion क्या हुआ कि it lead to exit of middle class. Middle class seek to exit from state, which is reflected in lower number of taxpayers related to voting age population. अब उससे क्या हुआ? Middle class exit हो gaya. क्यों? Because middle class in like in developed countries people say कि like even the people who are working Indian people, so people have told me कि when in America we are actually paying almost 1/3 of our income, but it doesn't pinch. So why it doesn't pinch? They said कि government gives lot of services. We know कि government is giving lot of freebies actually, very good quality of health, educational and lot of other services, infrastructure. So it doesn't pinch कि we are getting so much. But here कि middle class doesn't get something from government in general. Like usually the lower middle class may visit government hospital, government school, but even in general middle class don't prefer government hospitals, government schools or other services. So middle class say I'm paying something, I'm not getting anything. Achha, if higher class, obviously if middle class is not getting, so higher class will avail government services. No, it is meaningless for higher class. So and who will pay taxes? The upper middle class and higher class, they are not getting anything, so they exit. That is why low tax GDP ratio, low tax, narrow tax base. So this is the reason. कि middle class think that what we are not benefiting anything. So why we pay? It is just a wastage of money. What the point? If government may be giving the services, health, education services, then it would have encouraged people to pay taxes honestly. That is why they said about 7% people are paying tax. The adult population is paying tax. So this is exit of middle class. Achha, these are possible explanations they have given. So these are the reasons for this. So India has become a long way in terms of economic performance and reform, but there is still a journey ahead to achieve both dynamism and social justice. One tentative conclusion is that completing this journey will require a further evolution in underlying economic vision across political spectrum, which would focus on improving, मतलब यही चीज है कि state capacity, trusting private sector and improving redistribution delivery. So overall, we have to overcome these problems. So they have focused on these are the problems and why these problems happened. So these have to be rectified to achieve full potential of India's growth. Because potential, they have said कि about 8 to 10% we have potential to grow. Okay, so this is regarding policy. Okay, now next we'll take another chapter, that is third chapter. That is demonetization. Achha, we have discussed already few issues in demonetization. Achha, demonetization, कि on 8th November, Prime Minister announced that 500 rupee and 1000 rupee note will no longer be legal tender from midnight of 9th November 2016, and whosoever is having this money has to deposit in bank by 30th of December. Achha, so demonetization is a very important and major, actually one of the important reforms. So as we discussed some briefly, actually on 8th November it was announced and was having actually significant impact. Achha, so we have discussed already that the government announced that fourfold actually impact will be there. It will reduce corruption. Corruption will, the impact of demonetization will not be directly on corruption. Indirectly, it will have. Because actually, as I told you, benefit of demonetization is that it will eliminate stock of flow, stock of black money. It will not affect directly the flow of this black money or corruption will not reduce. Achha, counterfeit currency certainly will be eliminated because they will not counterfeit currency, curbing financing of terrorist activities to some extent because some black money would be held with terrorists, etc. So, but not major. Achha, accumulation of black money generated by income that has not been declared to tax authorities. So it will curb accumulation to some extent because people will be penalized actually. So these are the objectives. Achha, apart from demonetization, to check these illicit activities and black money and other illegal money, what government did? government creation of a special investigation team in 2014. So SIT was set up. Who is chairman of SIT? Justice M.B. Shah. So Justice M.B. Shah actually is chairman of this. So these are actually efforts what government did. Achha, Black Money Act 2015. What is that? This act we have discussed already. Foreign income and assets, imposition of tax Act 2015. So if anybody is means if you are holding assets or income having income of more than 5 lakh outside country, so then you have to file income tax returns in India now. It is compulsory. And if somebody has evaded tax in respect of foreign property, what is tax rate? If let's suppose somebody is having assets abroad, any Indian resident is having assets abroad, and that person evaded tax on that, tax rate will be 30 and penalty will be 90%, 3 times of that, so 120% tax rate, plus imprisonment up to 7 or in some cases up to 10 years. So this is Black Money Act. Achha, Benami Transactions Act we have discussed 2016. So earlier we have a Benami Transactions Prohibition Act 1988. Achha, but that act was amended only, not a new act. But so here the scope of definition actually of Benami widened actually. Punishment increased actually for Benami transaction, and the system to inquire this Benami property etc. has created. Means one will be initiating officer, other approving officer, other will be adjudicating authority like this court. Apart from that, appellate tribunal will be there. Apart from that, one administrator who will take over that property and manage that property. So a system is created so that Benami property could be properly investigated and punishment etc. increase in this act. Information exchange agreement with Switzerland. With Switzerland, we have discussed means like information about bank accounts held by Indians has to be provided to Government of India. So from 2012 onwards, that information is being provided. Changes tax treaties with Mauritius, Cyprus, and also with Singapore. So as we have discussed, amendment in DTA, limitation of benefit clause has been introduced now. So only those companies which are doing actual genuine business will give benefit to them. Like how much should be investment in Mauritius for taking benefit of this? Minimum investment in last 12 months. 27 lakh should be the investment. Apart from that, capital gains tax will be paid now in India. Income disclosure scheme IDS. So how much is the effective tax rate overall? 30 plus 15, 45% IDS. Though economic survey has said that this is a radical governance come social engineering measure. Governance comes social engineering measure. Social engineering in the sense that it is a measure to reduce inequality. Would it reduce inequality? Yes, because rich people will lose money, and that money, the purchasing power will be provided to poor people. So secrecy, and they said that it is actually rare that the government adopted with secrecy and suddenness, means actually abruptly it is announced. But earlier in most of the countries, it was adopted demonetization in hyperinflation or wars or political evils. So in India, actually in normal times when Indian economy was growing at very fast pace, at that time government announced that. So it is very much different from it is actually consciously announced with actually planning how to tackle this check black money, corruption, etc. So they have said that here it is somewhat different from what it was announced earlier. In India, it was announced twice earlier, when in 1946 and in 1978. Demonetizations are of 2 types. One is it is announced abruptly. Other which is announced already that after 3 years we'll do this thing. So what is objective of this abrupt announcement? To check black money. And why it is done means pre-announced. Like for example, Euro. Means when any country adopted Euro, means became part of Eurozone, then that country has to change currency. So that is also demonetization. The currency has to be exchanged with Euro. Domestic currency will no longer. So that is pre-announced actually. So because of policy. Sometimes there may be some problem like in hyperinflation. So usually currency has to be changed. So as a measure, so in India in normal times we adopted this, and it was actually abrupt. Now focus is to check black money, corruption, etc. Okay, so global financial crisis, advanced economies use monetary policy to stimulate growth. They have said that in global financial crisis we have discussed that developed countries used expansionary monetary policies like quantitative easing and very low interest, sometimes negative interest to stimulate growth. So it is actually they have used the word helicopter drops. Helicopter drops means what? They have actually, it's a kind of artificial, you can say, support. Like if there is no rain, then we may drop water through helicopter. like some additional support, like some kind of excessive increasing means money supply by unconventional method is a kind of helicopter drop, means something additional which was put to economy. Clear? But here it is opposite of that. In developed countries, to stimulate growth, they actually infuse money, and here demonetization, it sucked out money from economy. So it is actually like a Hoover. Hoover means like a vacuum cleaner. So it has sucked out money from economy. So it is like helicopter Hoover. So reverse helicopter drop, and it is actually impact was that of helicopter Hoover. Okay, it has actually sucked out money. It is opposite of what developed countries did. Just they have made a comparison with that. Acha, background facts. India's currency GDP ratio is very high, 12%. Currency GDP ratio means how much is currency in circulation. Currency in circulation divided by GDP multiply by 100, it is 12%. For example, you know how much is currency in circulation. I told you M0 is about 22 lakh crore. So, but entire will not be. M0 is currency in circulation plus reserves of bank. So major part is actually currency in circulation. So maybe 20 lakh crore approximately hogi. And GDP is about 150 lakh crore. So overall it will be about 12% of GDP. Means currency in circulation divided by GDP multiplied by 100. Achha, it is much higher. In other countries, you know, it is much less. And out of that total currency in circulation, the 500, 1000 rupee note constitute of what percentage?
87.
86%. 86% of the total currency circulation was contributed by these notes. So this, it means that huge 86% of the total currency circulation was withdrawn immediately. So that is why it was having a huge effect. Achha, currency circulation ratio is very high already. Indian economy is literally cash dependent. Actually, the cash transactions are much more actually. Achha, but they have said that there is a link between cash and nefarious activities. Like when Transparency International also find out that if the cash transactions are more, then more the level of corruption is usually higher in general. Illegal activities, because it is possible to hide a transaction. It is up to you to report or not to report a transaction. But if a transaction through bank, then government would know whatever transactions happen. So there is some link in nefarious activities. Achha, so Transparency International. Achha, in this, actually reduction of cash actually will have impact on reducing corruption level. Achha, another reason why it shows that there is a hoarding of black money. There is a concept called soil rate. Soil rate means that after how much time actually note have to be replaced, because you know notes are torn or soiled, so they have to be replaced. So the rate of actually soil rate is 33% in case of lower denomination currency, 22% in 500 rupee note, and 11% in 1000 note. Why? If a soiling rate is less, in let's suppose 1000 rupee note, just 11%. So if it is soiling less, it means that it is using more frequently, less frequently. Less frequently. Iska matlab it is hoarded. Means people are keeping. So soil rate means is that if notes are not used, so they will not soil, they will not be replaced earlier. So it shows, it is a kind of proof that soil rate of higher denomination currency is much lower as compared to this. मतलब ये इसका double है 500 का, 500 से ये उसका भी उतना ही ज़्यादा है. So this is significant. So it shows that some money is hoarded. Some people are holding black money in this 500, 1000 rupee note. It is not being used so much. So this is also one reason which give a proof. But is it a very important proof? No. But here what they have actually missed is that in general, if you have 1000 rupee note and 100 rupee note, would you use them with equal frequency? Obviously, the 1000 rupee note would be used very rarely. 100 rupee, 10 rupee note will be very frequently used. So even rate of soiling has to be higher in case of smaller denomination currency or not, even if there is no hoarding of black money. So this analysis has actually ignored that thing. Okay, in general, smaller denomination coin notes actually have to be used with more frequently. So this soiling rate has to be always lower in case of higher denomination currency. Always will be higher or not? Always higher. And that is a kind of mistake which government did here in this assessment. Government estimated that it will be almost 10 to 20% black money. But how much actually money was not returned? Hardly 3%. So, but we don't have exact data from RBI. But overall, the estimate is about 97% money returned. So this is one actually logic which actually will lead to overemphasis of how much black money is kept in cash. Because usually people keep in gold or property because that will grow. Cash will not grow. There is no benefit in keeping cash actually much. So got the point here? So they have given this argument, but they have missed this thing. Okay? In general, always a smaller denomination currency will be used more frequently everywhere in the world. So soiling rate has to be high. So they have not mistaken a normal with that. Acha. For this, they estimated this much 7.3 lakh crore rupees would be the black money. Acha. Analytics, they have given analysis. Okay, understanding this, there are three things in analysis: money supply, contraction, but also one-time money. Here it will reduce money supply, but only one money, that is cash. But the problem is that major transactions are in cash. So means digital transactions are very limited. So overall, they have reduced one type of money, but that is the predominant money. So it had a significant impact. This is the reason. Tax on unaccounted private wealth maintained in the form of cash or black money. So it is a kind of tax. Yes, it is a kind of tax because people have to go to bank to convert, and if they have black money, they cannot go. They have to pay some conversion charge, etc., commission, or under this Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, etc., they have to convert. So they have to pay a tax as such. Achha, tax on savings outside formal financial system. So it is a tax on savings which are outside formal financial system, means which are in cash. Achha, so here cash to GDP ratio versus per capita GNI. Achha, what is trend? It is per capita GNI, and here cash to GDP ratio. Here this line is slightly increasing. It means that initially when the per capita income will increase, then cash to GDP ratio slightly increases, almost remains stagnant or slightly increases. But later stages, what happened? Formalization increases. Because people start using credit card, etc. Like initially, hardly most of the people don't have bank account, etc. Banking facilities are less. So in general, this is the broad trend. This is the global trend overall. So normally, actually, if we are using more currency even now, it means that this is showing some kind of backwardness to some extent. So it means that we have to, gradually we have to increase. And if government can consciously increase, there are a lot of benefits of that. Achha, another is that cash to GDP ratio and corruption. So this is as per Transparency International World Development Indicators. So as per Transparency International, this corruption index, and here cash to GDP ratio. So like the countries where cash to GDP ratio means where corruption is high, so tax to currency to cash to GDP ratio is high. The upward line का मतलब क्या है कि when actually currency to GDP ratio is low, then corruption will be low. So as per Transparency International also. Achha, but in India is an outlier. Here, with reference to its corruption level, cash to GDP ratio is more. It means that if this will reduce, chances are that ke corruption will reduce. मतलब ऊपर रहना better है, नीचे रहना. What is better? To have above this line or below this line? Which is better? Above better है. Above का मतलब same level of corruption में corruption तो इतना ही है. Cash is more. It means that as per this standard, if we can reduce cash, it will reduce scope of corruption. तो cash reduce होगा तो यहाँ आएंगे हम. तो above is better. What the above shows potential कि if cash to GDP ratio will reduce, corruption will reduce more. अच्छा, अगर हमारे ये कम होता तो corruption scope कम करने का chance इससे नहीं होता. Now reducing cash will reduce corruption. अगर ये यहाँ होता तो scope होता नहीं. corruption जो है वो है होता. मतलब with the same level of corruption, we would not be having option to reduce corruption by reducing cash. Now there is a scope of reducing corruption by reducing cash because it is on higher side. So it shows that this measure can be effective. Clear? क्योंकि ये correlation है. जब cash कम होगा तो corruption थोड़ा सा कम होता है. तो cash already बहुत है तो scope है. अगर होता ही कम तो फिर scope नहीं होता ही. Cash ज़्यादा इसलिए scope है. Cashless economy का benefit. अच्छा, तो they've means compared impact actually. One is impact through December end, मतलब immediate impact है, और ये likely long term impact. अच्छा, तो cash money interest rate. Cash declined sharply, obviously, and cash will recover, obviously. Bank deposit increased sharply, but bank deposit will decline, but probably settle at higher level. Yes, because when money will go to bank, people will not withdraw exact entire money. At least the currency, the deposit and currency ratio will increase. So deposit to currency ratio will increase, or otherwise currency to deposit ratio will decrease. Now people will be holding more deposit as compared to currency. So this will have benefits, because then actually when people will be holding less currency, then bank lending may increase to that extent. To what it will happen. So how much bank lending will reduce or interest rate may come down will depend on this thing, how much people will be keeping in currency, how much they reduce currency. If they will reduce currency, then other type of money, there are two types of money: currency, cash, and deposit money. So here currency will reduce, deposit money will increase. Now how much it will happen? It will depend how much bank can lend more. Acha, bank lending will increase, investment etc. will increase, interest rate may come down. But the benefit will depend on that, to what extent people will be holding more bank deposit vis-a-vis currency. Acha, RBI balance sheet largely unchanged. Acha, here RBI balance sheet will shrink after deadline for redeeming outstanding notes. Now RBI balance sheet will shrink because currency is a liability of central bank. So when currency will be destroyed, then RBI's liability will be reduced. So RBI's actually liability will reduce. So this is very important, but this will depend on which thing?
Black money,
how much black money is destroyed. What the point? So the overall, if we see the benefits of demonetization arises from two facts. One most important fact is that how much money is destroyed. More money destroyed, as I told you, what would happen? Then if let's suppose maybe 20% money would have destroyed, like would not have come back to bank, then everybody's purchasing power would have increased. Yes or no? Acha, some government can spend money. So government can spend for welfare scheme etc. without inflationary. Bank can lend more and RBI may reduce interest. So it will promote investment. So one thing, two things are crucial for benefits. One is that how much money destroyed. But this benefit practically didn't happen much. Negligible. 3% was destroyed. And whatever was destroyed, it should not be in active circulation. Yes or no? So practically that benefit will be negligible. Yes or no? Because not much black money destroyed. This benefit certainly will happen. Now a time will tell how much. So because when people will keep, like you can keep your money in two forms, in cash and bank deposit. If you now obviously once money you have deposited in bank, so you will not withdraw the entire money. Maybe let us suppose 80% people were keeping cash, 20 in bank account. Let's suppose now instead of 20% bank deposit, now people may be keeping 30% now. So if people will keep more, so it means that now whatever is reduction of demand due to cash, that will be compensated by bank lending. So interest rate may come down to some extent. So another benefit will depend on that, how much it will settle. So these are the two base where the direct benefits actually arise. Direct benefits arise. Achha, loan rates fall further. Much of the deposit increase prove durable. Achha, I told you this thing. What they have said here, loan rate would could fall further if much of the deposit increase durable है कि जैसे पहले 20% लोग रख रहे थे, अब 30% रखेंगे, तो उतना ही वो लैंडिंग बढ़ेगा, इंटरेस्ट कम होगा. गॉट द पॉइंट है. अच्छा, और ये जो लायबिलिटी आरबीआई की खत्म होगी, जो चीज सबसे कोर बेनिफिट है, that depends on how much currency was destroyed. So that was negligible. अब we have to see कि ये कितना बेनिफिट होता है. गॉट द पॉइंट. तो जो इंटरेस्ट लैंडिंग और इंटरेस्ट कम होगा, that depends on this magnitude. अच्छा, फाइनेंशियल सिस्टम फाइनेंशियल सेविंग तो इंक्रीज होगी, इंक्रीज टू द एक्सटेंट टू विच कैश डिपॉजिट रेशियो विल फॉल परमानेंटली. वो सेम चीज है कि जितना कैश डिपॉजिट रेशियो जितना कम होगा, मतलब कैश कम करके लोग डिपॉजिट ज्यादा रखेंगे, उतना ही ज्यादा फाइनेंशियल सेविंग बढ़ेगी. दैट विल मोबिलाइज फॉर कैपिटल फॉर्मेशन. करप्शन कुड डिक्लाइन इफ इंसेंटिव्स फॉर कंप्लायंस इंप्रूव. तो करप्शन कुड डिक्लाइन, बट अब देयर इज नो डायरेक्ट इंपैक्ट ऑन करप्शन. Indirectly it will affect. Like if cashless economy will reduce, then chance of corruption will reduce. So to some extent, but would it directly there will not be any impact on corruption, because ये flow को खत्म नहीं करेगा, ये stock को खत्म करेगा. Indirectly it may happen. Like government is actually now, companies may not be evading taxes, corruption, so वो भी, so it will reduce the scope of that thing. The chance of being caught is more. Now government is more serious about this. So indirectly people may be afraid of doing corruption. Indirectly it would have effect, not directly. Theoretically कोई डायरेक्ट इफेक्ट नहीं होगा करप्शन पे. Unaccounted income, stock of black money fall, some holders come under tax net. Yes. So formalization should reduce the flow of unaccounted money. So formalization comes the digital transactions, so will reduce the chance of tax evasion in long run. अच्छा, tax evasion immediately it affected, because especially indirect tax revenue increased. Why? because when money will come through banking channel, people cannot hide, the businessmen cannot hide, they have to pay tax. And certainly it will promote, it has already promoted cash movement towards cashless economy, less cash economy. So it is benefited this thing. Private wealth decline होगी because value of property etc will come down, especially house property. Wealth could fall further if real estate prices continue to decline. So overall, to some extent, real estate prices are expected to remain low. So this is one important benefit, is that affordable housing will be available to middle class. This is very important benefit. Private sector wealth, no effect. Public sector wealth, no effect. Government, RBI, wealth will increase to the unreturned cash, extinguished, reducing liability. So as I told you, it depends on how much money was extinguished, but not much, about 3% extinguished. So it will not have major impact, just 3% will reduce approximately. Formalization, digitalization. Yes, digitalization, now you can see immediately when people did not have cash, they started using other means like Paytm, like e-wallets and other. But immediately, because there was no action. But overall, gradually it will increase or not. Once you have downloaded a particular app, or you have put some money in your e-wallet, you may be using it, not to that extent, but at least it will give boost. So some return to cash as supply normalize. But the now launched digital revolution will continue. Yes, it will have, without any doubt, cashless economy is much beneficial, as we discussed. So it will promote cashless economy. It is one way. But cashless economy could be promoted without demonetization. Yes. But it has given a thrust to this move, and that will continue now. Real estate sector, as we discussed, prices decline. Price could fall. Long run wala zyada important hai. Ye to usi time ka tha. Price could fall further as increasing decline income and real estate become more difficult. But tax compliance could rise if GST implemented this. So this is actually how real price sector will decrease, and if GST will cover, then further it will improve tax compliance and it will check underreporting. Broader economy, job losses, decline in income, wo to temporary tha. Should gradually stabilize as economy is remonetized. So it will have no impact. Though there will not be any negative impact in the long run. At the most 1 quarter, 2 quarter or 3 quarter, minor impact second, third quarter भी रहेगा, but अब तो नहीं रहेगा इसका impact. तो long run में कोई negative impact नहीं होगा. GDP growth slowed वहाँ पे तो हुई, यहाँ पे could be benefited in the long run if formalization increases and corruption falls. तो long run में formalization will increase, tax revenue will increase, and overall formalization का मतलब है higher GDP will be reported. Some cash transactions are not accounted also. So GDP will increase in actual sense to some extent and may increase in accounting sense also. Because then unaccounted जो रहता था वो account में आने लगेगा जब cashless economy बढ़ेगी. And next is informal output could decline, but recorded GDP would increase. वो same thing which I told you. Recorded GDP increase होगी क्योंकि जब because lot of economic transactions are there which are unaccounted, so that will also reduce. Unaccounted will reduce. So GDP will increase in two ways. One is that this corruption etc will reduce, formalization will be there, so it will give some boost to actual production in long run gradually. And the second thing is that lot of unaccounted things will become accounted, so more things will be counted. So underreporting will be checked to some extent. So GDP will increase in two ways. But पहला वाला जो real increase है वो minor होगा कि corruption कितना कम होता है, tax revenue से कितना effect पड़ता है formalization से, that will be minor. Second will be more important rather कि जो unaccounted accounted होगी, that will be impact on GDP. Now tax authorities, income tax rose because of increased disclosure. And they were allowed to pay tax in old currency. That is why increase. But in long run, indirect corporate tax could decline. Indirect and corporate taxes could decline if extent growth slows. If growth slows, but usually in long run, there will not be any negative impact on growth. Long run का मतलब है कि now we cannot expect any negative impact on growth. Long run taxes should increase in formalization compound. Yes. So the most important benefit will be कि cash taxes will increase. The reason is because of mainly cashless economy. मतलब वो जो basically यहाँ पे mix कर दिया है benefit को. ये most of the benefits are that of cashless economy. जो main benefits which are supposed to be there because of that demonetization वो हुए नहीं. तो focus is on this. So यहाँ पे mix कर दिया है. Without any doubt, cash का the level of cash is much more in India. That is why there is significant scope of exploiting the potential of reducing cash. उसके uncertainty, तो initially तो uncertainty थी but credibility will be strengthened if demonetization is accompanied by complementary measures, early and full remonetization. So this is the impact. That was this. Achha, so here whatever we have discussed, they have mentioned almost same thing in this table. Tax on black money. Achha, it will be a tax because they have to pay penalty on penalty rate of tax. Achha, and they have to launder black money or they have to pay conversion fee. मतलब converting fee का मतलब है कि they have to pay bribe to bank officials to convert old into new currency. Sometimes they have to pay money to people to stand in line, deposit in your own account and then give us money. So they have to pay some penalty, like in Jan Dhan accounts, lot of money was deposited because of that. Apart from that, some of them will disclose it under IDS. Achha, there are some other things like some people paid salary to employees in advance. जैसे अपने employees को advance दे दी old currency में कि okay, you can deposit, no problem, we cannot deposit. So there are some means which are used, but there is additional cost or not. And there was additional cost. Some people deposit money in accounts when okay, you can return whenever you want. You can take this money and you can return whenever you want. So it means that people who were having unaccounted money, they have to pay some penalty or tax. This was one advantage. Achha, paying intermediaries to convert, as we discussed. Despite these, demonetization provided following benefits. Achha, what are they have mentioned benefits? Substantial suffered. Achha, the holding black money suffered loss. Achha, in taxes, conversion fee, risk, punitive taxes, etc. Achha, other thing is that prosecutions, etc. Extinguish RBI liability we discussed. जो currency जो है as a liability वो खत्म हो जाएगी RBI liability. Government. Achha, what government can do? If government's liability currency will reduce, now what government can do? Government can print money to repay public debt. So government debt could be reduced. Recapitalize bank. Government can use that money for. Government may even print money to give it to bank. So it will not increase inflation in the economy because money will be withdrawn. And redistribute black to private sector. Government can redistribute to private sector, like government can spend on welfare schemes, like subsidies may be increased or on anything government may increase expenditure. So but अब ये depend किस पे करेगा? How much money black money destroyed. So अच्छा, next is tax compliance will increase. State resolved to crack down on black money. अभी क्या कि income tax, now companies are more vigilant actually. They are thinking, you know, we have to do less manipulation in accounts because the chance of being caught is high. So it has created a deterrence actually. So indirectly benefit hai. And if cashless transactions will be there, then obviously those will be recorded. Achha, and it will lead to behavioral change in people also. People like this thing, like there is a thing, there's something wrong with corruption. So people will realize, and even companies will, the risk has increased now in doing this. It means now these are indirect benefit on how corruption will reduce, how tax evasion will reduce. So it will lead to behavioral change. Achha, demonetization, formal payment system will increase and it will help GDP growth as we discussed already. Achha, more savings in financial system will be mobilized for capital formation. So अच्छा, ये financial inclusion का भी benefit है कि it will digitalization means everybody will have access to financial services, and there is reduced equilibrium cash GDP ratio, which we have discussed already. कि equilibrium cash GDP ratio के people will keep less cash and more bank deposits. अच्छा, tax on informal savings, so almost same thing which we discussed. अच्छा, the benefit of this will be lower loans, more loans at lower rate of interest. अच्छा, now early evidence for potential long-term benefit. Now, one benefit is digitalization. We have discussed already. A lot of measures were taken, and the overall digital transactions have increased significantly. Although they are expected to come back if government would not have pursued. Now, government is giving a lot of incentives. Government set up this Vatal committee, actually Ratan Vatal committee, and a lot of measures were taken to promote cashless economy. Government is making it easier, reducing charges in using cashless transactions, making the machines, etc., devices affordable. So a lot of measures were taken. As per Ratan Vatal committee, cash accounts for 78% of all consumer payments. So in India, almost 78%, almost 80% we can say consumer payments are made through cash, which is quite high. Cash transactions are anonymous, help in preserving privacy, which is a virtue as long as transactions are not illicit. To some extent, privacy is also important. Some people raise a question, you know, it will reduce privacy of people. What you are buying, where you are spending, everybody, everything need not be disclosed to everybody. So it may have this, but the thing is that in the guise of privacy, there are a lot of illegal things and other means tax avoidance things are done. In the wake of demonetization, the government has taken number of steps to facilitate incentive. Like Bheem, we have discussed UPI, Aadhaar merchant pay, Aadhaar enabled payment system, reduce merchant discount rate. Merchant discount rate is a commission charged by bank on these digital transactions. POS devices are affordable now. Tariff concessions are given. In real estate, reduction in real estate price, affordable houses will be available. So these things we have discussed in that table. Short-term costs, obviously inconvenience and hardships to people, especially in organized sector, and production reduce, consumption reduce, production reduce in unorganized sector. That was actually a major problem in hardship in the form of standing in queues, job losses. Initially, there was significant job losses, like especially in construction and lot of other informal sectors. Uncertainty increased because people actually were apprehensive how long it will take. Affect supplies of certain agriculture products, like some sowing season, milk, etc. was affected. So that was short-term impact only. Now that is over. Impact on GDP. Impact on GDP, I told you the demand effect, demand reduce, supply shock, and uncertainty, the same which we discussed earlier. Redistribution of the government to the government. Now redistribution we have discussed based on what? How much money destroyed. So resources for the private sector to the government. It will provide shift resources from private sector to government. From which those people who are holding black money, from them purchasing power may be shifted to government. So same thing which we discussed. Wealth gain, unreturned cash जो होगा वो wealth बढ़ जाएगी, government can spend. Income taxes could go up. This is a benefit. So almost same thing. But इसमें 3 negative effects they have said. Cost of printing new notes, so cost of remonetization, cost of sterilizing surge in liquidity. Liquidity surge होगी तो then market stabilization scheme bonds could be issued. This market stabilization scheme was initiated in 2004. For which purpose? Market stabilization scheme for sterilization. Sterilization means to suck out extra money which is created because of increase in forex reserves. So it started for stabilization. Now it could be needed. For this, government have to sell bond to buy to suck out money. When government will suck out money, government has to pay interest on bond. So it is a cost. Nominal GDP growth may decline, but that is temporary. Markers of success. Change in use. What are the indicators or markers of success? You can see digital payments are increasing. Cash to GDP ratio will decline. And tax revenue, the same thing actually which we have discussed. Raise the cost of non-compliance because chance of being caught has increased now. People will be making more digital transactions. So maximizing benefits and minimizing cost. So what is required? Faster demonetization should be required. Apart from that, internal convertibility. Internal convertibility ka matlab hai you can convert cash into bank deposit and you can deposit withdraw anytime easily. That is internal convertibility. If let's suppose people, you may be apprehensive if you deposit money in bank and you may not be able to withdraw, so would you deposit? No. So people will start hoarding money. So internal convertibility should be there. Means people should have trust that they can deposit money and they can withdraw money. They can convert rupee cash into deposit and deposit into cash. Government windfall arising from money deployed in capital type expenditure. So government should spend on capital type, not revenue expenditure. If government got some windfall, government should not spend for day-to-day activities. So these are suggestions ke how to maximize benefit. Impetus to digitalization must continue. But they have mentioned that digitalization is not a panacea. Not all cash is bad. So we cannot consider it to be panacea. And transition to digitalization must be gradual. They have given some suggestions. Another is digitalization must be incentivized. Incentivized ka matlab jaise ki we have discussed, like jo cashback scheme hai to merchants and referral bonus, like these things. So this incentivization to some extent, like reducing taxes, etc. charges is also incentivization. Incentivization means like imposing charges on bank transactions, cash handling charges. So that will incentivize digitalization. No. Digitalization is not a panacea. Tax evasion will eliminate. If every transaction is 100% digitalized, then tax evasion will be eliminated. No. Reduce hoga, eliminate nahi hoga. The reason is that कि firm can show कि okay, we have got this much receipt, but we have made this much expenditure. Fake expenditure दिखा सकते हैं. Scope तो तब भी है. मतलब जो income is expenditure minus receipt minus expenditure. So they can show fake expenditures also. और भी बहुत सारी चीजें होती है, नहीं इवेजन भी हो सकता है, अवॉइडेंस भी हो सकता है. अवॉइडेंस का मिसयूज ऑफ टैक्स प्रोविजंस तो कर ही सकते हैं ना, अवॉइडेंस भी हो सकता है, इवेजन भी हो सकता है. इवेजन इन द सेंस के द फेक बिल्स कुड बी शोन. सो इवेजन अवॉइडेंस दोनों पॉसिबल है. ऑल्दो इट विल रिड्यूस, अच्छा इट विल इंक्रीज टैक्स इवेजन इन केस ऑफ विच टैक्स, डायरेक्ट इनडायरेक्ट, किस में ज्यादा रिड्यूस होगा? इनडायरेक्ट में ज्यादा फर्क पड़ेगा, क्योंकि इनडायरेक्ट तो जो भी ट्रांजेक्शन होगा उस पे देना, जैसे एक्साइज सर्विस टैक्स तो उस पे देना जो ट्रांजेक्शन हुआ है. प्रॉफिट में स्कोप है, यू कैन शो सम एक्स्ट्रा एक्सपेंडिचर एटसेट्रा, यू कैन कैलकुलेट मिसकैलकुलेट, डिडक्शंस का मिसयूज कर सकते हैं, तो इनडायरेक्ट में ज्यादा बेनिफिट होगा. अच्छा, उसके बाद साइबर सिक्योरिटी सिस्टम मस्ट बी स्ट्रेंथेंड. दिस इज वन इशू कि सिक्योरिटी इज आल्सो इशू बिकॉज मनी कुड बी ट्रांसफर्ड इलीगली. Another is ensure interoperability, मतलब it should be easy कि you can make payment. अभी क्या होता है, एक e-wallet है, selected payment ही होंगे, सब नहीं होगा. तो it should be interoperated. You can make any kind of payment from any instrument, any mode. So these things should be done. मतलब this is suggestion कि to make full benefit. अच्छा, carrot and stick policy होनी चाहिए, मतलब government should be supporting it and means there should be stick also for means like for example cash handling transaction tax है banks पे, so that is a kind of stick. अच्छा, GST would broad coverage should be there, which will include this real estate etc. Income tax rates and real estate stamp duty should be reduced. अच्छा, now the thing is that ki income tax rates, when more digitalization will be there, then you know कि currently company know कि we are paying tax on half of our income. Now if there will be more digitalization, then the effective burden on companies will increase significantly or not. So government should reduce the rates, so to improve voluntary compliance. Otherwise company, it will be undue burden on this, on companies. So especially on MSMEs there is more cash economy, more evasion in case of direct taxes. So it is better government may reduce for that. They have said that government should expedite the process of reducing CIT rate from 30 to 25%. Achha, stamp duties should be reduced because you know, okay, achha, what is the main problem? Why maximum black money is there in real estate sector? Because two problems are there. Huh?
There is a difference between the
Market rate, actual rate. Abhi kya hai ki market, the official rates are very low, although duty is high. So what should be done? Ki government should increase market rate and reduce duty, so that effective tax burden should not increase. But people have to disclose entire value. तो फिर black to white करना difficult होगा. तो what should be done कि the official rate should be revised and they should be equal to market rate. But duty should, this stamp duty should be reduced, so that effective burden on tax should not increase and entire value should be accounted. So that has to be done. Acha, apart from that, income tax net widened gradually. Acha, reducing corporate tax rate, as you have discussed, this reduction, this time schedule should be accelerated. Tax administration should be improved, but that should be easy for people to pay taxes. A smarter evidence-based security audit system, greater reliance on online assessment corresponding duty. Acha, big data and digital age. But the government should be using ICT for widely actually to track these transactions, etc. So these are some suggestions ke what should be done to make full benefit of this demonetization. So other thing we have discussed already. Acha, here I told you already कि you should know exactly कि what are benefits of this cashless economy, Ratan Tata committee recommendations, and new some apps etc. information. So question is very likely on any of these things. At least one question you'll find, or two questions from these things. So which we have discussed already, like cashless economy, black money, these things, Black Money Act, etc. So at least one or two questions are expected from this. Acha, even festering twin balance sheet problem. Here also it is also very important. At least one question is expected from here, and we have discussed already in much detail in banking. I'll just give you broad idea. And in this chapter, they have discussed that NPAs have increased, why they have increased, and what measures were taken by RBI and government, what issues are there, what problems are being faced, and what should be done now. So these, especially bad bank, is very important suggestion given here. So NPAs have increased actually, but in India, you know how India is different, because normally such kind of NPAs, such NPAs lead to some crisis. In India, this happened when economy is actually growing at fast pace. So this is very unusual. Acha, this happens in like East Asia and in US and UK. And you know when NPA increased beyond that level, then the financial system collapsed. Acha, and why in India it has not collapsed? What is the reason?
public sector banks.
One is majority are in public sector banks. Second,
Infrastructure, they are using an infrastructure project, which is the backbone of this.
to some extent, maximum NPAs almost 1/3 are in infrastructure, where there is some assets are there. and most important reason, one important reason is that the credit to GDP ratio overall is low. Credit to GDP ratio may be high like in China, then it would be difficult actually. So it means that vulnerability is less actually of our banking system. And already overall, we are already adopting international conventions like capital adequacy ratios are higher than Basel norms. Basel 3 से भी ऊपर है. तो Basel में 8% है, 9 है, plus buffers are also have to be adopted. अच्छा, तो what the point here? कि why this didn't happen? How it is different in India? अच्छा, another is that कि अच्छा, in the last year, there has been significant increase in NPA. अभी 12% है. Last year कितना था? एक साल में क्यों ज्यादा बढ़ गए? Actually, the most important reason in the last year कि if you see data, अगर एक साल अभी 12% करीब है एवरेज, मतलब, और पहले कम था काफी, एक साल में काफी बढ़ गया. कैसे बढ़ गया?
Because the banks are not taking this initiative to recognize these are NPAs or NPAs.
Yes. Any other reason is not that कि NPA actually have not increased. Earlier, bank was not properly classifying their assets. तो misclassification हो रहा था. So for that purpose, to ensure कि bank should properly classify their assets, so RBI conducted what? Asset quality review, AQR. उससे सही पता चला, मतलब recognize किया properly कि कितना NPA है. As I told you कि like bank has given a loan as an asset. Now if there is a default of more than 3 months, then क्या हुआ? NPA हो गया. एक साल तक वो NPA रहेगा. वो क्या कहेंगे? NPA का मतलब substandard asset रहेगा. Then after 1 year क्या हो जाएगा? Doubtful asset. After 1 year doubtful asset हो गया, and when bank actually thought that now it cannot be recovered, efforts are filled, then उसे क्या बोलेंगे? Loss asset. तो loss asset बोलेंगे. अच्छा, but bank has not written off. But after a few years, bank में तो now no possibility, and now there is no logic in showing it on balance sheet. It's better to remove that. Then bank will write off. Then it will no longer remain asset. Now there may be lot of such assets which were actually loss asset, but bank have not written off. Why? Bank were not writing off, as I told you. If they will write off, then their equity will reduce. Then they will be pressured to increase capital, tier 1 capital especially. So this was the reason. Now in asset quality review, it was decided that you have classified your assets. Asset means loan in a proper format or not. अच्छा, even focus is on early identification now. You should know the terms. ये terms पूछ सकते हैं. जैसे like 1 month से कम का default है, but there is some sign of incipient stress. जैसे check bounce हो गया, उसे क्या बोलते हैं? नहीं, सब स्टैंडर्ड नहीं. जो 3 महीने से कम के डिफॉल्ट वाले उनको क्या बोलते हैं? स्पेशल मेंशन अकाउंट, SMA. स्पेशल मेंशन अकाउंट क्या है कि अप टू SMA 0 क्या होता है? SMA 0 का मतलब है कि डिफॉल्ट ऑफ लेस देन 30 डेज, बट सम साइंस ऑफ स्ट्रेस. ठीक है. और 31 to 60 डेज का डिफॉल्ट को क्या बोलेंगे? SMA 1, स्पेशल मेंशन अकाउंट 1. और 61 to 90 डे SMA 2, और 91 डे के बाद NPA. और NPA का फिर 3 कैटेगरीज है. तो यू शुड नो द टर्म्स. मतलब स्पेशल मेंशन अकाउंट 0, आई रिपीट, SMA 0 का मतलब क्या हुआ कि लेस देन 30 डे, नॉट ओनली लेस देन 30, प्लस सम साइंस ऑफ सिकनेस, मतलब इंसिपिएंट स्ट्रेस, जैसे चेक बाउंस हो गया हो या कुछ और प्रॉब्लम हो, तब होगा. अच्छा, 31 to 60 डेज SMA 1, स्पेशल मेंशन अकाउंट 1. अच्छा, उसके बाद फिर 61 to 90 डे SMA 2. अच्छा, 91st डे के बाद NPA. अब फॉर 1 ईयर तक क्या रहेगा? वो सब स्टैंडर्ड. आफ्टर 1 ईयर डाउटफुल, और आफ्टर 1 ईयर जब रिकवरी के हो खत्म हो जाएगा तो लॉस एसेट. लेकिन एसेट है, और जब बिल हटा दिया बैलेंस शीट से तो बैड डेट हो गया, फिर एसेट नहीं बचा. तो यू शुड नो दीज टर्म्स. ठीक है. अच्छा, रीस्ट्रक्चरिंग वाज डन कि मतलब रीस्ट्रक्चर्ड लोन का मतलब क्या है? नहीं, वो तो अलग है. व्हाट इज द मीनिंग ऑफ रीस्ट्रक्चर्ड लोन? टर्म्स एंड कंडीशन को रिलैक्स कर दिया सो दैट के बोरोवर कैन पे बैक. तो दैट इज कॉल्ड रीस्ट्रक्चर्ड लोन. और रीस्ट्रक्चर्ड लोन प्लस NPA को ब्रॉडली क्या बोलते हैं? स्ट्रेस एसेट्स. तो यू शुड नो द टर्म्स. अच्छा, NPAs have increased. प्रोजेक्टर ऑफ हो गया. अच्छा, तो यू शुड नो दिस. अच्छा, तो ओके, दैट इज अवेलेबल है. Asset quality review, because of this actually the real this recognition actually was not earlier proper. Now asset quality review showed the actual value of NPAs. अच्छा, 4/5 of the NPAs were in public sector banks. So right now almost 4/5, well, almost 80% NPAs are in public sector banks. अच्छा, so apart from, अच्छा, what is NPA ratio reached? Where NPA ratio reached 12%. अभी public sector bank में कितना हो गया? 12% of the total advances. अच्छा, and meanwhile corporate side, Credit Suisse reported that around 40% of corporate debt is monitored was owned by companies which had interest coverage ratio of 1%, less than 1. Interest coverage ratio is what is used. What is interest coverage ratio?
So it is a ratio where we can understand that they can pay back or not.
Means the revenue is not sufficient, or not revenue exactly, profit is not sufficient to pay interest. मतलब जो profit before paying tax and interest is less than interest liability. अगर profit is less than interest liability, 1 का मतलब है दोनों बराबर हो गए, जितना profit है interest liability के बराबर ही profit है. तो अगर less than 1 है इसका मतलब profit is less than interest liability. तो if this is interest coverage ratio is less than 1, it means that profit of this company is less than interest liability. So it means that company is not having money to even pay interest. It means that it won't be possible to pay EMI. EMI will include interest plus principal. So risk chance of default is more. They could not earn enough to pay interest obligations on their loans. अच्छा, उसके apart from that, twin balance sheet problem where both banking and corporate sectors were under stress. So this is related with twin balance sheet problem. अच्छा, they have given this data कि gross NPAs. So you can see कि they have increased sharply here. 16-17 के बीच में देखें तो why they have increased? Because of mainly reclassification, proper classification, asset quality review की वजह से बढ़ा है. अच्छा, share of debt owned by stress companies. Now share of debt is gradually increasing. So share of debt owned by stress companies. So stress company, अच्छा, if a company is stressed, then entire debt would be NPA. No, all debt would not be NPA. On some debt there may be this. So, but the share of those share of debt owned by stress companies is increasing. This is also a means it is there a potential that other debt may become NPA. Market capitalization of public sector banks and HDFC. So you can see market capitalization of public sector banks reduced. You can see market capitalization has reduced. Why? Because risk has increased, so share price will go down or not. So share price of most of the public sector banks have declined. They have taken example of HDFC, not much change, minor fall. Because in private sector situation is much lesser as compared to public sector. NP ratio selected countries. So you can see कि India तो 9.1, मतलब this data is from source RBI for India, World Development Indicators, World Bank. So India में quite this is quite high, NPA ratio is quite high. अच्छा, as compared to other countries. अच्छा, but the thing is that NPA ratio is high, but I told you two problems are there. One, two things are positive for India, like public sector bank. Another is that the credit to deposit GDP ratio is low. That is also a very positive thing. Means that things could be handled by government. अच्छा, what went wrong? The most important reason, you know, was high debt equity ratio. That's called leverage. So leverage. So what is weakness in balance sheet of companies? The high leverage issue. अच्छा, that serves as a lever. I told you. If there is profit, it will further increase profit. If it will decrease, it will further decrease profit. As I told you already, so leverage has been the most important problem. High debt, because for company, debt is risky or equity is risky. Debt, because even if you are not earning profit, you have to pay EMI. In case of share capital, you need not require to pay any profit, anything dividend if there is no profit. So for company, debt is risky. So debt has increased. Achha, and as I told you, debt serves as a lever. So in boom time, it is better if a company is earning huge profit. If let's suppose you are owner of a company, the profitability is very high, maybe 30-40%. So it is better to borrow or to better to take a share capital. Borrow, because आपका profit और बढ़ जाएगा. अच्छा, तो during boom time, companies have borrowed substantially. अच्छा, banks were willing to lend because companies were performing good. So debt to equity ratio increase, leverage increase. अच्छा, but the thing is that if leverage would increase, then if there will be slowdown, then risk will be more. So this happened actually. The very important reason is that during boom time, bank lend excessively. So we have discussed already this reason. Achha, after that, interest increased because inflation was there in the past few years. So interest increased. On the other hand, the companies which borrowed from abroad, burden increased because of rupee depreciation. Rupee depreciated, and to repay that they have to borrow at very high interest. So that external debt burden also increased. Problems were there in land acquisition, environmental clearances, especially in infrastructure sector where 1/3 NPAs are there. So these things were there. And the forecast of this collapse of global financial crisis has been built around assumption growth would continue double digit. Before the crisis, there were assumption ke businessmen actually they assumed ke prediction ke growth will continue in that manner. What happened after the crisis? Growth slowed down, and some companies find it difficult. Apart from that, policy paralysis, etc., as we discussed, created problem. So this we have discussed already in class in much detail. So RBI increased interest rate to quell this. Borrowed abroad when rupee was depreciating. Rupee earlier it was about 40, 45 करीब रहता था. अब 67 हो गया. So it has increased this. But in the 1/3 corporate debt, this interest coverage ratio less than 1. उसे IC1 company बोलते हैं इसे technically. जो जिनका मतलब vulnerability is more. Interest coverage ratio is less than 1. Many of them are infrastructure, power generation and metal sectors, जैसे steel etc. What explains the twin balance sheet syndrome with Indian characteristics? India did follow standard path to TBS problem. देखिए standard path का मतलब पहले surge in borrowing हुआ, Indian companies were borrowing more and more. फिर क्या हुआ? Leading to over leverage, debt equity ratio बढ़ जाएगा, and debt service problem होगी. तो almost same path actually was there in India, which is usually there in other countries. Other things are almost same which we have discussed here. Financial system responded to intense stress on corporations. The most difficult in India and other countries, however, was the way in which financial system is. How financial system actually in India, financial system was more accommodative. Because more accommodative in the sense that like restructuring was done. RBI initiated policy like corporate debt restructuring and joint liability forum JLF to restructure loans. तो फोकस हम पे रिस्ट्रक्चर पे रहा rather than on bankruptcy process. In other countries अगर इतना ज्यादा डेट होता है तो companies issue bankruptcy processes. Why in India bankruptcy processes were not initiated by most of the companies? पहली बात है difficult है, तो बहुत long run process, कुछ एकदम immediate मिलना नहीं है, तो better है कि negotiate कर लो. एक प्रॉब्लम नहीं है ना प्रोसेस को इनिशिएट करने में. DRT में इतनी ज्यादा ओवरक्राउडिंग ऑलरेडी है. आप DRT जाओगे उससे अच्छा बेटर उससे बात करो कि मतलब ओके वी विल रिस्ट्रक्चर एंड यू शुड पे बैक. तो यहाँ पे थोड़ा ये डिफरेंस रहा क्योंकि अदर कंट्रीज में प्रोसेसेस आर वेरी यू कैन से फास्ट. तो यहाँ पे अब ये इंप्रूव हो रहा है जैसे बैंक्रप्सी एक्ट पास हुआ. अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट अदर कंट्रीज क्रेडिटर्स वुड हैव ट्रिगर्ड बैंक्रप्सीज. तो इंडिया में इसलिए नहीं हुआ वो. टाइम यहाँ पे ये टाइम फॉर कॉर्पोरेट वुंड्स टू हील, मतलब यहाँ पे हम गिव टाइम टू टाइम, दे हैव यूज्ड अ वर्ड कि मतलब हम टाइम दे रहे हैं यहाँ पे कि ठीक है इंप्रूव हो जाओ. आप मतलब रिस्ट्रक्चर कर दिया, कुछ लिबर्टी दे दी. तो दे हैव कंपेयर्ड हाउ इट इज डिफरेंट इन इंडिया. दिस कर्व शोज ग्रॉस फिक्स्ड कैपिटल फॉर्मेशन. कैपिटल फॉर्मेशन, फिक्स्ड कैपिटल फॉर्मेशन मींस इन्वेस्टमेंट एक्चुअली, इंक्रीज इन फिजिकल स्टॉक ऑफ कैपिटल. तो यू कैन सी इट इज डिक्लाइनिंग फ्रॉम 2004-5 or 5-6. You can see capital formation. Obviously, if bank would be in loss, they will not be willing to lend, and even companies will not be willing to borrow because of the pessimism overall. So capital formation is declining. It is, can we say, a major problem in India? Most important thing is that in the last few years, national income is CIG X minus M. So growth is promoted by what? Mainly private consumption. But consumption-led growth, there was in the last few years there was consumption-led growth rather than investment-led growth, which is more sustainable. Investment-led growth. So this is declining. It means that can we say consumption-led growth can it sustain growth for long? No. Although increase in consumption to some extent in the recent past, increase in government expenditure sustained growth, but it cannot be sustainable. In the 4 years back, there was an economic survey. They have given one analysis on GDP growth and investment. They have shown that there is a very high degree of correlation between investment and GDP growth. So it means that this is a major concern. Investment is growing, is reducing. Okay, तो total investment ये है, तो total investment reduce हो रहा है. Is the strategy मतलब growth reduce हो रही है? Sorry, technically not investment has reduced, but growth rate of investment has declined. Yes, but in India, overall investment is how much? About 34% of GDP in general. ऑन एन एवरेज 34%, 33-34 होगा करीब. एफडीआई का रोल क्या है? 1%. Got the point? तो 34 में से एक ही तो परसेंट है एफडीआई, बाकी तो मेन तो डोमेस्टिक इन्वेस्टमेंट है. क्लियर? तो एफडीआई इज अबाउट 1% ऑफ टोटल इन्वेस्टमेंट, 1% ऑफ जीडीपी. तो एफडीआई जो इंडिया में अप्रोक्सीमेटली 1% ऑफ जीडीपी है. तो जबकि टोटल इन्वेस्टमेंट है 34%, तो उसमें 33 डोमेस्टिक है, 1% एफडीआई है, तो उसका शेयर कम है. अच्छा, इज द स्ट्रेटजी सस्टेनेबल? अच्छा, देयर आर टू, एक्चुअली दे सेड देयर आर टू पॉसिबिलिटीज to overcome this situation. Sustainable, two scenarios will be there. One is Phoenix scenario. Phoenix का मतलब है कि accelerating growth would gradually raise cash flows of stressed companies, eventually allowing them to pay their debt. मतलब कि if the companies which are under stress, their growth may pick up because government has improved like business environment, etc. Ease of doing business has improved. Land acquisition, environmental clearances have been expedited. So the thing is that if growth will pick up, then it will be like Phoenix. Then they will be able to pay back their debt on their own. This is the best situation. Second possibility to improve the control the situation is containment scenario. Containment means कि NPA would merely need to be limited in nominal terms. मतलब उसे हम जितना है उतना ही रखें, कम नहीं ना हो तो बढ़े भी ना, तो contain कर लें उसे. Once this is done, they would swiftly shrink as a share of economy as proportion of bank balance sheet. Such since GDP growing is nominal rate is more than 10%. देखिए NPA amount same है, GDP growth बढ़ जाएगी तो share उनका कम हो जाएगा. तो उस कंटेनमेंट सिनेरियो एक पॉसिबिलिटी है. मतलब दे हैव टॉक अबाउट पॉसिबिलिटीज एक्चुअली. यस, नो, इट विल curtail the problem. The problem is curtail that will become handy. That will actually percentage of NPA as compared to GDP in terms of total bank loan will reduce, and then resolution will be easier. मतलब दो पॉसिबिलिटीज है बस ये कोई. अच्छा, तो fall into this per quarter interest obligation mounting. अच्छा, but not so important. अच्छा, implications. अच्छा, countries with DBT problem tend to have low investment as stressed companies reduce their own investment to conserve cash flow. Their stressed banks are unable to assume new lending. तो capital investment कम होगा. This is one important repercussion which we have discussed. This seems to be happening in India as well. As I told you, investment is reducing. तो ये सबसे बड़ा रिप्रिकॉशन है ऑन इन्वेस्टमेंट विच में हैव हैम्पर ग्रोथ. अच्छा, स्टेप्स टेकन बाय आरबीआई. अच्छा, स्टेप्स वी हैव डिस्कस्ड. अच्छा, दिस 5/25 स्कीम इज टेक्निकली इट इज फॉर इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर फाइनेंसिंग, although it may help bank because lot of NPAs are in infrastructure sector, so it may also help. अच्छा, this scheme 5/25 refinancing of infrastructure scheme, this scheme will help bank to overcome one major problem in long term lending. Which is that problem? Asset liability mismatch. So here bank will give loan up to 25 years, and that loan has to be refinanced after every 5 years. It means that if bank may not have funds, then bank may not continue with that loan. Bank may say कि you have to borrow from other bank, and if you want to continue, we will charge very high interest. So bank, that loan has to be refinanced. So if bank will be having liquidity crunch, it may not refinance or maybe charging very high interest. Then borrower will have to refinance. So it will overcome this problem. So this is one scheme which was initiated by RBI. Achha, private asset reconstruction, ARCs. Achha, government has ARC Act was amended and some actually liberty was given. 100% FDI is allowed in ARCs, and under automatic approval it is allowed. So government is promoting ARCs, but the problem is that ki ARCs size is sufficient or not. They have given this data ki ARCs could have bought hardly 5% of about total NPAs. अब now the banks which are offering having NPA, they want to sell, बहुत सारे, और buyer कम है, तो bank have to sell at higher price or low price. Low price बहुत highly discount पे, so bank will benefit? No. The price is based on demand and supply. जो लोन के sellers बहुत है, supply बहुत है, NPA के खरीदार है नहीं, तो जो सबसे सस्ते में बेचेगा वो खरीदेंगे. तो there's a lose-lose situation for bank. If they will sell NPA, then they are not getting much price, बहुत highly discount पे बेचना पड़ रहा है, and if they are recovering, there are a lot of problems in recovery. अच्छा, other is strategic debt restructuring scheme SDR. अच्छा, इससे पहले बल्कि 2015 से पहले 14 में JLF Joint Lenders Forum we have discussed. So they have not given that scheme in this. So joint lender forum means कि lenders can make a joint lender forum and they can decide what they have to do. The decision has to be taken by 75% of the creditors. मतलब at least 75% creditors should say yes. अब they have to decide whether we have to give some time to this company whether we have to restructure loan, in what manner we have to restructure, or we have to start the recovery process, मतलब इंसॉल्वेंसी रेजोल्यूशन प्रोसेस स्टार्ट करें, तो कौन डिसाइड करेगा? जॉइंट लेंडर फोरम, मतलब फॉर रीस्ट्रक्चरिंग ऑफ लोन्स. अच्छा, एंड इफ रीस्ट्रक्चर्ड लोन विल फेल, लाइक बैंक हैज रीस्ट्रक्चर्ड, जीएलएफ हैज रीस्ट्रक्चर्ड लोन एंड बैंक उस पे भी वो कंपनी हैज नॉट कमिटेड टू दैट, मतलब नॉट पेइंग ईएमआई एज पर दैट रीस्ट्रक्चर, तो फिर उसके लिए ये स्कीम है. देखिए पहले जीएलएफ क्या करेगा? रीस्ट्रक्चर करेगा, and after restructuring, if company still failed to pay back, then bank can convert, GLF can convert the loan into equity, 51% or more should be there, and then and can take over management. Got the point? क्योंकि इसका मतलब restructure के बाद भी नहीं हो पा रहा, इसका मतलब situation may be worse, much worse. So that is why management would be taken over. And if the company is nearing bankruptcy or almost become, let's suppose, insolvent, तो फिर owners का कुछ बचता है? There is nothing of owners. So that is why who should take management? The creditors. Then they will revive this. So this we have discussed already. Another S4A, sustainable structuring of stress assets scheme. So in 2016, यहाँ पर क्या है? In this, bank will see कि okay, a company has taken a loan. Now it has taken, let's suppose, maybe whatever amount loan. It cannot pay entire, but it may pay maybe 60%, 70%. तो अब हो सकता है 60% की कैपेसिटी है, अब लेकिन 100% दे नहीं पाएगी, तो what loan will be divided into sustainable and non sustainable. कि 60% सस्टेनेबल हो गया, मतलब सस्टेनेबल मस्ट बी एटलीस्ट 50%, मोर देन 50% होना चाहिए. तो इफ इट इज फॉर द कंपनीज व्हिच आर इन डीप ट्रबल और लेस ट्रबल, फॉर लेस ट्रबल मतलब व्हिच कैन पे बैक मोर देन हाफ ऑफ द लोन. अगर बैंक को लगता है कि मोर देन हाफ कुड बी सस्टेनेबल, मतलब कुड बी पेड बैक बाय कंपनी ऑन द बेस ऑफ इट्स करंट रेवेन्यू फ्लो, देन वो क्या करेगा? वो सस्टेनेबल करेगा और बाकी को अनसस्टेनेबल उसे इक्विटी में बदल लेगा. अच्छा, यहाँ पे मैनेजमेंट कैन बी टेकन ओवर? नो, मैनेजमेंट कैन नॉट बी टेकन ओवर because sustainable must be more than 50%. तो इक्विटी में जो कन्वर्ट होगा less than 50 होगा. तो S4A scheme is there. अच्छा, these are, अच्छा, asset quality review was also conducted to correctly identify this. So these schemes. अच्छा, but what are problems in these schemes? तो ये schemes बताइए, analysis of scheme, मतलब what are problems actually? Loss recognition. तो loss recognition was actually, properly banks were not classifying. So what is solution for that? Asset quality review, which was conducted in 15 and 16 by RBI. Viability issues, a lot of companies are not viable. So how you can recover money? The only thing is that you have to start a insolvency resolution process. So C1 companies are quite large actually. So at this point, large write-off will be required to restore viability of large IC1 company का मतलब है जिनका profit is less than interest liability. Those companies whose earnings do not cover their interest obligations. So this is one issue. Non-viability of company. Other is coordination problem. Coordination, like joint lender forum, they have to take decision taken by 75% of creditors in value and 60% by number. तो अब consensus बनना भी तो difficult है ना. तो different creditors, they have their different interest. हाँ, some creditor will not be willing to give much liberty to company. Some won't know. We should give more liberty rather than, so that at least it should be recovered. अच्छा, apart from the public sector banks, sometimes they may be cautious कि if we will allow some kind of more liberty, then investigation may be there against me, against some kind of corruption. So different banks are there, so they have different objectives, different exposures, so they have different strategies. So consensus is difficult to arrive. तो ये coordination की बहुत बड़ी problem है. अच्छा, proper incentives नहीं है. Lack of process is that large debt reduction will be needed to resolve viability in many cases. But public sector banks are reluctant to grant write-off because there will be reward of doing so. मतलब reward तो होगा नहीं, but यहाँ पे ये हो सकता है कि उन्होंने write-off करने के लिए पैसा ले लिया हो. मतलब they might have accepted bribe, तो inquiry हो सकती है. तो एक issue. तो these are the main problems actually. अच्छा, majority of debt is in public sector. वहाँ पे ये constraint आ रहा है. अच्छा, to address the problem, Bank Board Bureau was set up. Mission Indradhanush we have discussed, BBB और Mission Indradhanush we have discussed already 7 point. अच्छा, अब इन्होंने जो कहा है कि जो solution है वो क्या है? PARA, Public Sector Assets Rehabilitation Agency. अच्छा, why? Because PARA is expected to overcome most of the problems. जो अभी practical problem आ रही हैं, ये schemes को use करने में, PARA will overcome these problems. How it will overcome this problem? देखिए, इट इज दैट कि सेंट्रलाइज्ड अप्रोच. अभी हम क्या यूज कर रहे हैं? डिसेंट्रलाइज्ड अप्रोच यूज कर रहे हैं. डिसेंट्रलाइज्ड का मतलब है बैंक्स आर रिकवरिंग ऑन देयर ओन और नेगोशिएटिंग विद एआरसीज टू सेल देयर प्रोडक्ट. तो वो डिसेंट्रलाइज्ड अप्रोच है. what they said कि in this kind of magnitude, this problem of this magnitude, we need a centralized approach which was adopted in other countries also. East Asian crisis में अमेरिका यूरोप में यूज हुआ ये. तो we have to create a bad bank, मतलब पैरा. bad bank का मतलब पैरा. अच्छा, अब ये क्या होगा कि गवर्नमेंट will transfer bad debt of some or all public sector bank to this agency and it will do recovery. So it will be somewhat similar to ARC, but ये ARC commercial नहीं है, it will be created by government actually for a specific purpose. अच्छा, तो फंक्शन क्या होगा कि लोन विल बी ट्रांसफर टू दिस एक्चुअली एंड इट विल टेक ओवर लोन. अच्छा, व्हाट आर बेनिफिट्स? अब इसके बेनिफिट्स क्या होंगे? देखिए, वन बेनिफिट विल बी एलिमिनेट मोस्ट ऑब्स्टिकल्स करंटली प्लॉग्ड बाय दिस. अभी बहुत सारी प्रॉब्लम्स आ रही हैं, जैसे कि जैसे कोऑर्डिनेशन प्रॉब्लम सबसे बड़ा वो है, बिकॉज डिफरेंट बैंक्स हैव डिफरेंट एक्चुअली इंटेंशंस एटसेट्रा. पब्लिक सेक्टर बैंक्स हैव डिफरेंट कंस्ट्रेंट्स फॉर डिसीजन मेकिंग, तो इट विल एक्चुअली रिमूव द कोऑर्डिनेशन प्रॉब्लम्स. कुछ हार्ड डिसीजन भी लेने पड़ेंगे, राइट ऑफ भी करना पड़ेगा इन सम केसेस. अगर कंपनी इज नॉन वाइबल तो नॉट मच स्कोप इज देयर, तो देन राइट ऑफ्स हैव टू बी डन. अच्छा, इट कुड सेट अप प्रॉपर इंसेंटिव्स गिविंग एन एक्सप्लिसिट मैंडेट टू मैक्सिमाइज रिकवरी विद इन कन्फाइंड. मतलब इसका मतलब है कि एक्सप्लिसिट मैंडेट का मतलब इट शुड बी ऑन प्रोफेशनल बेसिस. इट विल टेक शुड टेक डिसीजन ऑन प्रोफेशनल बेसिस रादर देन ऑन पॉलिटिकल एंड सोशल कंसीडरेशंस. It would separate loan resolution process from concern about bank capital. अच्छा, एक one main problem is that कि if bank will do some write off etc, then you know capital will reduce. अच्छा, the requirement in Basel 3 has already increased. तो उसमें अगर वो क्यों नहीं राइट ऑफ कर रहे थे, जो मतलब लॉस एसेट दिखाए जा रहे थे बैंक, राइट ऑफ क्यों नहीं कर रहे थे? राइट ऑफ करेंगे तो क्या कम होगा? इक्विटी कम होगी. एज इन बैलेंस शीट वी हैव डिस्कस, तो इक्विटी अब ऑलरेडी बढ़ानी है उन्हें, तो और ज्यादा बढ़ानी पड़ जाएगी टीयर 1 में. तो दैट इज द रीजन एक्चुअली, बट हियर इट विल नॉट बी इशू. मतलब ये तो बैंक तो है नहीं, कैपिटल एडुकेसी का तो कोई इशू है नहीं यहाँ पे. तो दिस इज वन कंस्ट्रेंट एक्चुअली अमंग बैंक्स. व्हाई? उसकी वजह से यू नो कि एसेट क्वालिटी रिव्यू वाज रिक्वायर्ड. व्हाई? बिकॉज ऑफ दिस प्रॉब्लम. क्योंकि बैंक उसे हटाना नहीं चाह रहे थे. वो सोच रहे थे कम से कम बैलेंस शीट तो ठीक दिख रही है इससे, अगर वो हट जाएगा तो इक्विटी कम हो जाएगी, फिर और कैपिटल रिक्वायरमेंट बढ़ानी पड़ जाएगी. तो ये प्रॉब्लम यहाँ नहीं होगी, जिसकी वजह से AQR करा, उसकी वजह से पता चला. दे विल परचेज. अच्छा, नहीं, ये प्राइवेट के लिए बनाया जाएगा, पब्लिक के लिए, बट इट मे परचेज. इट इज अप टू गवर्नमेंट. लेकिन ज्यादा तो देखिए ऑलमोस्ट 80% तो प्राइवेट पब्लिक सेक्टर में ही है, तो प्राइवेट सेक्टर में प्रॉब्लम इज नॉट सो मच, सो दैट कुड बी हैंडल्ड. No, other things will help. In private sector, other things like Insolvency and Bankruptcy Act is a landmark. As I told you, apart from that, government is planning to pass one bank for one means bill will be introduced to take care of distress in financial system. What is that? Financial resolution and deposit insurance bill will be introduced this year. तो उससे और ARCs को strengthen करने की प्लान कर रही है गवर्नमेंट. तो गवर्नमेंट has taken general measures, तो प्राइवेट बैंक will benefit from that. जब फॉरेन ARCs आएंगी, DRT स्ट्रेंथन होंगे, तो दे कैन टेक एक्शन अगेंस्ट दैट. प्राइवेट सेक्टर बैंक कैन टेक रिकोर्स टू दीज स्कीम्स, जो SDR है, JLF एंड अपार्ट फ्रॉम दीज ये सारी जो स्कीम्स है, S4A, तो प्राइवेट सेक्टर बैंक कैन मेक यूज ऑफ दैट. अच्छा, तो डू यू थिंक डू वी नीड बैड बैंक फॉर प्राइवेट सेक्टर आल्सो? नो, नॉट रिक्वायर्ड एक्चुअली, क्योंकि उतना बड़ा लेवल नहीं है वहां पे. और गवर्नमेंट कैन ईज द प्रोसेस, जैसे बैंक्रप्सी एक्ट और ये सारी चीजें, ये स्कीम्स S4A, SDR, इससे प्राइवेट सेक्टर को हेल्प हो जाएगी, क्योंकि मैग्नीट्यूड इज नॉट सो लॉन्ग. एंड व्हाई गवर्नमेंट शुड बियर बर्डन फॉर दैट. तो अच्छा, अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट यू नो वन इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग इज दैट कि मेजर पार्ट ऑफ बैड डेट इज कन्फाइंड इन फ्यू कंपनीज. कुछ बड़े केसेस में ज्यादा है, तो उसके लिए पैरा के लिए इजी होगा, डिफिकल्ट होगा? इजी होगा, बल्कि सेंट्रलाइज एजेंसी तो वो कुछ ही कंपनी पे फोकस करके और रिकवर कर सकती है. तो दैट इज व्हाई द एज पर करंट सिचुएशन द मींस पैरा इज सीम्स टू बी डिजायरेबल और नॉट. Yes, because you know earlier strategies, the various schemes, there are a lot of loopholes. जैसे coordination problem है, management takeover करने में problem आती है, बहुत सारी problems है. It would be easier for para or not to take decision for and making use of the schemes like S4A and SDR. So para can make use of them in better way. So that is why para would be a solution. It is under consideration of government. So in economic survey, it's suggested that it should be set up. And this is under consideration of government. Probably government will set up a situation, and certainly government cannot wait for long. At the most, if situation will deteriorate maybe for one more year, government cannot afford to not to set up this. So it has to be set up. Probably if situation may start improving from now, then government may ignore it. But probably it should be set up. So that will be good. अच्छा, अब सबसे बड़ा इशू क्या आता है पैरा में? फंडिंग. एक और अपार्ट फ्रॉम फंडिंग, पैसा कहां से आएगा? सबसे बड़ा इशू ये है. और दूसरा क्या इशू है? it may lead to moral hazard also. Moral hazard in the sense कि like bank then may lead to indiscriminate lending कि जो भी पुराने पाप थे वो सब धुल गए, ये हो जाएगा. So then they will start doing that. But although it will be useful कि they will start lending, investment will pick up and business will become as usual for banks, especially public sector banks. तो एक moral hazard हो सकता है. But moral hazard से ज्यादा तो यहाँ पे पहले तो direct जो physical problem, जो on ground problem है, we have to see that. अच्छा, the most important ground problem is funding. अब फंडिंग के इन्होंने 3 ऑप्शंस बताए. One is government issue of security, मतलब government may invest some money, may borrow, or some whatever windfall government may get, although government didn't get much from demonetization, government can invest. तो पहला तो government has to invest. Because government is already recapitalizing banks, so it is a kind of that. मतलब it will put additional burden on government. पहला. Second है capital market. Like private sector should be encouraged. The design of para would be such that it should be designed in a professional manner. It will enhance its effectiveness and negotiating power, as well as it will encourage banks, private sector to invest in para. मतलब पैरा का भी शेयर ले सकते हैं. तो यहाँ पर रिस्क हाई होगा तो रिटर्न भी हाई होगा. जब ये अगर रिवाइव होगा तो रिटर्न भी हाई होगा. तो इवन इट शुड बी डिजाइन इन सच अ मैनर, बट दैट इज अ प्रैक्टिकल चैलेंज कि वेदर प्राइवेट सेक्टर विल बी इंड्यूस्ड टू इन्वेस्ट और नॉट. बट इफ अ मॉडल कुड बी डेवलप्ड कि इट विल बी ऑन रन ऑन प्योर प्रोफेशनल लाइन. अच्छा, बट सबसे बड़ा इशू क्या है यहाँ पे कि व्हेन पैरा इज क्रिएटेड तो इट विल बाय एनपीए और ट्रांसफर्ड, एनपीए विल बी ट्रांसफर्ड, बट एट व्हाट प्राइस? प्राइसिंग इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. So para can be professional only if pricing will be rational. क्योंकि अगर बहुत पूरा पैसा देके बैंक से वो कर दिया जाएगा तो पैरा वायबल हो पाएगा नहीं. तो अब जैसे मान लीजिए 100 रुपए का लोन है, इफ लेट अस सपोज अगर ARCs आर गिविंग 50%, तो वो तो बहुत कम दे रहा है, आधा ही दे रहा है समझ ली. तो अब ये ऐसा ना करे कि ये पूरा 90% दे दे. अगर 90 दे दे तो रिकवर तो होना नहीं है इतना 90%, तो फिर इसे भी डिस्काउंटेड मतलब रीजनेबल प्राइस होना है. तो दैट इज क्रूशियल फॉर इनवाइटिंग प्राइवेट सेक्टर, एनकरेजिंग प्राइवेट सेक्टर टू इन्वेस्ट इन दैट. तो इट शुड बी रन ऑन प्रोफेशनल लाइन के बैलेंस रहना चाहिए. व्हाट द पॉइंट? तो इट शुड नॉट बाय एट मींस एक्चुअली इट शुड बाय एट मार्केट प्राइस. मतलब शुड नॉट बी बाइंग एट ऑलमोस्ट फुल प्राइस. मतलब डिस्काउंटिंग शुड बी एज पर मार्केट रेट सो दैट इट शुड बी वायबल. और तीसरा इन्होंने कहा कि RBI 2 years back in economic survey there was a chapter on capitalization of banks and central bank. So RBI is most capitalized central bank of the world, one of the most capitalized. Only few banks, I think 4-5 ही बैंक है इंडिया में मतलब वर्ल्ड में जो कि central banks which are so capitalized as RBI. It means that some capital of RBI could be transferred to para. अच्छा, बल्कि at that time they have given a suggestion कि government can transfer RBI capital to public sector banks क्योंकि recapitalization की प्रॉब्लम आ रही थी Basel 3 में. तो तब उसके लिए सजेशन दिया था. अब किसके लिए दिया है? पैरा में ट्रांसफर कर दो कुछ कैपिटल. तो दीज आर द एक्चुअली ऑप्शंस ऑफ फंडिंग. बट द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट चैलेंज इज दैट कि इट शुड बी डिजाइन इन अ प्रोफेशनल मैनर कि जो प्राइस है वो एक रीजनेबल होना चाहिए सो दैट इट शुड बी एबल टू रिकवर दैट मनी. इतना ज्यादा अगर पूरा प्राइस दे देगा तो रिकवर नहीं कर पाएगा. अच्छा, बहुत डीप डिस्काउंट पे तो हो नहीं सकता जो ARC बाय कर रहे हैं, देन बैंक को भी फायदा नहीं होगा. तो दिस इज हाउ पैरा हैज टू बी सेट अप. बट इज इट practically does it seem feasible or not? Yes, by and large it is feasible. अब उसका साइज में वेरी, मतलब गवर्नमेंट में ट्रांसफर few banks or selected NPAs may be transferred or all may be transferred. So I think depending on the resources and this possibility, government may transfer that loan. अच्छा, challenges that need to be resolved. 3 major issues actually they have mentioned. First of all, confront the losses. तो obviously losses, chance of loss will be there. वो तो अदरवाइज भी बैंक को हो या पैरा को हो, लॉस तो है, एक्सेप्ट करना होगा. कॉमर्शियल रादर देन पॉलिटिकल प्रिंसिपल, तो प्योरली कॉमर्शियल क्योंकि अदरवाइज इट वोंट बी वायबल एज आई टोल्ड यू. थर्ड इज प्राइसिंग इशू, जो आई टोल्ड यू ऑलरेडी कि प्राइसिंग का मतलब है अगर ये एंटायर पैसा दे देगा उसे तो पैरा रिकवर नहीं कर पाएगा. तो प्राइसिंग शुड बी रीजनेबल. तो इट शुड नॉट बी द एंटायर मनी टू बी गिवन और नॉट जस्ट लाइक ARCs आर पेइंग. वो तो बहुत ही कम दे रहे हैं ARC. तो एक रीजनेबल प्राइसिंग होनी चाहिए. तो अच्छा, इन लास्ट ईयर इकोनॉमिक सर्वे they have used word 4R. उससे पहले 4D का सॉल्यूशन बताया था. लास्ट ईयर में 4R था, मतलब रिकैपिटलाइजेशन, रिकॉग्निशन, और उससे पहले 4D था. वो 4D क्या था इससे पहले वाले में? D में था कि डिसइन्वेस्ट है और डी रिजर्व, और D मुझे भी थोड़ा एक तो है डिसइन्वेस्ट था कि मतलब गवर्नमेंट शेयर को कम करे, और डी लाइसेंस करे, हाँ लाइसेंस और ज्यादा दे, और डीरेगुलेट था, मतलब डीरेगुलेट, डी लाइसेंस नहीं बल्कि डीरेगुलेट था। और कौन सा डी था, आई डोंट रिमेम्बर एग्जैक्टली, 2 साल पहले की बात है। अभी लास्ट ईयर ये था। तो लास्ट ईयर 4R सॉल्यूशन उन्होंने सजेस्ट किया। तो एक तो रिफॉर्म, रिफॉर्म का मतलब policy reform so that these things should not recur. Banks should be more professional in lending. Their credit assessment should be proper. Recognition के what is magnitude, what is the policy for recognition, asset quality review AQR, recapitalization means more capital to be infused, and resolution, all these para and these schemes actually are for resolution. अच्छा, तो they have said कि we have actually achieved success to some extent on this and this. अभी हमने यहाँ पे तो सक्सेस कर ली है, रिकॉग्निशन तो ARQ से AQR से हो गया, recapitalization government is doing as per government started with in mission Indhanush. To some extent resolution actually there are some problems, ये भी चल रहा है, लेकिन अभी तक रिफॉर्म नहीं हुआ। तो गवर्नमेंट शुड स्टार्ट विद द फर्स्ट R, that is reform. रिफॉर्म का मतलब कि now the incentive should be set right, like they should not, it should not increase further NPA. मतलब इन तीनों पे तो प्रोग्रेस हुई है, रेजोल्यूशन पे कम है लेकिन रिफॉर्म पे नहीं हुआ है कुछ भी। तो पब्लिक सेक्टर बैंक नाउ द पॉलिसी गाइडलाइन एटसेट्रा, तो उसके लिए रिफॉर्म मेजर जैसे कि ज्ञान संगम में सम डिसीजंस वर अराइव्ड एट टू व्हिच दैट शुड बी अडॉप्टेड, कि सम प्रूडेंट मेजर शुड बी देयर, अकाउंटेबिलिटी शुड बी एनहांस्ड, देयर शुड बी रोबस्ट प्रोसेस ऑफ असेसमेंट ऑफ बोरोवर्स क्रेडिट वर्दीनेस, तो दी शुड बी देयर। हाँ, एफएसएलआरसी का तो जनरल है, मतलब सिर्फ एनपीए से रिलेटेड नहीं है, वो तो जनरल ही है। वो जैसे रेजोल्यूशन कॉर्पोरेशन भी उसका रिकमेंडेशन था, तो बहुत सारे हैं। FSDC is important, तो these are actually, अच्छा, तो this in this chapter ये terms बहुत सारे जो schemes हैं, तो this is important। अच्छा, अच्छा, ये chapter बहुत कम important है, brief idea is sufficient। Fiscal framework, the world is changing, should India change too? अब इसमें बिल्कुल simple है, तो what they have, तो they said कि no, India should not change, क्योंकि in the world there is fiscal activism, they are actually adopting especially fiscal policies and monetary policies, and it is not desirable for India. तो मतलब we should not change as per them. अच्छा, तो since the government came to power, there has been a steadfast commitment to fiscal consolidation, reflected in steady decline in fiscal deficit. वैसे तो डेफिसिट तो 6 साल से कम हो रहा है लगातार, बट एनीवे, although initially it was high, तो steady decline in fiscal deficit from 4.5% GDP in this year to 4.1, 3.9, 3.5, and this year 3.2 and next year 3, तो consistently reduce हो रहा है। अच्छा, the trend of recent time shows that monetary easing has run its course. Attention has increasingly turned to role of fiscal policy, but there has been a shift in conventional understanding that use of fiscal policy articulated most clearly recently. अच्छा, अभी ये जो अमेरिका में ये फिस्कल पॉलिसी आर्टिकुलेट हुई है, मतलब ये प्रेसिडेंट ओबामा का काउंसिल ऑफ इकोनॉमिक एडवाइजर, उन्होंने कहा कि फिस्कल पॉलिसी कैन लेजिटिमेटली बी यूज्ड टू काउंटर साइक्लिकल पॉलिसी। काउंटर साइक्लिकल पॉलिसी का मतलब है कि इफ देयर इज स्लो डाउन then fiscal deficit should increase, fiscal stimulus should be given, or if situation is improving then उसे withdrawal कर लेना चाहिए। जैसे monetary और fiscal दोनों को coordination में use करना चाहिए। अच्छा, it is particularly effective when monetary policy at zero bound level, कि क्या होता है कि जैसे ये इकोनॉमिक थ्योरी भी लिक्विडिटी ट्रैप जैसे होता है, कॉन्सेप्ट होता है कि ड्यूरिंग रिसेशन समटाइम मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी बिकम इनइफेक्टिव टू फर्दर रिड्यूस इंटरेस्ट रेट। होता क्या है कि मनी सप्लाई विल इंक्रीज, इंटरेस्ट विल कम डाउन, व्हेन इंटरेस्ट विल कम डाउन इन्वेस्टमेंट विल प्रमोट, जीडीपी ग्रोथ विल प्रमोट, बट अ मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी इज नॉट इफेक्टिव बियॉन्ड अ सर्टेन पॉइंट। तो क्या होता है, फिर फिस्कल पॉलिसी की इफेक्टिवनेस बढ़ जाती है। तो थ्योरेटिकल ये है कि लिक्विडिटी ट्रैप से इन्होंने इंस्पिरेशन लेके ये बताया है कि मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी जब लोअर एप पे हो, इंटरेस्ट रेट ऑलमोस्ट जीरो हो जाए, देन मल्टीप्लायर, जो फिस्कल मल्टीप्लायर हाई हो जाता है। इसका मतलब फिस्कल पॉलिसी का जो इंपैक्ट है ग्रोथ पे वो ज्यादा होता है। एक्चुअली कीन्स की थ्योरी है, कीन्स कहते हैं कि मतलब मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी इफेक्टिव नहीं होती है ज्यादा रिसेशन को ओवरकम करने के लिए, मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी में की फिर फिस्कल पॉलिसी इफेक्टिव होती है। तो थोड़ा सा ये कीनिशियन इकोनॉमिक्स की तरफ टिल्ट हुआ है अभी, मतलब जो अमेरिका में जो ये सजेशन दिया है और कुछ इंप्लीमेंट भी किया है। गॉट द ब्रॉड आइडिया कि मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी की लिमिटेशन है, उसके बाद फिस्कल पॉलिसी ज्यादा इफेक्टिव होती है, तो फिस्कल पॉलिसी भी एक्सपेंशनरी होनी चाहिए। दैट इज व्हाई ह्यूज फिस्कल स्टिमुलस वर गिवन देयर। अच्छा, अनदर इज दैट डेट लेवल शुड बी रिवाइज अपवर्ड। तो सस्टेनेबल डेट लेवल कितना है, तो अभी तक ये था कि द डेट शुड बी विद इन लिमिट्स। अमेरिका में एक कॉन्सेप्ट भी था कि डेट सीलिंग, उसमें प्रॉब्लम भी हुई थी पहले, आई थिंक 2012 एंड 13 में कि सीलिंग शुड नॉट बी इंक्रीज, तो बट अब यहाँ पे ये थिंकिंग इज दैट कि डेट लेवल शुड बी हाई, गवर्नमेंट कैन अफोर्ड टू हैव मोर डेट ऑन गवर्नमेंट। तो ये सब कुछ, इसका मतलब क्या है कि डेट लेवल को बढ़ाना चाहिए, एक्टिव फिस्कल पॉलिसी होनी चाहिए। इसका मतलब है फिस्कल पॉलिसी शुड बी एक्सपेंशनरी। अच्छा बट अच्छा, ये जस्ट आई हैव एक्सप्लेन व्हाट इज काउंटर साइक्लिक फिस्कल पॉलिसी। फिस्कल एक्टिव का मतलब है गिविंग ग्रेटर रोल टू काउंटर दिस काउंटर साइक्लिक पॉलिसीज और अटैचिंग लेस वेट टू कर्बिंग दैट। तो डेट तो बढ़ेगा अगर काउंटर फिस्कल पॉलिसी यूज होगी तो। अच्छा, अब इन डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज, नाउ द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग व्हिच आई टोल्ड यू ऑलरेडी कि इन डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज एंड डेवलपिंग कंट्री व्हाट इज द बेसिक डिफरेंस? कैन वी डू क्यूई? कोई किसी डेवलपिंग कंट्री ने नहीं किया, तो फिर हम ये कर सकते हैं एक्टिव फिस्कल एक्टिविज्म इज डिजायरेबल? नो, ऑब्वियसली इट विल लीड टू हाइपर इन्फ्लेशन। इन्फ्लेशन तो ऑलरेडी हाई है। अच्छा, ग्रोथ इज नॉट सो लो, ग्रोथ तो लो है ही नहीं, सो क्या लो ही नहीं है मतलब। तो व्हाट द पॉइंट? तो वी नीड नॉट रिक्वायर एनीथिंग which is unconventional, either fiscal or monetary policy. Clear? अच्छा, तो now paradigm shift in fiscal policy of the developed world. अब developed world में shift हुआ है since this global financial crisis, international fiscal policy has seen a paradigm shift. अच्छा, इसमें देखिए डेट लेवल बड़े हैं, greater activism, flow of deficits. अच्छा, they have used a word flow and stock. I have told you already, deficit और debt का difference आपको बताया था मैंने। Debt is measured on a point of time कि on this date total liability on government is this much rupees, and deficit is a borrowing is measured over a period of time. Fiscal deficit is measured over a period of time, तो flow है। तो they ऐसे arguing for greater activism in flows and minimizing concern about stability of stock, मतलब debt। तो मतलब ये कि fiscal deficit बढ़ाओ, अब fiscal deficit बढ़ाओगे तो उससे क्या होगा? स्टिमुलस मिलेगा, बट उससे debt stock भी तो बढ़ेगा। तो उन्होंने कहा वो कोई जरूरी नहीं है, मतलब सस्टेनेबल लेवल ऊपर होना चाहिए। मतलब जैसे हमने कहा इंडिया में डेट जो है कितना 67 है, तो इट शुड बी रिड्यूस टू, अभी जैसे इस कमेटी ने कितना कहा है एफआरबी रिव्यू को 60% करना चाहिए। अब हो सकता है दूसरी कमेटी कहती नहीं 60 नहीं 70 भी ठीक है, 67 से थोड़ा और बढ़ा सकते हैं, 80 कर सकते हैं। तो ये इस तरह से मतलब ये डेवलप कंट्रीज में थोड़ा अपवर्ड करा है सस्टेनेबल डेट का लेवल। उन्होंने कहा कि हायर हम सस्टेन कर सकते हैं, इट शुड बी। तो दिस इज द चेंज इन एट द ग्लोबल लेवल, इन दिस इज अ काइंड ऑफ फिस्कल एक्टिविज्म। अच्छा, डज इंडिया नीड अ फिस्कल एक्टिविज्म? तो ऑब्वियसली इंडिया सिचुएशन डिफर फ्रॉम दैट ऑफ एडवांस इकोनॉमीज। तो मैंने डिफरेंस आपको आई हैव टोल्ड यू ऑलरेडी। अच्छा, अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट इन दिस एक्सपेंशन इन स्पेंडिंग, अच्छा अब इन्होंने एक्सपीरियंस दिया, इंडिया ने 2 बार कोशिश की इस तरह के फिस्कल एक्टिविज्म की। एक बार 80s में आई टोल्ड यू कि गवर्नमेंट वाज प्रिंटिंग मनी फॉर डे टू डे एक्सपेंडिचर एंड यू नो इन्फ्लेशन वाज वेरी हाई एंड इट लीड टू इवन बीओपी क्राइसिस। अच्छा, दिस वाज वन ऑफ द रीजन। फिस्कल एक्टिविज्म मींस फिस्कल सिचुएशन डिटेरियोरेटेड, इन्फ्लेशन वाज वेरी हाई and it was one important reason which led to this BOP crisis, not the sole reason. तो एक तो ये 80s में जो expansion in spending करा, deficits and it led to what external crisis of 91 वाला, एक बार वो हुआ। दूसरी बार उन्होंने बताया कि जब when we were affected by global financial crisis in 2008 fiscal stimulus was given, और क्या repercussion हुआ we have discussed already, वो यहाँ पे लिखा हुआ है कि sharp stimulus को बढ़ा दिया। फिस्कल डेफिसिट टारगेट जो था 3% था, इट वाज इंक्रीज टू 6.8 कर दिया 3 से। तो फिस्कल स्टिमुलस का पार्ट था एंड स्टिमुलस तो दे दिया, बट डू यू थिंक विथड्रॉ वाज इजी? व्हिच वाज देन नॉट विथड्रॉन एडुकेटली ऑन टाइम, लीडिंग टू फाइनेंशियल करेंसी। उससे करेंसी क्राइसिस हुआ कि रुपी शार्पली डेप्रिशिएटेड एंड इवन लीड टू टसल बिटवीन आरबीआई एंड गवर्नमेंट, एज आई टोल्ड यू ऑलरेडी। गॉट द पॉइंट? तो दोनों उन्होंने बताया, तो हमने 80s में जो किया तो 91 में क्राइसिस हुआ, और जो ये यूपीए गवर्नमेंट ने जो बहुत ज्यादा डेट बढ़ाया, दैट वाज डिजायरेबल, बट विड्रॉ करना चाहिए था, बट वो विड्रॉ पॉलिटिकल इश्यूज आ गए, उसकी वजह से ये करेंसी क्राइसिस आया, जीडीपी ग्रोथ केम डाउन एंड लॉट ऑफ प्रॉब्लम्स, इवन कन्फ्रंटेशन विद आरबीआई। तो टू इंस्टेंसेस दे हैव सेड कि इट इज नॉट डिजायरेबल फॉर अस। अच्छा, इंडिया एंड वर्ल्ड स्टॉक। अब इंडिया का डेट टू जीडीपी रेशियो इज हायर देन मेनी अदर इमर्जिंग मार्केट्स। देखिए इंडिया में आई सेड कि इट इज मॉडरेटली हाई या हाई, 67% करीब जो है वो दैट इज ऑन हायर साइड, मतलब बहुत हाई नहीं है बट हायर साइड में। माइक, अच्छा, ग्रॉस फिस्कल डेफिसिट ऑफ सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट। देखिए ये डेफिसिट कम होता ही पहले ये मतलब ये क्राइसिस के टाइम में बढ़ाया था, फिर अब ये कम होता चला जा रहा है। जस्ट अ ट्रेंड एक्चुअली कि व्हाट इज ट्रेंड, कि स्पेशली देखिए इन द लास्ट 5-6 इयर्स लगातार ये कम होता चला जा रहा है। अच्छा, तो फिस्कल डेफिसिट का बस ट्रेंड है। अच्छा, 80s में उधर बढ़ गया था, देखिए 80s में काफी बढ़ गया था, उसकी वजह से क्राइसिस हुई थी। फिर यहाँ पे बढ़ा था, यहाँ पे प्रॉब्लम हुई, करेंसी क्राइसिस, यहाँ पे बीओपी क्राइसिस हुआ, करेंसी एंड जीडीपी ग्रोथ एटसेट्रा। तो दे हैव शोन के एक बार यहाँ पे क्राइसिस आया इंडिया में, एक बार वहां पे क्राइसिस आया था। तो इट मींस दैट कि फिस्कल एक्टर हैज नॉट बीन बेनिफिशियल, मतलब इट इज एक्चुअली रिस्की. अच्छा, फिस्कल कमिटमेंट. अच्छा, India shares with advanced countries the experience of not having defaulted on domestic debt either de jure de facto. मतलब ड्यूरिंग हाई, मतलब किसी भी तरह से हमने मतलब डिफॉल्ट नहीं किया है डेट पे. अच्छा, इन रिसेंट पास्ट इंडिया लेवल, अच्छा डेट वाज 83%, पहले 83 था, अब तो 67 हो गया है. अच्छा अच्छा, एंड 91 में भी वी टुक एक्सट्रीम मेजर्स टू comply with that, like we pledged gold, we accepted all conditions, and finally we accepted to change the entire policy. अच्छा, debt dynamics vulnerability in India is the country's primary deficit. अच्छा, उन्होंने कहा कि what is more important concern now should be primary deficit. Why? Because primary deficit shows that to what extent government is already having high debt. Should it be further increasing or not? So primary deficit should be rather one important variable, and it is not desirable to have primary deficit now. As I told you already, कि primary deficit zero भी सही है इस time. Zero भी सही नहीं, क्योंकि debt level already high है. It means that government is carrying forward the high debt. तो even zero is not desirable. तो उन्होंने कहा कि ये vulnerability जो शो करता है वो प्राइमरी डेफिसिट है, शॉर्टफॉल बिटवीन दिस एंड नॉट दिस. अच्छा अच्छा, सर्वे आल्सो फ्लैग्ड प्राइमरी डेफिसिट एज की वल्नरेबिलिटी टू इंडिया कंपेयर टू अदर इमर्जिंग इकोनॉमीज. तो प्राइमरी डेफिसिट एक्चुअली इंडिया में इस टाइम एक्सेप्टेबल नहीं है वैसे, क्योंकि डेट इज ऑलरेडी हाई, इंटरेस्ट पेमेंट्स आर ऑलरेडी वेरी हाई. अच्छा, रिडक्शन इन प्राइमरी डेफिसिट, फिस्कल डेफिसिट माइनस इंटरेस्ट पेमेंट होता है, इज रिफ्लेक्शन ऑफ गवर्नमेंट्स एफर्ट टू ब्रिज फिस्कल गैप ड्यूरिंग फाइनेंशियल ईयर. करंट फाइनेंशियल की सिचुएशन दिखाता है. तो वी हैव डिस्कस ऑलरेडी कि व्हाट इट शोज. तो फिस्कल इन्होंने कहा कि इट हैज रिड्यूस. अभी इस बार तो 0.1% का टारगेट है इस वाले बजट में, और नेक्स्ट ईयर नेगेटिव हो जाएगा व्हेन फिस्कल डेफिसिट विल बी रिड्यूस टू 3. तो नाउ इट इज रिड्यूस. अच्छा, added that India experience also highlighted the danger of relying on rapid growth rather than steadily gradual fiscal and primary balance adjustment to heavy listening on this. अच्छा, इसमें इन्होंने कहा कि डेंजर ऑफ रिलाइंग ऑन हाई ग्रोथ. देखिए, एक दो चीजें हैं. इफ वी वांट टू रिड्यूस फिस्कल डेफिसिट और एनी डेफिसिट एज अ परसेंटेज ऑफ जीडीपी, दो तरीके हैं. या तो गवर्नमेंट में रिड्यूस बोरिंग और गवर्नमेंट में एक्सेलरेट जीडीपी ग्रोथ. जीडीपी ग्रोथ एक्सेलरेट होगी तो भी परसेंटेज ऑफ जीडीपी कम हो जाएगा. तो उन्होंने कहा गवर्नमेंट जो ज्यादा रिलाय कर रही है अभी तक ग्रोथ पे कर रही है. अगर ग्रोथ नहीं हुई तो बोरो सेम करोगे आप, तो दैट विल इंक्रीज द रेशियोज. तो दिस इज अ काइंड ऑफ कॉशन कि लाइक फोकस शुड बी ऑन रिड्यूसिंग द डेट and deficit rather than relying on growth. अच्छा, तो summary economic survey focus on shifting the reducing debt GDP ratio, मतलब it should be reduced. जैसे it was also recommended by, as I told you, NK Singh committee, FRBO review committee, तो 67 से 60 करना चाहिए. अच्छा, even finance commission also suggested that कि debt GDP ratio should be reduced. अच्छा, survey fiscal active advancement not relevant for emerging market. ठीक है. In short, the fundamental validity of fiscal principle set on FRBA में, even the basic tenet of FRBA remain valid. तो अभी भी valid है and it should be followed. तो इन्होंने कहा कि FRBA is very important and this fiscal review committee, मतलब ये NK Singh committee should actually means suggest government should follow that course which is suggested by this committee for fiscal consolidation. तो बस focus is on के fiscal situation. अच्छा, here this chapter is on, हाँ just एक और कर लेते हैं, बहुत सिंपल है. इसमें देखिए कोई कंटेंट ज्यादा नहीं है. The problem is that you know कि in class we have already discussed in much detail, तो almost everything we have discussed. अब नया जो चीजें आएगा, चाहे वो कॉन्सेप्ट बेस हो, करंट बेस हो, we have discussed most of the things. तो ये चीज हम ऑलरेडी देख ही चुके हैं. तो बस ब्रॉड आइडिया I'll give you. यहाँ पे भी स्टेट का फाइनेंसेस में I have given you idea about state finances. तो वही इशू यहाँ पर है. बस बस ब्रीफ में मैं बताता हूँ आपको. तो I won't read rather, but just I will give you an idea कि देखिए क्या है fiscal rules, lessons from states. So here focus on states finances. अच्छा, तो India like several other countries embarked on this 2000 में वो FRBMA के लिए कहा. अच्छा, just like FRBMA was passed, similarly states were encouraged to pass fiscal responsibility law. अच्छा, who encouraged? क्यों पास किया उन्होंने? फाइनेंस कमीशन. और कौन सी स्कीम चलाई थी उन्होंने? देखिए, टू स्कीम्स आर वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. एक तो डेट रिलीफ स्कीम. 12th फाइनेंस कमीशन सेड कि डेट रिलीफ विल बी गिवन टू स्टेट्स हु विल पास FRBMA लाइक एक्ट, वेयर दे हैव टू रिड्यूस देयर फिस्कल डेफिसिट टू 3% ऑफ व्हाट? ग्रॉस स्टेट डोमेस्टिक प्रोडक्ट, GSDP. जैसे हम जीडीपी कहते हैं कंट्री का, तो ग्रॉस स्टेट डोमेस्टिक प्रोडक्ट GSDP, तो 3%, और RD शुड बी 0. तो उसे हम डेट रिलीफ देंगे. अच्छा, तो एक तो ये रीजन था. और दूसरा, फिस्कल डिसिप्लिन क्राइटेरिया वाज देयर इवन इन्होंने कहा वो होना चाहिए। अभी वैसे 14th फाइनेंस कमीशन हैज रिप्लेस दैट, नाउ फॉरेस्ट कवर है उसकी जगह पे, तो फिस्कल डिसिप्लिन शुड बी देयर। इन्होंने कहा कि कुछ इंसेंटिव होना चाहिए, तो उसकी वजह से बेसिकली दे हैव मेंशन्ड दिस थिंग कि दिस लेजिस्लेशन हैव पास्ड। अच्छा, आफ्टर दिस लेजिस्लेशन के फिस्कल सिचुएशन ऑफ स्टेट्स हैव इंप्रूव्ड और नॉट? Improve. But इन्होंने कहा कि this legislation is also one reason, but there are some other reasons as well. Some extraneous factors were there कि why fiscal situation of states improved. इस पिछले almost in the 10-15 years में बहुत situation improve हुई है, although recently 3-4 साल में कुछ deterioration हुआ है, we'll discuss. अच्छा, तो इन्होंने कहा कि external factor भी रहे, one is acceleration nominal GDP growth. अच्छा, अब जब nominal GDP growth will increase तो states revenue will increase or not? वो रेवेन्यू बढ़ेगी, एक तो रीजन वो भी रहा कि रेवेन्यूज हैव इंक्रीज्ड। सेकंड रीजन, ट्रांसफर फ्रॉम स्टेट ऑफ अबाउट 1% पॉइंट ऑफ एसडीपी। तो 13th फाइनेंस कमीशन लगातार बढ़ते जा रहा है शेयर, तो शेयर ऑफ स्टेट्स इज कंसिस्टेंटली इंक्रीजिंग, तो सेंट्रल ट्रांसफर में बढ़ गया, अब तो और ज्यादा बढ़ गया थोड़ा सा। अच्छा, रिड्यूस इंटरेस्ट पेमेंट। अच्छा, अभी तो जो बढ़ा है वो इफेक्टिवली स्टैट्यूटरी बढ़ा, नॉन स्टैट्यूटरी कम हो गया, मतलब सीएसएस वाला कम हो गया। पहले जो बढ़ाया 12th और 13th ने वो सिर्फ बढ़ाया था और सीएसएस कम नहीं हुआ, सीएसएस भी बढ़ा। गॉट द पॉइंट? अभी दिस अ डिफरेंस, लाइक इफेक्टिवली यू नो एवरी फाइनेंस कमीशन 12th एज वेल एज 13th इंक्रीज रिसोर्सेज टू स्टेट्स। अच्छा, कैन वी से 14th फाइनेंस कमीशन इंक्रीज सब्सटेंशियली? नो, वो एक तरफ से बढ़ा, दूसरा कम हो गया। पहले जो वो बढ़ा टैक्सेस में शेयर, तो दूसरा कम नहीं हुआ था, बल्कि वो बढ़ा, सीएसएस और बढ़ा था। अब सीएसएस कम करा गया, तो ओवरऑल रिसोर्सेज विद स्टेट्स आर इंक्रीजिंग कंसिस्टेंटली इन द लास्ट 15 इयर्स। मतलब पहले भी, और कोई अभी बहुत ड्रास्टिक चेंज नहीं आया है। व्हाट द पॉइंट? वो शेयर टैक्स बढ़ा है लेकिन सीएसएस कम हो गया, ग्रांट कम हो गई, तो वो कंपोजिशनल शिफ्ट है, एज आई टोल्ड यू इन 14th फाइनेंस कमीशन। अच्छा, उसके बाद फिर दूसरा क्या, ट्रांसफर फ्रॉम सेंटर बढ़ गया, लगातार बढ़ रहा है 15 इयर्स में। अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट, रिड्यूस इंटरेस्ट पेमेंट्स ऑफ अबाउट 0.9%। क्यों कम हुआ ये? डेट रिस्ट्रक्चरिंग पैकेज जो आई टोल्ड यू 12th फाइनेंस कमीशन पे डेट रिस्ट्रक्चरिंग स्कीम से, तो ऑलमोस्ट 1% पॉइंट उससे कम हो गया। अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट, सीएसएस पे गवर्नमेंट ने एक्सपेंडिचर काफी बढ़ाया इन द लास्ट फ्यू इयर्स, स्पेशली यूपीए गवर्नमेंट स्टार्टेड ह्यूज स्कीम्स एंड सिग्निफिकेंट एक्चुअली मनी वाज गिवन टू स्टेट्स, तो उसकी वजह से स्टेट की लायबिलिटी अपनी कम हो गई डेवलपमेंट प्रोग्राम्स की। तो दीज आर द रीजंस अपार्ट फ्रॉम एफआरबीएमए व्हिच इंप्रूव्ड स्टेट फाइनेंसेस। ओके, तो जस्ट ब्रॉड आइडिया इज सफिशिएंट है। अच्छा, तो अच्छा, ट्रेंड इन डेफिसिट्स। अब ये देखो, अब 2005 से क्या हुआ है डेफिसिट, बल्कि और उससे पहले से ही कम हो रहे हैं, तो डेफिसिट काफी कम हुए हैं। अच्छा, तो ये जैसे स्पेशली जो 12th फाइनेंस कमीशन का जो स्कीम से काफी बड़ा फर्क पड़ा। उसके बाद एफआरबीए में एक्ट हैज टू बी पास बाय वेरियस स्टेट्स, तो मोस्ट ऑफ द स्टेट्स एक्चुअली हैव पास्ड दीज एक्ट्स, मतलब ऑल सभी ने पास कर लिए। मतलब अर्लियर वेस्ट बंगाल हैव नॉट पास्ड, नाउ वेस्ट बंगाल हैज आल्सो पास्ड, तो नाउ डेफिसिट्स हैव इंक्रीज्ड सिग्निफिकेंटली। तो ये स्टेट 2005 से स्पेशली 4 से, मतलब ये अर्ली 2000 से ही हम कहेंगे कि फिस्कल कंसोलिडेशन वाज देयर। बट यहाँ पे क्यों बढ़ाया? Because of global financial crisis, stimulus. Achha, in this case, they need permission from center to deviate from that. Like under that agreement, there is a contract that they need permission from center to deviate from this. So center allowed them to increase deficits as a part of fiscal stimulus. But उसके बाद फिर थोड़ा सा कम हुआ है अभी। बट एक और प्रॉब्लम आ रही है अभी, थोड़ा सा बढ़ेगा रिसेंटली। वाई? बिकॉज ऑफ उदय की वजह से, क्योंकि जो एसईबी का जो था, स्टेट इलेक्ट्रिसिटी बोर्ड है, डिस्कॉम्स का जो बोर्ड था, लोन था, वो अपने ऊपर ले लिया। नहीं, तो बोरिंग तो बढ़ जाएगा ना, डेट तो हो जाएगा स्टेट का। तो इन दिस इकोनॉमिक सर्वे दे हैव गिवन विद उदय एंड विदाउट उदय। उदय के बिना कितना होता डेट, और डेट तो गवर्नमेंट के ऊपर आ गया ना, स्टेट तो काउंट तो डेट में होगा। अच्छा, तो अच्छा, इन्होंने रेवेन्यू डेफिसिट देखिए, ये पहले, ये जब एफआरबीए में पास होने से पहले इतना हुआ करता था, अब सरप्लस, क्योंकि रेवेन्यू डेफिसिट इज नॉट अलाउड, तो ये नेगेटिव हो गया एवरेज। कुछ स्टेट का थोड़ा बहुत है, बट ओवरऑल इट इज सरप्लस। तो राइट नाउ स्टेट्स आर हैविंग रेवेन्यू सरप्लस। अच्छा, ओवरऑल अभी शायद ओवरऑल स्लाइडली सरप्लस खत्म हुआ है, अभी थोड़ा सा हुआ है डेफिसिट रिसेंटली। अच्छा, फिस्कल डेफिसिट अर्लियर यूज्ड टू बी अबव 4, अब कितना हो गया? 2.5 के करीब हो गया एवरेज। मतलब ये लाइन एवरेज दिखा रही है। ये फिस्कल डेफिसिट पहले इतना होता था, अबव 4 होता था, अब 2.5 के करीब हो गया। अच्छा, तो ये जस्ट ब्रॉड ट्रेंड है, बट ओनली ट्रेंड इज सफिशिएंट, ओनली ब्रॉड आइडिया इज सफिशिएंट। अच्छा, समरी ऑफ फिस्कल रेस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी लेजिस्लेशन। in this actually you know कि fiscal deficit were established which same all overall deficit. अच्छा 3% ये था and they have to eliminate revenue deficit by 2009, बाद में बढ़ा के 10 कर दिया था. ठीक है, तो जस्ट जैसे FRBM में था वही कि FD 3 and RD 0 स्टेट के लिए भी. अच्छा 12th फाइनेंस कमीशन अलाउड स्टेट टू बोरो डायरेक्टली फ्रॉम मार्केट. उन्होंने कहा कि 12th फाइनेंस कमीशन ने कहा कि सेंटर शुड नॉट गिव लोन, rather they should be allowed to borrow from market on their own. Why? Because it will induce some market orientation. Like if they will borrow more, if a particular state will borrow more, what will happen? Interest will go up and it will be discouraged to borrow. तो एक थोड़ा सा डिसिप्लिन आएगा स्टेट्स में. अच्छा another is, अच्छा 12th फाइनेंस कमीशन ने कहा था डेट रिस्ट्रक्चर कर दो जो FRBM पास करे. अच्छा न्यू रिपोर्टिंग सिस्टम रिक्वायरमेंट. अच्छा स्टेट्स हैव टू अनाउंस व्हाट मीडियम फिस्कल मीडियम टर्म फिस्कल पॉलिसी रिपोर्ट. जैसे कि FRBM में वो होता है ना, मीडियम टर्म फिस्कल पॉलिसी स्टेटमेंट हैज टू बी अनाउंस्ड बाय सेंटर. इससे स्टेट का भी है, तो एक प्रोजेक्शन नेक्स्ट 3 to 4 इयर्स का प्रोजेक्शन देना होता है स्टेट्स को. अच्छा बट सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट एक्चुअली द फिस्कल टारगेट रिलैक्स टेम्परेली टू दिस इनटू दिस, क्योंकि स्टिमुलस का पार्ट तभी वो थोड़ा सा बढ़ गया था एज आई टोल्ड यू. तो अच्छा subsequently 14th finance commission recommended fiscal deficit limit should be relaxed by 0.5 percent point for a state which meet the following condition. जिसका revenue deficit zero है, ये debt कम है, debt to state gross state domestic product 25% है, interest payment less than 10% है. तो कुछ और रिलैक्स कर देना चाहिए, बट नॉट वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, जस्ट ब्रॉड आइडिया कि 14th फाइनेंस कमीशन ने कुछ और रिलैक्स कर देना चाहिए कुछ स्टेट्स का. अच्छा इम्पैक्ट ऑन डेफिसिट्स. अच्छा first thing note is that essentially achieve the fiscal deficit target right away years in advance. With first 2 years state on average lower fiscal deficit. अच्छा 3% while the primary deficit shifted to this plus. तो impact of deficit का मतलब recent some trend is they have given. अच्छा moreover this progress has proved to be reasonably durable. Comparing the 11 years before this, the 10 years after this fiscal deficit fell by almost half. तो significant reduction हुआ deficit में. अच्छा on an average 2.4% fiscal deficit हो गया था, revenue deficit 2.1 से माइनस में आ गया, सरप्लस आ गया था. तो they have given this trend कि मतलब उसका impact क्या हुआ उसका, which I told you. अच्छा बट इन्होंने कहा एक apprehension शो करा कि there may be some off balance sheet expenditure. ये एक तरह से लूप होल है. व्हाट इज ऑफ बैलेंस शीट? समथिंग एवरीथिंग इज नॉट शोड इन बजट, तो उसे हम ऑफ बजट एक्सपेंडिचर कह सकते हैं. तो ऑफ बजट का मतलब है कि वो बजट में नहीं आएगा. जैसे कि बोरोइंग तो आएगा, लेकिन अगर गवर्नमेंट ने गारंटी दे रखी है, कंटिजेंट लायबिलिटी दे रखी है कि अगर पीएसयू ने डिफॉल्ट करा, किसी और ने डिफॉल्ट करा, देन वी विल पे, तो लायबिलिटी बन सकती है, तो वो बजट में नहीं आएगी, तो ऑफ बजट आइटम हो गया. या पीएसयू में बोरो, उन्होंने कंपनी बना दी, खुद नहीं बोरो कर रहे, कंपनी बोरो करके कुछ स्पेंड कर रही है, तो वो बजट में नहीं आएगी, तो वो भी चीज दिखनी चाहिए. तो इन्होंने कहा कि आफ्टर दिस FRBM में मतलब दिस फिस्कल रिस्पांसिबिलिटी लेजिस्लेशन कि ऑफ बजट एक्सपेंडिचर हैज आल्सो एक्चुअली रिड्यूस्ड. तो ओवरऑल इसमें भी इंप्रूवमेंट आया है. तो एक्सप्लिसिट गारंटीज जैसे गवर्नमेंट जो दे रही है या बोरोइंग बाय स्टेट PSUs, ये ऑफ बजट आइटम्स है, तो इन्हें भी कंट्रोल करना चाहिए. अच्छा रिजल्ट आर एनकरेजिंग प्रियर टू दिस. अच्छा इससे पहले ज्यादा था, अब कम हुआ है, सिचुएशन इंप्रूव हुई है. अच्छा बजट प्रोसेस आफ्टर दिस शार्प ड्रॉप इन मैग्नीट्यूड ऑफ रेवेन्यू डेफिसिट हुआ है, उनकी फोरकास्टिंग इंप्रूव हुई है. बजट फोरकास्ट ऑफ देयर ओन टैक्स रेवेन्यू आर ऑन एवरेज दिस मच परसेंट लोअर, 0.6% लोअर है, जबकि पहले बहुत कम हुआ करते थे जो प्रोजेक्ट थे. तो मतलब देयर सेम इंप्रूवमेंट. अच्छा अब एक और साइन है कि नाउ देयर स्टेट्स आर इंक्रीजिंगली डिपेंडेंट ऑन सेंटर. तो सेंटर पे ज्यादा डिपेंड है, क्योंकि सेंटर ट्रांसफर जो है ग्रेजुअली बढ़ता जा रहा है. इन द लास्ट 15 इयर्स कंसिस्टेंटली इट हैज इंक्रीज. अच्छा लेसन्स फॉर फ्यूचर फिस्कल रूल्स. अच्छा अब इसमें फॉर फिस्कल चैलेंजेस माउंटिंग ऑन स्टेट्स फॉरवर्ड बिकॉज ऑफ दिस. अच्छा अभी क्या चैलेंज क्या है अभी, अब क्या प्रेशर्स है? पे कमीशन रिकमेंडेशंस, क्योंकि 7th पे कमीशन के बाद स्टेट्स को भी इंप्लीमेंट करना है, नॉट एग्जैक्टली इक्वल बट कुछ बढ़ाना पड़ेगा उन्हें भी. स्लोइंग ग्रोथ, दिस इज ऑल्सो मतलब ये कोई बहुत मेजर इशू नहीं है, बट ऑल्दो इट हैज टेकन ओवर नाउ. माउंटिंग पेमेंट्स फ्रॉम उदय बॉन्ड, एक ये बहुत बड़ा एक बर्डन है स्टेट्स के ऊपर, तो ये एक तरह से होगा. अच्छा अब इसमें व्हाट इज नीडेड? नीड फॉर इंसेंटिवाइजिंग गुड फिस्कल परफॉर्मेंस, नॉट एटलीस्ट बिकॉज स्टेट्स आर ग्रेजुअली रिपेइंग देयर ऑब्लिगेशंस टू सेंटर. अच्छा मतलब मेन है कि इंसेंटिवाइज करना चाहिए, जैसे कि फिस्कल डिसिप्लिन क्राइटेरिया था. सेकंड दे हैव सेड ग्रेटर मार्केट बेस्ड डिसिप्लिन ऑन स्टेट गवर्नमेंट फाइनेंसेस. तो मार्केट बेस्ड डिसिप्लिन होना चाहिए, जैसे कि दे आर बोरोइंग ऑन देयर ओन, तो इफ इंटरेस्ट रेट शुड गो अप देन दे शुड बी डिस्करेज टू बोरो। अच्छा, बट उन्होंने कहा सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट क्या है कि सेंटर शुड फिक्स एज एन एग्जांपल, सेंटर शुड रिड्यूस इट्स ओन डेफिसिट सो दैट इट कैन से कि जस्ट यू कैन फॉलो अस। तो मतलब सेंटर शुड इंप्रूव इट्स ओन फिजिकल सिचुएशन टू गिव एन एग्जांपल टू सर्व एज अ मॉडल फॉर स्टेट्स। तो ये उन्होंने सजेशन दिया है। मतलब वो प्रॉब्लम वही है कि ये जो इश्यूज है इन्हें रेक्टिफाई करने के लिए कि मतलब इंसेंटिव शुड बी देयर टू स्टेट्स टू इंप्रूव एज वेल एज सेंटर शुड इंप्रूव इट्स ओन फिजिकल सिचुएशन। अच्छा, तो बस एक ब्रॉड आइडिया इज सफिशिएंट, ठीक है, बस में कोई बहुत ज्यादा कंटेंट इज नॉट सो इंपॉर्टेंट, बस ब्रॉड आइडिया कि जो फिजिकल सिचुएशन ऑफ स्टेट इंप्रूव हुई है, उन्होंने पास किया है और उससे अब क्या करना चाहिए कि ये क्या प्रेशर है स्टेट गवर्नमेंट के फाइनेंसेस पे और व्हाट शुड बी डन। तो जस्ट ब्रॉड आइडिया इज सफिशिएंट। ओके, हाँ, रिसेंटली थोड़ा सा प्रेशर अभी भी और आ सकता है। रिसेंट देखो पास में तो वही है रहा है थोड़ा स्टिमुलस वाला, क्योंकि जो उनका जो बोरिंग लिमिट्स को रिलैक्स कर दिया था और रिलैक्स करने के बाद उन्हें थोड़ा सा स्टिमुलस मिल गया कि वो प्रोडक्शन बढ़ाए। अच्छा, इसके बाद नेक्स्ट एक और हम सोच रहे थे आज, चलिए फिर नेक्स्ट कल कर लेंगे। अच्छा, क्लोथ्स एंड शूज, ठीक है, नेक्स्ट क्लास में करेंगे। अच्छा, ये भी कम इंपॉर्टेंट है, वो वी वोंट एक्चुअली कंटिन्यू। तो बस यहाँ पे यही है कि व्हाई इट इज इंपॉर्टेंट एंड सम बॉटलनेक्स और कैसे बढ़ाना चाहिए, बहुत सिंपल है। ओके, तो वी विल कंटिन्यू, अच्छा नॉट टुमारो रादर, सो डे आफ्टर टुमारो। अच्छा, डे आफ्टर टुमारो वी विल फिनिश दिस इकोनॉमिक सर्वे, बिकॉज कुछ चैप्टर ही इंपॉर्टेंट है, उन पे हम फोकस ज्यादा करेंगे, जैसे यूबीआई है या कुछ रिव्यू डेवलपमेंट। नहीं, कल नहीं परसों करेंगे, कल संडे में नहीं है हमारी क्लास। अच्छा, तो हम 3 चीजें डिस्कस करेंगे। एक तो इकोनॉमिक सर्वे, अभी समरी 7 चैप्टर की अभी मिल जाएगी आपको, बाकी सम टॉपिक्स फ्रॉम इकोनॉमिक सर्वे, कुछ इंडिया बुक में भी ऑलरेडी हम देख चुके हैं, 1-2 इशू बस इंडिया बुक से देखना है। इसके अलावा कुछ सम इंपॉर्टेंट जो मेजर इशूज है मिसलिनियस, 5-7 मिसलिनियस इशूज जो मिस हो गए क्लास में, वो डिस्कस करेंगे। आई विल गिव यू नोट्स एंड विल डिस्कस, आई वोंट डिक्टेट। तो डे आफ्टर टुमारो विल कंटिन्यू फ्रॉम 8:30 to 1:30 करेंगे, बल्कि 8:30 to 1:30, ठीक है। हाँ, क्योंकि ये इनिशियली थोड़ा बड़ा था। अच्छा, काफी चीजें देखी हमने, क्योंकि क्लास में बहुत ज्यादा डीप में हमने करा है, तो चीजें अब कहां से आएंगी। देखिए, बात ये कि जो भी इकोनॉमिक सर्वे अब हमने जब करा था, तो इकोनॉमिक सर्वे तो नहीं आया था तब तक, लेकिन आप देखोगे तो चीजें तो वही है ना, जो इकोनॉमिक के इश्यूज है तो वो तो वही है, बेसिक कॉन्सेप्ट वही है और करंट वही है। व्हाट द पॉइंट। तो अब हम डे आफ्टर टुमारो वी विल मीट डे आफ्टर टुमारो, एंड अभी इसमें 3 चीज करेंगे। जो रिमेनिंग इकोनॉमिक सर्वे के जो चैप्टर्स है उसमें फोकस करेंगे। सेकंड, इंडिया बुक में 2-3 टॉपिक्स ही है बस, वो देखेंगे, और 5-6 जो न्यू इंपॉर्टेंट मेजर्स है बस वो